I ranked literally every single Pokemon in the entire franchise. And I'm not just talking about ranking them competitively or ranking them based on how much I like them or how cute I think they are. I took every aspect of every Pokemon into consideration to tell you exactly which one is the 737th best one. If you're wondering, it's Totodile. Already people are mad, but okay, let's talk about how I actually did this, okay? Now, normally on this channel, I only talk about competitive Pokemon, so you might think that I would be ranking these Pokemon competitively. But ranking every single Pokemon competitively doesn't make any sense because, like, a lot of them are pre-evolutions and aren't meant to be used in their, base forms. So what I have done is I've gone through and I've given every single Pokemon a score of 1 to 10 in 3 different categories. How viable they are, aka how good they are competitively, how iconic they are, and how much I like their design. Now, obviously, a lot of my rankings are subjective, but I have 2 things to say about that. Number 1, I think the only way to objectively rank every Pokemon is by Pokédex number, which would not make a very interesting video. And number 2, I have pretty bad taste. I mean, I don't think my taste is bad, but according to YouTube comments, it doesn't seem to be very popular. And so in order to make this video at least a little bit more interesting, what I've done is I've asked 2 of my friends who I think have great taste to also go through and rank every Pokemon in all of these categories with me. Huge thanks to Scarlet and ZANE for going through this with me and making this list a lot less terrible than if I were to have done it alone. To get the final list, we've gone through and we've averaged all 3 of our scores, so the final list is not only, weighted with my bad preferences, but instead should be a little bit more representative of the fan base as a whole. Also, because there are so many Pokemon, to keep myself from going crazy, my friend ZANE is hanging out in the call with me while I record to make sure I don't just say the same things over and over again, and also, yeah, just like keep me on track. At some point, you may hear him interject. So without further ado, let's start from the bottom and work our way up. Coming in at number 1,133 on my list is Rellor. Rellor is the worst Pokemon. Rellor is ugly. Rellor is bad. Rellor is not very memorable except for the fact that he is super ugly, but I think he's the worst Pokemon of all time because in order to truly appreciate how ugly he is, you have to actually see him, and at least in Scarlet and Violet, he is so small that seeing him is really not very easy. Now, one thing you might notice is that I said that Rellor was ranked 1,133, and as of the time I'm recording this, there's only 1,025 Pokemon, and so you can see that there's like an extra 100 Pokemon in there. And that's because for some Pokemon with multiple forms, we've ranked those too, because ranking 1,025 clearly wasn't enough, okay? Coming in at number 1,132 is Barbaracle. Look, there's an elephant in the room here, right? Which is that Barbaracle actually has some competitive viability. I'm gonna guess that most of you wouldn't expect to see a fully evolved Pokemon with like decent stats to be this low on the list. And in fact, both Scarlet and ZANE gave Barbaracle a much more generous ranking than me. But here's the thing. This is my channel and I hate Barbaracle. It's turbo ugly, the typing is bad, and even though it got a Mega Evolution, it still doesn't redeem it from being one of the worst Pokemon of all time. If I was the only one making this list, Barbaracle would have been lower and Barbaracle was the lowest Pokemon on my list. But this is a democracy, and so Barbaracle is saved from being the worst Pokemon of all time and instead lands at number 2. But next time I do this Barbaracle, I'm coming back for you, okay? You should not feel safe just yet. Number 1,131 is Lediba. It is tough to see a Pokemon that is, early generation on here, but Lediba is just, I mean, come on, dude. Evolution is terrible, regular form is terrible, really difficult to use, awful typing, bad move pool. Just feels like a Pokemon that was designed so that you could give it to a preschooler and not have to worry about it getting hurt because Lediba can't do anything. I also think that part of the reason why the design is even partially memorable is because it was so early on. It is just a big ladybug, right? So I don't know. I don't think that Lediba is a very good Pokemon. It's pretty bad. Okay, it is very rapidly becoming apparent to me that we are going to run into a problem pronto, because if I spend that long talking about every single one of the remaining 1,130 Pokemon, this video is never going to end and my editor will cry themselves to sleep for months. So I can't talk about each Pokemon individually, but I still want to go through every single one. Now, as we were working on this video and we were looking through the list, what we noticed was something a little bit interesting, which is that a lot of Pokemon tended to naturally fall into groups around similar Pokemon to them. So for example, there are sections of this list which are mostly Pokemon that were really good competitively, but don't have, very good designs, or vice versa, great designs that are really bad, generally. Obviously, since this list is comprised of literally every Pokemon, there's going to be exceptions to this rule, but I was really personally surprised just by how natural these categories were appearing. And so to make this video actually interesting and easy to digest, and not just me reading you the names of 1,130 remaining Pokemon, I've gone through and I've given names to each of the naturally occurring categories. And we can start with the first one here, which is the category of Pokemon who are not very good competitively, who are not super memorable and whose designs I really don't like. So it's time to introduce you to the first category of Pokemon on our list, which I like to call True Fodder. True Fodder is an interesting category because it's a lot of Pokemon that are not fully evolved and are really just here in the early routes to make sure that your Pokemon is something easy to knock out to give you some free experience. And if the thing that makes you memorable is that you are, easy food to like level up your starter Pokemon, not a good look. They're not very memorable or good, and by the time a lot of them show up, it's kind of like, what are you doing here? 1130, Binacle, barely better than Barbaracle. 1129, Ledian, barely better than Lediba. 1128 is Gossifleur. 1127 is Clink. 1126 is Mothim. Now, Mothim is the worst moth, and that's saying something because there are a lot of moth type Pokemon. There's a lot of moth Pokemon, okay? Mothim is one of the worst competitively, and I also think that it's like kind of held back by the fact that it evolves from all the Burmies when like Burmies are really cool Pokemon conceptually. Mothim is bad. 1125, Timepole. Timple? Timepole. 1124, Diglett, Alola form. Not iconic. 1123, Cherubi. I like Cherubi, but it's not very good. 1122, Smoochum. No kissy. 1121, Gumshoes. No comment. 1120, Geodude, Alola form. 1119, Squovit. 1118, Pineco. 1117, Patrat. 1116, Tranquil. This Pokemon has improved a bit from my worst 10 Pokemon. I think it was on that one. 1115 is Capsicid. 1114 is Sunkern. 1113 is Spinarak. 1112 and 1111 are two of the Burmy forms. 12 is Plant and 11 is Sandy. And they are followed by those two Wormadam evolutions, Plant and Sandy. I know that I just said that Burmy was cool and Wormadam is cool, and they are cool conceptually, but they're not cool in practice because they suck, okay? If they were even like a little bit of a reason to use these Pokemon, they would have been a lot higher on the list, but there's not because they're awful. However, you might notice that I only listed two of the Burmies and two of the Wormadams, and that's because the Trash Cloak, which you would think is the worst based on the name, is actually a lot higher up on the list, okay? We went through every Pokemon, including the forms. This is it. It's the last day to get your Bug Month merch, baby. We got shirts, we got bags, we got, oh my God, look at the hoodie. Oh my God, look at it, okay? 24 hours from when this video goes live, it's going away forever. This is your last chance, I mean it this time. 24 hours from when this video goes up. If you're watching it in the future, no dice. Go to wolfeystore.com. 1 day left, one last day. Bug Month. Number 1108 is Bunnelby. 1107 is Shroodle. 1106 is Carnivine. Carnivine is interesting because it doesn't really fit the category of true fodder overall, I would say. In fact, I think Carnivine has a great design. I really like the design of Carnivine, so it's a bit weird to have it here in like the worst category on the list. Now, the thing about these categories is that while they are like loosely applicable, they don't apply to every Pokemon, and Carnivine here is an exception. However, Carnivine falls into a subcategory of true fodder, which is mad because bad. Carnivine is one of the single worst Pokemon competitively ever made, and it makes me especially mad because, like, it's so cool. I love the way it looks, honestly. However, I actually end up hating the way it looks because it feels like a false promise. Like, if you look that cool, you should be at least like usable in some context, but you're not. You're Carnivine, you're garbage. Anyway, Carnivine's not actually true fodder, but it is one of the worst Pokemon, and that's because I'm really angry because it's so terrible. 1105 is Nimble. 1104 is Wugtrio. 1103 is Sandshrew Alolan form. 1102 is Seedot. 1101 is Nincada. Number 1100 is another example of mad because bad, which is Heatmore. Heatmore, cool design. I like it a lot personally. I think the kind of like symbolism that it eats ants and it, eats Durant, who's a bug and steel type, 4 times weak to fire. Super cool. However, this Pokemon is so unbelievably garbage that it falls into the mad because bad category and is one of the worst Pokemon ever. 1099 is Bounsweet. 1098 is Tyrogue. This one hurt a little bit. I actually like Tyrogue, but not enough. 1097 is Qfant. I think Qfant is cute, but it's not safe from me. 1096 is Mastiff. Mastiff. 1095 is Bergmite. He loses points because he's too pointy, meaning you cannot serve food off of him like his evolution. 1094 is Morlul. There should be less lol. 1093 is Grubbin. He's saved from being worse because he's a little bit cute. 1092 is Chingling. They took Chimecho and they made it worse. 1091 is Carablast. Fun fact, I did one of those like quizzes where you have to remember every Pokemon from memory, and I couldn't remember his name, so he loses points. 1090 is Spritzee. Very forgettable. 1089, Fomantis. 1088 is a Gen 1 Pokemon, Spearow. So Spearow is in fact our first Gen 1 Pokemon, and I think Gen 1 Pokemon tend to get a bit of a boost in this list because we have a category about how iconic the Pokemon are, and in general the Gen 1 Pokemon are the most iconic. Spearow is definitely a little bit iconic, especially because of that anime episode where it's trying to kill Pikachu. Spearow really meets all our requirements to being in this category. It is not very good. It's an earlier out Pokemon. It evolves early and then you kind of forget about it. I don't like Spearow very much, okay? 1087 is Wiglet. Wiglet is one of the rare cases where it is a pre-evolution that is higher than its evolution. Wugtrio makes me extremely mad because Dugtrio is terrible. It's an awful Pokemon to use, and you would think that if they redesigned it and gave it, I guess, a better typing, like water's kind of better than ground, right? They would fix it, right? They would give it something to do. They even gave it a signature move, but despite this, it's terrible. It's awful. Wugtrio is one of the worst competitive Pokemon ever, and Wiglet, it's not that much better, okay, but it is cuter and it is funnier. I don't think Wugtrio is really that funny. I think Wiglet is pretty funny. 1086 is Trumbeak. I also have this Pokemon pretty low on my worst Pokemon of all time video, but the others liked it more. 1085 is Remoraid. I think people are gonna be upset about Remoraid. I think people like Remoraid, but too bad, I don't. 1084 is Alama. Now Alama, it's tough. It's not really true fodder, but it's also not really mad cause bad. I guess it's a little bit mad cause bad. I think the thing about Alama is that it's just not very memorable in my opinion, and I think I would like it more if it was a Love Disc evolution, but the fact that it isn't is kind of just confusing. It's not a very good Pokemon. I don't think it's a very memorable Pokemon. There's a lot of fish, there's a lot of water types, you know what I mean? I don't think that many people are like, oh yeah, Alama, that's one of the first water types I would name if I had to name all the water types. I know that somebody likes Alama. I don't like it, okay? I don't think it's very good. 1083 is Elgyem. The one thing I do like about Elgyem is that the name is LGM, which stands for Little Green Man, and it's an alien, so I think that's kind of cute. 1082 is Choodle. I don't like the Pokemon, but I do like the name, Choodle. It's fun, I like it. 1081 is Arrokuda. Don't like Arrokuda. 1080 is Watchog. Now, Watchog is a fully evolved Pokemon, but it's just so ugly, and it's also not very good. Watchog. 1079 is Mantike. People are gonna be upset about this one, I already know. Mantike is cute. It is cute, okay? 1078 is Grumpig. Grumpig is another one I would probably put in mad cause bad because Spoink is so cute and Grumpig is so ugly. And it's okay to be ugly if you're also good, but you're not good if you're Grumpig, okay? 1077 and 1076 are two more Generation 1 Pokemon. It's Nidoran male and Nidoran female. Now, I like the evolutions of these Pokemon, but I think the base form, at least as a kid, was pretty confusing. Okay, to be honest, maybe I was just a dumb 8-year-old, but I don't think I really fully understood gender. To be honest, I think I couldn't tell the difference between the two, and I couldn't tell the difference between the gender signs either, so I was always confused when I was a stupid kid. Anyway, I do think that Nidoking and Nidoqueen are really cool Pokemon and super memorable, but I think the fact that the gender forms evolving different and also needing a Moonstone to eventually evolve, I don't know, I don't like the base forms. I guess technically while they do fit the mold for, true fodder, I guess technically they're in a different subcategory, which is that Wolf was a stupid kid, okay? I didn't say this list was objective, okay? Keep that in mind. 1075 is Surskit. I like that clip from the anime where it goes, 1074 is Finneon. 1073 is Dwebble. That's another one that's fun to say. I do like the name Dwebble. And lastly, closing out true fodder at 1072 is Yungoos. Another case of a pre-evolution being ranked higher than the evolution. In this case, it is entirely because of the design. Now that we're done with true fodder, it's time for our next category. And this one's a bit interesting because I think that this is one of the categories where there isn't really one overarching theme, but there are kind of two. The first I've named Arceus Messed Up. These are Pokemon that are often middle stages, and they're generally very ugly, super ugly. These are also first stages that don't eventually turn into Pokemon that are good. The other main chunk of this category are Pokemon that maybe should have belonged in true fodder if you just looked at their stats, but are really good design wise, Pokemon that we either think are iconic or have pretty good designs across the board, and that saves them from being in the worst category and moves them up exactly one. Coming in at number 1071 is Clang. I didn't talk too much about Clink, but I think Clink, Clang, and Klinklang are a funny line, but they're overall disappointing. This is one of the Pokemon that people who are, Gen 1ers point to and say, wow, Pokemon's so bad now. This Pokemon is just gears. And while I don't agree, I do kind of see where they're coming from. Clang is not a generally beloved Pokemon, though I personally consider myself to be a member of the Clang gang. 1070 is our first starter Pokemon in Quilladin. Putting a starter Pokemon this low on the list, you might think that I feel the need to explain myself or defend myself, but I mean, it's Quilladin, okay? I don't think I need to justify this to anybody. 1069 is Blipbug. I love Blipbug. This falls into the good first stages category of Pokemon that, Blipbug is definitely true fodder, but he's so crunchy. You know what I mean? Surely he doesn't belong in true fodder. He's so crunchy. If I could eat any one Pokemon, I would surely eat Blipbug. 1068 is Clobopus. I love octopuses, so I'm especially disappointed by this one. 1067 is Metatite. 1066 is Stunky. I think people really like Stunky, and he definitely has a pretty good design. That's why he's not in the true fodder category, but he's also not very good. 1065 is Basculin Red/Blue Stripe. 1064 is a fully evolved Pokemon, Shiinotic. I wish Shiinotic was better. I wish that they gave us like an alternate Amoonguss. Instead, they just gave us a worse Amoonguss. I guess that is an alternate. 1063 is Graveler's Alolan form. I wish the Alolan Golem line was a lot better, and it's not. 1062 is Slugma. I'm not gonna make the joke. I'm not gonna make the joke, okay? It's Slugma. No more comment. Let's move on. 1061 is Nuzleaf. Nuzleaf gets a boost in part because it contributes to the name Nuzlocke. So good job, Nuzleaf. That adds some iconicity to you. 1060 is Masquerain. I actually like Masquerain, but it's not very good, and I don't know how memorable it is. 1059 is Electric. Now, I like Electric a lot, and the reason why it's not, ranked higher in the list is that while I think the design is really, really good, I like the design a lot, it's a really bad Pokemon. However, it is a good first stage, so it's saved from true fodder. 1058 is Snorunt. 1057 is Kricketot. I know you're mad about it. You don't need to write a comment. I'll just imagine it in my head and we'll save both of us time, okay? 1056, here's the reveal. It's Burmy Trash Cloak. Look at how many extra points it got. Design-wise, I like the pink color of this Burmy more. And also, by being a steel type, it's just like a lot better because bug and steel is actually a pretty good type combination. And that's also the reason why Wormadam Trash Cloak is number 1055. So these two Pokemon actually get a pretty sizable jump over the other cloaks. 1054 is Glameow. 1053 is Maractus. The next chunk of Pokemon are pretty much all in the good first stages category, with 1052 being Ducklet, 1051 being Tynamo, 1050 being Cubchoo, 1049 being Skiddo. I forgot that I liked Skiddo. It's actually pretty cute. And 1048 being Pancham. I actually dislike Pancham a little bit more than I did before because although it's super cute, it reminds me of Baby Urshifu. I'm forgetting the name now. Wait, what's Baby Urshifu called? Cubfu. Is that Cubfu? It's confusing because I just said Cubchoo and now it's Cubfu. But yeah, okay, I just like it because it reminds me of Cubfu, which reminds me of Urshifu. But it's still, I didn't factor that into the ranking, okay? 1047 is Crabrawler. Now, Crabrawler pisses me off, okay? Because do you all know the Crabrawler lore? Back in Generation 6 at the World Championships, the last World Championships before Sun and Moon came out, they were like, we've got a trailer for you. We're gonna show you this really cool trailer revealing a new Pokemon. And they revealed Crabrawler, okay? And in the trailer, they had Crabrawler facing off against like a lot of the top Pokemon that were dominating competitive play, like Cresselia and Mega Kangaskhan. And they would show, without the health bars, they would show Crabrawler using a move, and then Cresselia would faint, and it was knocking out all these meta Pokemon. And all of us thought, wow, Crabrawler is gonna be so good. We're so excited. And then it ended up being one of the worst Pokemon of all time, and it's ugly. So anyway, I'm pissed about Crabrawler.
I really love crab.
Crabrawler should have been named Crababy, so it's low on the list. Moving on. Number 1046 is Marini. I think Marini's kind of cute. 1045 is Grapploct. Grapploct makes me upset because, like I said, I love octopus Pokemon. I think the design is pretty cool here. It's not even a water type. Like, this is a case where Arceus messed up makes a lot of sense because why was it not fighting in water? And how come it didn't have a signature move that could hit 3 times? And how come it can't hit through Protect? 1044 is Tadbulb. I wonder what noise Tadbulb makes when you turn it on. I want to know. 1043 is Ariados. My girlfriend recently discovered Ariados and she really likes it, so maybe I should have bumped it up, but no favoritism here. 1042 is Snubbull. I think Snubble's pretty cute, even though it's like ugly cute. You know what I mean? 1041 is Granbull, actually right above Snubbull. Good job, Granbull. You're better, just barely. 1040 is Gulpin. Gulp. No comment. 1039 is Barboach, another case where it's a Pokemon that probably should have been true fodder, but the design is good, so it ends up here. 138 is Silly Cobra. All of you are my Silly Cobras. You should subscribe. I have to do a sub plug at some point. I'll just do it now. You should subscribe. If you don't subscribe, you're not my Silly Cobra. 137 is Oinkologne Female, and that closes out this category. Oinkologne Female. Oinkologne Male, who knows where it goes. Our next category is called Badge Collectors. These are the Pokemon that you catch early on in the game and you use because, you ran into a cave and you got a rock type Pokemon. You need to beat the Flannery gym coming up, the fire type gym coming up, but they're not Pokemon that you would really choose in a vacuum, right? You choose them because they're there and because their typing is nice, or just because you need to put some Pokemon in your team, right? Some of the Pokemon in this category are like true fodder Pokemon, but they're either iconic enough or cute enough or like at least somewhat good enough. I don't know if any of them are actually good enough, to be honest, but like maybe one of them is, right? Where it's worth having them on your team just to get the next badge. Starting off the category, I think is a great example of this because coming in at number 1036 is a Weedle. Weedle's very memorable. It's very iconic. People love Weedle. I like Weedle, right? It's true fodder, but it's the true fodder you want to have. 1035 is Raticate. I mean, Raticate is here to get gym badges in the early game, right? It evolves early. It like, I don't think it's very cute, but like, you know what I mean? You put it on your team and you get there, you get the Lieutenant Surge badge and then you bench it. 1034 is Fearow, so actually doing a bit better than Spearow in part because you can actually use it for a couple of badges. That's just about it. 1033 is Dugtrio's Alolan form. A lot of the Diglett and Dugtrio line has ended up on this, lower part of the list. I think in part because like there's just a couple, like there's 2 regional variants of Dugtrio. Alolan Dugtrio ranks higher than its pre-evolutions or of Wugtrio, mostly because as a steel type, it's a little bit more viable. And because like, I don't think Alolan Diglett is I really don't like Alolan Diglett because like, it's so hard to tell that it's different than regular Diglett. But Alolan Dugtrio's flowing locks, I think are super funny. So Alolan Dugtrio is a badge collector. You can catch it in early game. You're like, wow, that's so funny. And then you use it until you realize this might be the worst Pokemon ever made. 1032 is Mankey. I like Mankey, but it's a badge collector. 1031 is Hypno. I don't like Hypno. 1030 is Hoot Hoot, another Pokemon whose name is fun to say. 1029 and 1028 are Silcoon and Cascoon. I do think that their gimmick is interesting, but also it is quite frustrating as a kid to not know which one you're gonna get, and you catch 10 Wurmple because you want to get a Dustox, and instead you just keep getting Beautifly. Whatever. 1027 is Whismur. 1026 is Nosepass. I think that Nosepass is kind of like, that's like the Pokemon I was thinking of when I made this category, because that's the Pokemon you catch to beat Flannery. 1025 is Aaron. Now, Aaron is actually funny and ranks, decently high up on this list because it did have some competitive viability when you could use the level 1 strategy to like use the ability Sturdy to make sure you always live with 1 HP, use the item Shell Bell to heal you, and use the move Endeavor to drop your opponent to 1 HP as well, which would then activate Shell Bell healing you. We'll play a clip so this makes sense. I don't think it makes much sense with my explanation. I like Aaron a lot. I think it's really funny, but nowadays you can't use it anymore because they made it so that all Pokemon are automatically set to level 50, so you can't do level 1 cheese anymore. 1024 is Love Disc. Great for heart scales, not very good for anything else. 1023 is Skorupi. 1022 is Pidove. I think maybe Pidove should have been lower, but it is a badge collector. 1021 is Palpitoad. I think Palpitoad is real ugly, to be honest. 1020 is Shelmet. And at 1019, we have our first ever base starter Pokemon, Chespin. So according to my list, Chespin is the worst starter Pokemon you can choose out of the gate. And then it evolves into what's it called? Frankie? What's the middle name called? Chespin evolves into Quilladin, which is the worst starter overall. So Chespin line is struggling a little bit. 1018 is Helioptile. I think Helioptile is kind of cute. 1017 is Steenie. Is this the one that looks like it's wearing a diaper? I think it is. I don't like Steenie very much. 1016 is Drizzile. So Drizzile is another starter Pokemon on our list. Drizzile, like I think the aesthetic is funny, right? He looks like an emo, moody teenager, but I just don't like that aesthetic overall. Like I think they did a great job in designing it to look like what it's supposed to look like, but I just don't like the way that it looks. 1015 is Roly-Coly, another Pokemon with a great name to say. 1014 is Milcery. I don't like saying Milcery. Milcery? That's worse, Milcery. 1012 is Synflora. You knew Synflora is going to be towards the lower half of the list. I actually think this is pretty generous for Synflora. 1011 is Stantler, who gets a bit of a viability buff because it can now hold the Eviolite item because Weirdeer exists. 1010 is Carkol. I love the Colossal line, so it feels bad to put them this low, but they're not very good. They're here to get badges. 1009 is Oinkologne Male, the male version beating out the female version by quite a few points here. This isn't because I'm a misogynist, okay? This is because Oinkologne Male has better stats, okay? 1008 is Kakuna. I think that Kakuna isn't technically a badge collector because it can't do anything. Unless you've evolved it, then it gets Poison Sting. But if you just catch one and it only gets Hardened, like you're kind of out of luck. But I mean, it's Kakuna, right? It belongs in here. 1007 is Raticate Alolan form. And you might notice we haven't seen Rattata yet. I wonder where Rattata Alolan form is. Ooh, could be anywhere. 1006 is Sandshrew. Now, Sandshrew is a Pokemon that is interesting because like it is very iconic and very memorable. I like Sandshrew's design, and I think that it's a Pokemon that if I were playing through Gen 1, I would consider catching and using for a little bit. But overall, I think it's pretty disappointing. Next up is Nidorina and Nidorino, and 1006 and 1005. These Pokemon suffer from my disdain for the base form of Nidoran male and Nidoran female. And again, I do like Nidoking and Nidoqueen, but I just feel like Nidorina and Nidorino are not that exciting compared to their final evolutions. 1003, we finally have regular form Geodude. Regular form Geodude, folks. 1002 is Grimer, and 1001 is Krabby, so we have a bit of a string of Gen 1 Pokemon here. And at number 1000 overall on my list, we have Chinchou. Chinchou is cute, but not very good. It's a Pokemon that really fits the theme of I'm gonna catch this Pokemon so I can, use it against certain gym leaders. It is really good in Nuzlocke because you can get both Volt Absorb and Water Absorb, so that's cool. But yeah, I mean, I'm not factoring in, Omega, Super, Ultra, Turbo, Ruby, ROM hack mode when I'm making this list, okay? 999 is Noctu. 998 is Macargo. Macargo being a fully evolved Pokemon, but not a very good one. 997 is Octillery. I like Octillery. I think that we could have put Octillery a little bit higher, but like it doesn't have any competitive results. I think they're gonna give Octillery a Mega at some point. That's my guess. 996 is Donphan. I like Donphan, but I think I like it more because I like both Iron Treads and Great Tusk, and neither of those Pokemon are Donphan. 995 is Slackoth. 994 is Ninjask, who gets a bit of a boost because like it is somewhat viable, it's just not very good. And rounding out our category of badge collectors, we have 993 Baltoy. Our next category is called Trailer Filler. These are the Pokemon that they put in the trailers when they're selling a new game to convince you that there are actually enough Pokemon in there, and then you never think about them again. Starting off this list is one of my favorite Pokemon, Klinklang. I've already talked about Klang. I mean, Klinklang is just the evolution. I don't really have that much more to say about it. I mean, it's just disappointing. I really like that leaked graphic, that fake graphic of Mega Klinklang though. Can we show that on screen? I think that one's really funny. If they had made that, I would have given Klinklang like plus 100 ranks. 991 is Spidops, one of the most disappointing Pokemon from Scarlet and Violet, and probably the worst one competitively. 990 is Woobat. I love Woobat, but it is trailer filler. 989 is Scatterbug. Scatterbug is kind of both true fodder and a badge collector Pokemon, so it could have been in either prior category, but the thing is that it's actually pretty memorable, I think, and pretty cute, so it gets extra bonus points here, bumping it up. 988 is Tyrant. I'm gonna guess that Tyrant is pretty forgettable for a lot of people. Do people like know Tyrant? I don't know. I feel like people don't know Tyrant. 987 is Sandygast. This is another Pokemon that gets bonus points because I really like the design, despite the fact that it, like stat-wise and kind of Iconicity-wise, probably should be lower. 986 is Minior. Now, Minior gets a little bit saved here because, like, while Minior is a really bad Pokemon, I do like the signature gimmick with the different colored cores. I think that's really cool, but it is really terrible. So it ends up in trailer fodder, even though, like, it's probably bad enough that it should have been lower on the list. But yeah, I just think that, like, the concept is really cool, even though I think the execution of the concept needed some work. 985 is Greedent. Greedent I think is extra funny because I played him in Pokemon Unite, which like I didn't factor into this like ranking system, but it does affect my personal feelings. Greedent is funny I think because normally a lot of the early route Pokemon, like they're supposed to be somewhat cute, right? So you will like catch them and like they're really memorable. And Greedent is just so ugly. Like he's so ugly, but he is really funny. Also, he's really bad. Like they made him super slow for no reason. I wish he was like at least a little bit faster. The squirrels that I know in real life are really fast. Like they can like disappear in an instant. So I don't know. Maybe Japanese squirrels are just different. I don't know. 984 is Litleo. 983 is Rookidee. Rookidee's, never mind. 982 is Dottler. I think people don't know Dottler either. I'm gonna guess which Pokemon I think people don't know. 981 is Quaxwell, one of the stupidest names. Surely people agree with me on that. Surely that's not a hot take. Quaxwell. It's like Maxwell, but Quax. Quaxwell's interesting because it does indicate something about this list, which is that the middle starters tend to be on the whole a little bit like underperforming. So far, we've seen 3 middle starters, 1 first stage, and then no final stages yet. And I think it makes sense. Like I think from a design perspective, you actually would like the middle stage to be the weakest of the 3 because like you start with one and you end with another. So the middle stage is kind of just transitioning in a way. That being said, the fact that Quaxwell places higher than Chespin makes me feel kind of bad for Chespin. 980 is Frigibax. 979 is Varoom. Varoom is really funny because they gave it a hidden ability that doesn't make any sense. Okay, it makes a lot of sense. They gave it slow start and it's a car. So it's very funny that they gave it slow start, but also makes me feel so bad for Regigigas because now slow start isn't even his signature ability anymore. And Varoom doesn't even have to run it. Like it has better abilities. You have to go out of your way to get a slow start Varoom, whereas Regigigas like can't get rid of slow start no matter what it does. I don't know. I feel bad for Regigigas. 978 is Houndour. 977 is Impidimp. My friend Aaron calls this Impy Dimpy, which I think is funny. 976 is Spoink. 975 is Timber, which is also a word. And also a Pitbull song, I'm pretty sure. Don't play it, we'll get copyrighted. 974 is Throw. I think Throw's name is kind of dumb. 973 is interesting.
It's also a word. You just said Timber's a word and you're not gonna say Throw's a word?
You scared me, don't yell at me. 973 is Bruxish. Now, Bruxish I think is interesting because many people expected Bruxish to probably be the worst Pokemon of all time, but here's the thing, okay? Bruxish is super turbo ultra omega ugly, and that is true, but I think because it's so ugly, it actually is somewhat memorable. Like I think it is kind of iconic, even though the design isn't very good. Bruxish also has a useful signature ability called Dazzling, and it actually like has seen a little bit of play competitively, so it's not the worst Pokemon ever. It is maybe the ugliest. I'm not gonna argue with that point, but I think sometimes the super ugly Pokemon are actually more memorable than the ones that are kind of like a little bit ugly, but not so much that it is memorable. You know what I'm saying? Do I sound crazy? I don't know. 972 is Thievul. 971 is Badoo. I like Badoo. I mean, it's certainly not as good as the Pokemon around it, even the first stages, but it is, I don't know, it's Badoo. It's so cute. How can you not like Badoo? 970 is Azurill, who I think is somewhat iconic despite the fact that it's not very good. 969 is Pupitar. And 968 is Rattata. Now, Rattata outplays Eradicate by a good bit. This is another example of a Pokemon outperforming its evolution. I think Rattata is both more iconic and has a better design than Raticate personally. That's just my opinion. It's certainly not as good competitively, although you could argue that, again, the level 1, strategy with Endeavor and Quick Attack, I mean, a level 1 Rattata can beat a level 100 Mewtwo. Wow, that's incredible. 967 is Sand/Alolan form. 966 is Sentret. I do love Furret, but I think Sentret is a little bit more forgettable. 965 is Skiploom. People love Skiploom, so people are gonna be mad about that one, but what do you want me to say? It's Skiploom, okay? 964 is Wurmple. Wurmple, I think, is both cuter and more memorable than its evolutions in Silcoon and Cascoons, but outperforms them by a good bit. 963 is Loudred. 962 is Shuppet. 961 is Glalie, which is our first example of a Mega Evolution that was not added in Legends CA. Like, Glalie is a lot better than any other Pokemon on this list when you consider its Mega form, but the problem is that, like, at least if we're talking about competitive Pokemon, like, you would never really want to use Mega Glalie, because in using Mega Glalie, you like prevent yourself from using any other better Mega Evolution, and Mega Glalie is certainly one of the worst Mega Evolutions ever made. Also, regular Glalie, if you're not talking about the Mega, just isn't very good. Like, Ice typing is good offensively, but Glalie has kind of awkward stats. It's just not a very good Pokemon, and so it ends up in this category. 960 is Combee. 959 is Happiny. There's a lot of like little baby Pokemon in this category, which I guess makes sense. Those are kind of trailer filler, right? And closing out the category at 958, we have another starter Pokemon, middle form, Pignite. Pignite is another very ugly Pokemon. Okay, this is where I would say that things start to get really messy, because so far it feels like our categories have been like somewhat clear cut, like somewhat, there's been like kind of one overarching theme or maybe two. This next category is really tough because we have a fair few different overlapping categories, like basically within it. We have a mix of Pokemon who are good, but like very ugly. We have some Pokemon that are just straight up bad, but we like them a lot. And we have some Pokemon that are just kind of like mid and forgettable. Like, for example, the first Pokemon on our list, which is Unfezant. I guess I should say, first of all, people keep telling me that this Pokemon is pronounced Unpheasant, but I mean, I think it's Unfezant, so I don't agree. Anyway, this Pokemon I really hate. This is one of my least favorite Pokemon of all time. The only good thing about this Pokemon is that, number one, it has some competitive viability. It's not a lot, but it like at least evolved twice, right? It's not the worst. It might be the worst regional bird though. With the design factored in, I think it definitely is, which is why it's so low on our list. I realize now I didn't tell you the name of the category. This is the category that I've named Almost Worth Remembering. The Pokemon in this category have like something going for them, but not quite enough. It's like a little bit short. That being said, these Pokemon are getting better as the list, goes on. That's how the list works. We're getting into better Pokemon. So they are better than like the true fodder or any category that came before them, but they're still not quite memorable. Like, for example, the next Pokemon on our list is Jangmo-O. 955 is Veluza. Veluza is one of the Pokemon that's indicative of some of the ones in this category, which is that it's kind of like, because it's so forgettable, it's given to like a gym leader or like a Titan or a Totem, some kind of in-game boss fight, sometimes even as a signature Pokemon, just to make sure that like you might actually remember it, because otherwise you really wouldn't. 954 is Flabebe. Flabebe is a Pokemon that, like, if you only looked at it competitively, would be ranked a lot lower, but the design is awesome, so it actually gets a pretty big bump. 953 is Swirlix. 952 is Swoobat. I love Swoobat. This is one of my all-time favorite Pokemon, and it actually is not that bad. I keep waiting for an opportunity to use Swoobat, but it keeps not being around in like the only time it would be usable, which is like early on in the game's lifespan when like Incineroar is not around. You know what I mean? One day, Swoobat, one day it will make you work, I promise. 951 is Swanna. Swanna, I think, is a really great example of almost worth remembering because it's like a water flying type, and we have other and better ones of those. Like both Pelipper and Gyarados are, in my opinion, much more memorable. And even later generation ones like Cramorant are a lot funnier. Like Cramorant is probably a worse Pokemon 1-to-1, but it's just so much funnier and like so much cooler with its stupid signature ability that I think it's more memorable. So yeah, poor Swanna, almost worth remembering. Swanna is also the signature Pokemon of the gym leader Skyla, so there you go, it's another gym leader Pokemon. 950 is Bouffalant, a Pokemon I'm personally disappointed by because it's almost good, almost worth remembering. 949 is Pangoro. I like Pangoro, but like there's other dark and fighting type Pokemon I like more. 948 is Skrelp. Skrelp is tough because like it's really, really bad. It doesn't even have the dragon typing yet that it gets when it evolves, and like it's just really disappointing across the board. However, this is not the almost worth remembering category. This is a subcategory that I'm calling worth remembering, but very sad. Skrelp is bad enough that it belongs in true fodder, but the design is so good that actually it gets a pretty big bump. 947 is Picky Peck. Picky Peck is fun to say. I like Picky Peck. 946 is Wimpod. Wimpod, similar to Scarlet, has an amazing design, but is like, I mean, actually just a terrible Pokemon. The ability is so just like hurtful to it. But the name is funny, the design is funny, and I honestly think it's iconic. I feel like the later generation Pokemon struggle a little bit more to be iconic just because like they don't have the lens of nostalgia to help them. But I personally think Wimpod, very iconic, very funny Pokemon. 945 is Corvisquire. 944 is Nickit. Nickit outperforming Thievul in part because it's cuter. 943 is Copperaja. I like Copperaja a lot. I think this Pokemon is awesome. I like the design a lot. It is unfortunately not very good, but it is better than the Pokemon around it. Copperaja is another one of those Pokemon that is like almost worth remembering. It's a gym leader's Pokemon. It has a signature Gigantamax form, but like is Chairman Rose a gym leader? Technically, no. Technically, it's a final boss's Pokemon. Regardless, if it was just like 10% better, I think people would like go crazy over this Pokemon. It's one of the only elephants. I think it's like Copperaja and Donphan, but Donphan is a weird elephant. Is that a hot take? It's like Donphan is a really weird elephant. It's a tire. It's more of a tire than an elephant. Copperaja is an elephant first and a tire 10th. 942 is Tinkatink, aka Tinky Winky. 941 is Igglybuff. Gets points for cuteness and iconicity. Very bad if you want to use this Pokemon in battle. 940 is Swinub. Swinub is another Pokemon where it's like not very good in battle, but it has an incredible design and is very iconic, so it gets extra bonus points here. 939 is Boltund, another gym leader Pokemon here. I guess technically the assistant of the professor, whatever. You know what I mean. Gym leader category. 938 is Bombardier, who is a Titan Pokemon, and it took me a couple minutes to remember that that's what they were called, Titans, not alphas, not totems, not bosses. It's Titan Pokemon, okay? I thought it was funny that it keeps dropping rocks on you. This mod makes me so mad. They could have done so many things to make it better, and it's just terrible. 937 is Lanoon's Galarian form. I like Lanoon Galarian form. I don't like Obstagoon very much, but I like the redesign here. 936 is Numel, aka Structobeeb. 935 and 934 are Yamask and Yamask Galarian form. Cofagrigus is probably a top 10 Pokemon for me, so you might expect these Pokemon to be higher up on this list. But remember, I have to go through every single Pokemon, and also I'm trying to be at least like somewhat objective about this list. Even if I really like a Pokemon, doesn't mean I'm just gonna give it, top 10 overall. I love Yamask, but I also don't think that Yamask is like so iconic, or do I think it's like objectively a good design? I mean, I like the design, don't get me wrong, but I think that if you were to ask people like, oh yeah, which Pokemon have the best designs? I don't think Yamask is coming up very often. It's also not very good competitively. Cofagrigus, different story. Cofagrigus you can use, but like Yamask, it's pretty tough. 933 is Carbink. Carbink is almost really cool, but it's not. 932 is Bramblin. Bramblin is kind of indicative of this trend that Pokemon has been doing in more recent generations, where they'll make a Pokemon that is not very good, but they'll give it something unique about it, whether that's a signature ability or a signature move. We've actually already seen a couple Pokemon like that in this category. For example, Veluza gets the signature move Fillet Away. Yamask gets the signature ability Mummy. Bramblin, technically, its ability isn't signature. They also gave it to Shiftry as like a little buff to Shiftry, but because it was introduced with Bramblin and Bramblegast, I think of it as a signature ability. The ability is really cool. It's called Wind Rider, and it actually has a lot of like competitive viability. But the thing is that oftentimes the Pokemon that they're giving these signature tools to are just really terrible Pokemon. That's the case for Bramblin, but I think the design is kind of cute, and also I think that the ability is really memorable and really interesting. And Bramblegast, like, I mean, there was a world where Bramblegast won the World Championships, which is pretty cool. So overall, I think that Bramblin definitely deserves a spot high up relative to its base stat total. Closing out the category at rank 931 in our list is our first legendary and our first mythical Pokemon, Volcanion. Volcanion should be a lot cooler than I think it is. It's a fire and water type, which is unique as of the time I'm recording this video, and it has a signature move as well. But honestly, I don't think the design is very good. I think that like for a fire and water type Pokemon, it is cool that it's Steam themed, but that's kind of the only good thing I can say about it. And because it's a mythical Pokemon, it's pretty hard to get access to, both for casuals and competitive players, and you're never allowed to use it in competitive play. I know it feels weird to have a legendary this like low on the list, but the fact is there's a lot of legendary Pokemon, and I honestly think Volcanion might be the worst of them all. We're starting to get into Pokemon now that I think have clearly left the bad category. Like maybe these Pokemon aren't the strongest necessarily, but they're cute enough, or they're good enough, or they're strong enough that like they are memorable at least a little bit. And that's why we're calling this next category featured in an anime episode. But maybe not that many anime episodes, okay? Just one. Coming in at 930, we have Metapod. I think the Metapod versus Metapod anime episode is like one of the most memorable. Maybe it's just because I grew up with it, but I mean, you all know what I'm talking about, right? Where they get into a Harden off. We're gonna move on now. 929 is Cosmoem. Cosmoem, another legendary Pokemon, and I mean, it was certainly featured in an anime episode. I think it's really funny that it's ranked higher than Volcanion, but I mean, come on, it's Cosmoem. It's better than Volcanion. Surely nobody disagrees. 928 is Frillish. 927 is Carvania. Carvania? I don't know. 926 is Zarude. Zarude certainly has a movie.
I know it was wrong. I'm going to take my son and leave.
That's kind of like a long episode of the anime, right? And I'm willing to bet that it doesn't appear much in the series beyond the movie, so I think that meets the category. 925 is Poliwag. 924 is Corfish. I know that Corfish appears in multiple anime episodes, but like, that he's on Ash's team, okay? That's a technicality. 923 is Machop. 922 is Graveler. Good job, Graveler. You made it into the 900s. Good job. 921 is Doduo. There's a really like clever Poke Earth like parody video on YouTube about Doduo that I showed my girlfriend's mom. I don't know if she got it, but I showed it to her. Good job, creator who made the Doduo Poke Earth video. 920 is Mr. Mime Galarian form. This is a weird Pokemon. I actually hope this one wasn't featured in an anime episode, but I'm pretty sure it was. 919 is Shroomish. 918 is Anorith. Now, I don't know if Anorith was featured in an anime episode, but if they made an anime episode about the beginning of Pokemon Emerald Kaizo, Anorith would be in it. 917 is Baniri. Baniri is a Pokemon that like has stats that would land it in true fodder, but I think it's both memorable and like pretty iconic, to be honest, especially for a Gen 4 Pokemon. People love Baniri. I like Baniri, and so it gets a lot of extra points. 916 is Licky Licky. Licky Licky, I would say, is not super iconic, and I don't think the design is very good, but I think it's one of those Pokemon where the design is bad and like kind of ugly, and therefore it becomes memorable. And also, it's pretty good like from a competitive angle, especially compared to the majority of the Pokedex. So you can kind of view this as a Pokemon that would be higher, except the design holds it back. 915 is Lillipup. I like Lillipup a lot, very cute. 914 is Roggenrola, great name. 913 is Venipede. I think Venipede's kind of cute, but I think that's not a popular opinion. 912 is Druddigon. I actually really like Druddigon, but it's not very good. 911 is Phantom. 910 is Salandit. 909 is Dubwool. 908 is Dolliv. I think Dolliv is really cute. I really like it. It's a little like Blossom pilled. Is that something I can say? I'm gonna move on. I don't have anything else to say. 907 is Charcadet. Charcadet literally has its own original video animation. I'm pretty sure, and I think that's pretty neat. But I think Charcadet is mostly memorable because it evolves into Sarah Legend Armarouge, or if you watch the little animation. 906 is Aipom, and I feel like my brain got a little short-circuited because now when I think about Aipom being iconic, I can't remember any of like the early anime. I only think about its appearance in Detective Pikachu. In fact, out of all the Pokemon that appeared in Detective Pikachu, Aipom was like one of the most memorable for me, and I don't really know why that is. I should go to a doctor. 905 is Mime Jr. 904 is Qwilfish. Qwilfish actually one of the few Johto single stage Pokemon that doesn't evolve, that actually has some competitive viability. I'm using the word viable very loosely here, but it gets extra points because you can use it. 903 is Beautifly. I like Beautifly, but it's not very good. 902 is Cacnea. 901 is Muna, I actually have never known. 900 is Corsola Galarian form, who I think really fits this category quite nicely because like, I haven't watched the anime since like Generation 3, so I don't know if this is real, but like, surely there's an episode about Galarian Corsola and the dangers of, you know, environmental pollution and its habitat being destroyed, right? I mean, it's like they've made the Pokemon so they could make an anime episode. Surely. Number 899 is Hakamo. 898 is Knuckle-Stackle. I like Knuckle-Stackle. 897 is Wattrel. Wattrel's a little in the uncanny valley for me. Is anyone else getting that? 896 is Citadel. Very cute. Love Citadel. 895 is Sandslash. I think this is the last Sandshrew Sandslash Pokemon. So out of all the Sandslashes and the variations, all one variation, the original is the best one, okay? This is the highest placing one. And closing out the category in rank 894 is Drowsy. Our next section of Pokemon, I think, is a clear turning point in the overall viability of the Pokemon on the list. This category is named Usable (Derogatory). This is self-explanatory. Coming in at 893 is Fortress. And Fortress, I think, really exemplifies the category name because, like, on the one hand, the typing is really good and, like, it has stuff that it can do. And in fact, in single battle formats, Fortress, like, has seen some good usage in the past. But, like, it's not good, okay? You could use it. If it's your favorite Pokemon, you can use it. And, like, you might even be able to get some wins, but you're really not doing yourself any favors. 892 is Ursaring. Ursaring is a Pokemon that mainly exists so you can get Ursaluna nowadays. You can use it. It has some abilities. It gets Guts plus Facade. That's kind of cool, right? But like, just use Ursaluna, dog. Like, I don't know what to tell you. 891 is Phanpy. I always called this Phanpy. Like, I always thought it was Phanpy, but it's actually Phanpy. Phanpy feels more natural to me, but I'm gonna say it the way it's spelled. Anyway, Phanpy is not usable (derogatory). So we have a subcategory here, which is extremely cute. cute, but very bad. These are Pokemon that have effectively no competitive viability, but they still end up relatively high on the list because they're just like great designs, which is also the case for number 890, Magby. I do feel like I should clarify that I think Phanpy is more cute than Magby, but I think that Magby is more iconic, and so therefore it ends up a little bit higher by one placement. Watch out. 889 is Go-Goat. Go-Goat makes me so mad. Can I talk about Go-Goat for a second? I love Go-Goat conceptually. I think the ability Grass Pelt is so cool, and it's just worthless. Like, this is a Pokemon that like they made because they wanted like to introduce a cool new ability, but then they got scared that the ability was going to be too strong, and that's how we ended up with Go-Goat. 888 is Piloswine. 888. That's what I get when I go to the slot machines, baby. I've never gambled, which is probably apparent. Anyway, Piloswine is actually like not a bad Pokemon, but it's not as good as Mamoswine. 887 is Lombre. Lombre's got to be one of the worst Pokemon to catch in Emerald because it only gets like Fake Out and like Astonish and like Growl, and you're like, when is this thing gonna learn some good moves? And you're a stupid kid, and then you realize like, oh, I need to give it a Water Stone to evolve it. And at that point, you're like level 40 and you're just waiting for it to evolve. I like Lombre, but it's stupid. 886 is Beheeyem. Now, it is worth noting that I lost to Beheeyem at the World Championships in 2011, so it's maybe a little bit better than usable, parentheses derogatory, but the design isn't very good in my opinion. 885 is Vigoroth. This is actually neither cute nor usable. Vigoroth's an exception. 884 is Swalot. 883 is Wynot. I mean, Wynot is cute. Come on, Wynot is great. I love Wynot. 882 is Huntail. 881 is Lechonk. 880 is Shieldon. Shieldon is a weird Pokemon. I don't have anything to say about it. 879 is Gorbis. I think Gorbis is better than Huntail. I don't know if it's a popular opinion, but Gorbis is like, I think Gorbis is cool. I gotta find new ways of describing Pokemon than just saying they're cool, because there's a lot of Pokemon on this list, and apparently I think a lot of them are cool. I think Gorbis is quite sophisticated and elegant. 878 is Fione. Did anyone play the Pokemon Ranger Fione mission that let you get Heatran? Or am I getting confused? 877 is Blitzel. My girlfriend recently learned about Blitzel. She really likes Blitzel. So Blitzel, well, it didn't get bonus points here, but if I could, I would. 876 is Vanillite. Very crunchy. 875 is Clauncher. Is Clauncher cute? I don't know. 874 is Dedenne. I'm sorry, Dedenne. I'm gonna take this opportunity to apologize to Dedenne again. Some of you don't know what I'm talking about, but for those of you who do, I'm really sorry, Dedenne. That's on me. Definitely usable, but usable is like a bit of a stretch is what I learned. 873 is Pumpkaboo. Great name. 872 is Hisuian Avalugg. The real issue with Hisuian Avalugg is that it's not as good a table for snacks. The main draw of Avalugg is that you can use him to store your snacks when you're having like a party for football. Hisuian Avalugg, it's a little bumpier. It's harder to do. 871 is Crabominable, and I'm not gonna do the whole rant again, but everything I said about Crababy is true of Crabominable. I'm so mad about Crabominable. 870 is Mudbray, super cute, love Mudbray. 869 is Stuffle. I think the idea of a stuffed animal as a Pokemon is just incredible, love Stuffle. 868 is Melton, another legendary. 867 is Toxel. I think Toxel is supposed to be cute, but I don't like it. 866 is Sinistea. 865 is Probopass. 864 is Morgrem. Did I already say this? There should be less. I couldn't even say it properly. 863 is Cubfu. Don't like Cubfu. 862 is Squawkabilly. Squawkabilly? 861 is Arctibax. 860, Avalugg. Avalugg, optimal table. Probably the best table in all of Pokemon. I love Avalugg. Great job, Avalugg. So smooth, so good for storing your snacks, and because he's made out of ice, he keeps your drinks cold. Come on, that's awesome. 859 is Simisear. Simisear a little bit like higher up than you might expect given how Hayden it is, but the fact of the matter is that it has some competitive viability, so it lands squarely in the 800s. And 858, closing out the category, is Gligar, who is, I think, both categories here, both usable, derogatory, and cute but bad. We're getting pretty deep into the list at this point, and so you may have noticed a trend, which is that I will say I like this Pokemon and then immediately say one place higher, I don't like this Pokemon. And I think that just highlights some of the complexities that went into making this list. Because of course, if I were just ranking the Pokemon based on how much I like them, this would be a lot simpler. But there's a lot of factors to consider here. Like, I might not like a certain Pokemon, but I can't deny that it has some competitive viability. And on the other hand, I might really like a Pokemon, but not be able to deny that it's not very iconic. There's just a lot going on with this list, and so it's a little bit more complicated than you might expect when it comes to the final rankings. Now, our next section of Pokemon, these are Pokemon that I would say they're definitely better than the category before them, and they're actually good enough that if you have a team and you already have 5 Pokemon on it and you're looking for just the right Pokemon with just the right moves and typing and ability, they might seem like they do the trick, but they never do, which is why our next category of Pokemon we're calling Fool's Gold. Starting off the category at number 857 is Mantine. Mantine's a really interesting Pokemon because like it does have some stuff going for it, and there actually was one very brief period where Mantine was a little bit usable. I think with Dynamax maybe as like a Swift Swim attacker. On the whole though, it's mostly gonna lead you astray. 856 is Skuntank. 855 is Cherim. 854 is Clamperl. Now Clamperl is interesting because it actually is usable. Like it's not a great Pokemon, but it has a unique item that doubles its special attack, and that makes it actually a viable being used loosely, but a viable threat in certain circumstances because it's very, very slow. So in certain Trick Room teams, Clamperl has seen use before. I think that's funny. It's also just like kind of a funny design. I don't know, I like it. 853 is Snover. 852 is Tortuga. And 851 introduces a subcategory of the section with Solosis. Solosis belongs in a subcategory that we're calling minor works of art. Look, at this point, you've heard me say these Pokemon are bad, but they're cute like 100 times. That's this category in this section. Number 850 is Pidgey. Number 849 is Rattata Alolan form, and actually that means that this Rattata outplaces regular Rattata because I think that the redesign is just really sick. I do like regular Rattata, but I think the Alolan form is cooler. Not when it evolves though. 848 is Venomoth. I like Venomoth. 847 is Execute. I mean, come on, it's Execute. 846 is Miltank. 845 is Noctowl, and Noctowl I would say is mostly Fool's Gold, but there have been times where it's a little bit more usable with Dynamax. Noctowl will always be my superb owl. 844 is Alolan Golem. 843 is Galarian Ponyta. 842 is Dustox. Dustox is not very good, but it is pretty memorable and pretty iconic in my opinion, so it gets extra points. 841 is Seal. That's a minor work of art. Come on, it's a seal. It's a seal and it's named Seal. Come on, someone had a vision. 840 is Glickitung. 839 is Croconaw, which is another starter Pokemon making it onto our list. 838 is Girafarig. 837 is Teddiursa. Teddiursa outplacing Ursaring. 836 is Corsola. I hope that Corsola gets an evolution at some point, or a Mega or something, because I think the design is really nice, but it's not a very good Pokemon. A lot of the Johto Pokemon have kind of drawn the short end of the stick. 835 is Pyukumuku. Now, I do think Pyukumuku is a really funny design, and I do think that like the gimmick is interesting, that it can't do any damage, but basically this is just an inferior version of Wobbuffet. El Pyukumuku. 834 is Galarian Zigzagoon. 833 is Lotad. This is a minor work of art for sure. And honestly, this might be a major work of art. Maybe Lotad belongs in a higher category. I love Lotad. It's such a good design. 832 is Makuhita. 831 is Lairon. Lairon, these... Number 830 is Whiscash. I wish some cash would appear in my wallet. Please don't leave, I'm sorry. 829 is Starly. I wish some star would lead into my wallet. How many Pokemon are left? 828 is Ambipom. Ambipom is almost good, and by almost good, I mean maybe under certain circumstances it could be usable, but not in the circumstances we live in. 827 is Herdier. I think Herdier is a minor work of art for sure. 826 is Boldore. Can we talk about the name? Boldore? That's great. I love Boldore. 825 is Petalil. 824 is Gothita. Come on, you guys love Gothita on this channel, right? 823 is Deerling. Deerling is pretty cool. I love the seasonal gimmick. I wish it was better. 822 is Sawsbuck. The Sawsbuck is a little bit better, but not as cute, so it ends up around the same placement. 821 is Electric. I think it's really confusing, by the way, that we have both Electric and Electrike. Like for me, that's hard to remember. I don't like that. 820 is Beartic. This is a Fool's Gold Pokemon if I've ever seen one. It's like, oh, I wanted a Swift Swimmer that's not a water type. Oh, there's Beartic, and then you're very sad. 819 is Golett. Go let yourself be subscribed to this channel. 818 is Diggersby. 817 is Inkay. That's a minor work of art for sure. Also, the mechanic where you have to turn your Switch upside down to evolve it is great. Love that. 816 is Poipole. This is our first Ultra Beast as a fun fact, and also a great name. I love saying Poipole. I wish Poipole was better so I could talk more about Poipole. I wonder where the rest of the Ultra Beasts are, because this is our first one, and actually it's interesting that the first Ultra Beast appears like way after the first starter and the first legendary and the first mega, and are there any others that I'm forgetting? Probably. Did I already say starter? I don't know. And closing out the category at 815 is Simipour. Now, I don't like Simipour, and I don't think it's very like popular or iconic, except for the fact that it sucks. But the thing is that Simipour is actually pretty viable. Like out of all the monkeys, it's probably the most viable, although I wouldn't say it has the best design. And so for that reason, it gets extra points, even though I would love to put Simipour lower. The following section of Pokemon features a lot of characters that are actually like genuinely somewhat usable. Like they're not so bad. Like they've cleared the mid-tier allegations. Well, they've cleared the garbage tier allegations and they're thoroughly mid-tier. But the thing is that they're just so turbo ultra omega ugly. Like I don't know why, but like a ton of the super ugly, weird looking Pokemon are all in this section. So we're calling this one worth a thought, extremely ugly. Starting off with number 814 and Barraskewda, I think that this needs no explanation. Number 813 is Sizzlypede. This is an outlier. 812 is Delmise. Delmise is actually really cool. I like the signature ability. I think it's really neat, but I don't even know if I'd say it's ugly. It's just kind of weird. 811 is Berserker. I really like the Meowth line, and I like the Alolan Meowth line a lot, and I don't like the Berserker line very much, but it also has a signature ability that also happens to affect steel moves as well. That's kind of weird. Like, what are the odds that we get Delmise, whose signature ability affects steel moves, and then right after Berserker, whose signature ability also affects steel moves? There's a conspiracy here. I'm gonna figure out what it is. 810 is Tarantula. This is also an outlier. 809, Gimmighoul. 808 is Stonejourner, though. Now, I've actually used Stonejourner at an official competition before. I wouldn't argue that it's ugly, though. Like, I like Stonejourner, Stony J, my guy, but that is not a pretty Pokemon. 807 is Pansear. Pansear outplacing its evolution because despite being way less viable, it's not losing that many points because, you know, Simisear isn't that viable to begin with, and it's a lot cuter. 806 is Dunsparce. 805 is Hisuian Quillfish, who gets bonus points because it's a bit more viable. Fun fact, Hisuian Quillfish can hold the EVLA, but like regular Quillfish can't. Poor regular Quillfish. 804 is Panpour. It's slightly more viable, but not by much. Otherwise, pretty much the same as Pansear. 803 is Exploud. I don't think there's many people saying Exploud is a beautiful Pokemon. I don't think that in the Gen 3 contest, people are entering Exploud in the cuteness contests and winning very often. 802 is Cranidos. This is another outlier Pokemon that I think is somewhat iconic and gets bonus points for it. 801 is Purugly, who you might be surprised to learn was actually a genuine threat at a very specific point in a competitive format. I think in 2016 or maybe 2019. But I mean, Purugly, ugly is in the name, okay?
That was a mistake.
Number 800 is Pansage, who barely edges out the other pre-evolution monkeys. Number 799 is Ferroseed. Number 798 is Tyrantrum, who earned the privilege and the title of being the single worst fully evolved fossil Pokemon. 797 is Pyroar, who I guess isn't ugly, but like also is kind of in a weird design space in my opinion, but also had some viability back in 2014. I think maybe I know too much about which Pokemon were good. Maybe I need to go to a doctor. 796 is Xatu. 795 is Claydol. 794 is my beloved Chimecho. 793 is Galarian Rapidash, and Galarian Rapidash makes me so mad because regular Rapidash is so bad, and they had a chance to like do something new with a redesign, with a new form, and they gave it the best type in the game, which is Fairy, and they still messed it up. Like I can't talk about Rapidash, it makes me too mad. Number 792 is Machoke. Number 791 is Kingler. Do you guys know that Kingler gets a Gigantamax form? I think people might forget about that. Number 790 is Primeape. Number 789 is Dodrio. At some point, they're gonna give Dodrio an evolution with 4 heads or like a mega form with 10 heads or something. I swear, I can feel it. It's gonna happen. Number 788 is Hitmonchan. Number 787 is Delibird. I think Delibird is so iconic, and not only because of the design, but also because, did you ever play Pokemon Stadium 2, the Delibird minigame? That's one of my favorite, that might be my single favorite minigame of all time. I love that minigame. 786 is Larvitar. Larvitar obviously is not fitting the category, but just gets extra super bonus points because it's such a great Pokemon. And rounding out the section of the list, we have number 785, Unknown. And for the sake of my sanity, I have ranked all of the Unknown together. If that upsets you, I think Unknown question mark is the best one. Now the Pokemon are starting to look pretty good, but at a cost, which is that a lot of the Pokemon here, they're not even really usable. These are Pokemon with above average designs, but have basically no competitive viability. These Pokemon are just here to look good. Kicking off our category is number 784, Floette. I'm not gonna talk about the different colored flowers. They're all ranked together. 783 is Sock. Sock on. 782 is Grafaiai. 781 is Fracture. I know we've had a couple Pokemon that aren't really here to look good, but okay, we're doing generalizations, okay? 780 is Volbeat and 779 is Illumise. I think these Pokemon are here to look good. They're a little bit viable as well, but mostly they're here to, you know, like show you the power of double battles in Generation 3. 778 is Wailmer. 777 is Swablu. If I got a Swablu, I think I just hit the jackpot. I think I was missing some words in that sentence. Okay, I know I said I wasn't gonna rank the flowers differently, but I have, for some reason, ranked the different Castform forms separately because they do technically have different viabilities. Anyway, the worst one at 776 is Castform Normal Form. Then the second worst one is Castform Snowy Form at 775, followed by 774 Castform Sunny Form, and 773 lastly is Castform Rainy Form. Can we talk about how there's no Sandy Form? Like there's 4 weathers and there's 4 Castforms, and Sandstorm isn't one of them. Like I don't know what it should be, but like it should be something surely, right? Now to be honest, Castform probably should have just been ranked as one Pokemon because like it can transform mid-battle. Like you don't have to lock it in advance, but The truth of the matter is that if I were to change it now, I'd have to redo the entire rest of the list, and I'm just not willing to do it. So I've ranked the cast form separately. Good job. That's the reason why. Number 772 is Skitty. This one needs, I don't need to explain Skitty to you. Everybody loves Skitty. I love Skitty. You love Skitty. We all love Skitty. Even people who don't like cats love Skitty. Number 771 is Bonsly. Bonsly, don't show an image of Bonsly when it's falling on its back, please. 770 is Chatot. Don't get Chatot angry. Don't let Chatot in a Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 lobby in 2005.
Get out of the tank and then we'll see who wins.
769 is Basculin White Stripe, which I think is a lot higher than the other Basculins. This one gets Last Respect, so it's a bit more viable. It's actually a lot more viable. 768 is Fletchling. 767 is Hone Edge. 766 is Heliolisk. Now, Heliolisk always makes you think about one specific Heliolisk, which was used by a player named Ashton Cox, who is a very famous and well-known VGC player for using really off-the-wall Pokemon and strategies. And in his debut season, or the season where he really started popping off, it was 2014, and he had this Heliolisk, which was, I think, the worst Heliolisk of all time. And I have a lot of respect for Ashton. I just think the story is really funny. He had dry skin Heliolisk, which is really funny because it causes the user to become immune to water moves and heal, but they lose health if the sun is active. And he had this Heliolisk on a sun team with Charizard Y. And this is especially relevant because Heliolisk also gets the ability Solar Power, which also causes it to lose health in the sun, but gives it a power boost. And after the tournament, we were like, Ashton, like, why did you use Dry Skin when Solar Power was just an upgrade? Like, were you really worried about water moves? And his response was, no, I didn't want to use Dry Skin, but the one I had that was shiny was Dry Skin. And so, yeah, I used Dry Skin in the tournament. And he got like top 8. He went really far. Anyway, the Heliolisk always makes me think about that specific Heliolisk, the dry skin sun one. 765 is Amora. I think Amora is one of the cutest fossil Pokemon. A lot of them look kind of like freaky, but Amora, like, I don't know, it's so cute. Number 764 is Dartrix. Now, Dartrix is here as a subcategory in this list, which is a little subcategory that I'm gonna call the mid starters. And you might think you know what I mean by that, but just hold on a second, because there's a little bit more to reveal. 763 is Turtonator. 762 is Sobble. Now, so far, most of the starter Pokemon we've had on this list have been mid-stagers. And so when I said that we have a subcategory of mid-starters, you probably thought I was talking about more mid-stagers. But the truth is, I'm talking about starter Pokemon that are pretty mid. And while I do like Sobble personally, I don't think it's one of the stronger first stage Pokemon. 761 is Yamper. 760 is Smoliv, outperforming Dolliv because it's extra funny. 759 is Cloth. Cloth is really, really funny, right? I love Cloth. I think Cloth is just a great design. 758 is Pidgeotto. 757 is Lantern. 756 is Monkey Dory, but it's a legendary Pokemon that I hate. Truthfully, I'm a little surprised that Monkey Dory outplaced some of the other legendary Pokemon on this list and wasn't the single worst one, but it is genuinely viable. It has a pretty good like move pool and a useful ability, not a good one, but a useful one. So I don't know, it does better than you might expect given how ugly it is. 755 is Passimian. 754 is Houndoom. 753 is another starter Pokemon in Crocolore. This one is both mid-quality and a mid-stager. 752 is Poochyena. 751 is Linoon. Number 750 is Armaldo, another evolved fossil Pokemon. 749 is Fletchinder. 748 is Diplin. 747 is Simisage. Congratulations, Simisage, you are the best performing monkey. In large part because you are the fastest monkey, which means that you have a little bit of competitive viability and also your design is a little bit better than the others in my opinion. 746 is Bellsprout. 745 is Golem. I think we're done with all the Golems now. 744 is Ponyta. 743 is Alolan Grimer, and I don't think that Alolan Grimer is here to look good, but I do think it's a really cool reinvention of the classic Kanto line. 742 is Muck regular form. Where's Alolan Muck? Ooh, could be anywhere. 741 is Hisuian Voltorb. 740 is Goldeen. 739 is Seeking. I'm seeking you to click the subscribe button. Now we have a run of starter Pokemon in a row, so get ready. 738 is Chikorita, one of my all-time favorite starters, but not very viable. Iconic and cute, yes. 737 is Totodile, the Johto starter outplacing Chikorita just a little bit. And 736 is Combuskin, who is a little bit interesting looking is all I'll say about that. Moving on, we have 735 with Talos, 734 with Spinda, and 733 with Vibrava. Leap earned spot 732 as a fossil Pokemon, and actually a fossil Pokemon that's viable in that I brought it to a tournament and finished in the top 16 back in 2013. 731 is Shinx, 730 is Lumineon. People hate Lumineon, but it's actually somewhat usable. It has something that it can do. 729 is Girder. I keep trying to use Girder and I never am able to pull it off, but one of these days I'm gonna make Girder work. 728 is Sawaddle. 727 is Whirlipede. 726 is Axew. We have a couple more starters left, including 725 in Fennekin. Oddish performs slightly higher with 724. And we have Froakie coming in at number 723 and Frogadier at 722. This is interesting, especially because like Greninja, I think is one of the most iconic starter Pokemon, but I don't necessarily feel that way about the pre-evolutions personally. Closing out the category is not a starter Pokemon, but a Pokemon with a really unique mechanic. At 721, we have Furfrou. I think I would like Furfrou more if you could actually keep the haircut when you put it in a box. At some point, maybe they'll fix this. There's a format of Pokemon that I really like called Draft League. In this format, players are given a budget and they have to draft different Pokemon, with better Pokemon being more expensive. At the end of the draft, you're kind of just looking for any Pokemon that looks even a little bit passable that you can slot in that fits your, whatever remaining budget you have left. And when I was looking at the next section of Pokemon we have coming up here, I noticed that there's a lot of Pokemon that I would classify as round 9 draft picks. These are Pokemon that you're not excited about necessarily, but like they're not good Pokemon, but they are Pokemon that in a pinch you would see yourself using. Kicking off this section, we have number 720, Toucannon. Toucannon's disappointing. I like the design a lot, but I think that it's a real letdown competitively. 719 is Meowstic Female. 718 is Aromatisse. This is a Pokemon that I literally have drafted before in Draft League. I don't remember it being very good, and I also might be getting it confused with Masharna now that I say that out loud, but I think I drafted Aromatisse. 717 is Noibat. As with every category at this point, we're gonna have Pokemon with great design that don't fit the mold. 716 is Cursula. Now Cursula is interesting because it gets the ability Perish Body, I think it's called. You might not know this, there is a Pokemon that sets Perish Song up as an ability, and yet it's really not very good. It's so bad, in fact, that I've never really had any success using it despite being the Perish Song guy. 715 is Charjabug. Charjabug is not fully evolved, but you might not know that it gets the ability Battery, which gives a power boost to its partner, so it has seen a little bit of play back a couple years ago during Sun and Moon. 714 is Palossand, another Pokemon with an interesting signature ability that you can use, not very easily, but you can do something with it. 713 is Finizen. 712 is Eldegoss, another Pokemon that I've used that is not very good. 711 is Applin. 710 is Hatena. 709 is Palmy. 708 is Fido. I like Fido a lot, primarily because of the design. I like Fido so much, in fact, that there was a video we did that was not in our normal style, where we rented out a filming studio and had all this like really weird and kind of funky sets. And the Pokemon that we used as our example in that video was Fido. If you haven't seen it, I'd recommend it. I think it's a lot of fun. Hey, it's your choice. You do you. Oh. 707 is Knackley. 706 and 705 go to Minun and Plusle. I do think that Plusle is marginally better than Minun, but I don't feel like it's so much better that the gap between them should be large. 704 is Shelder. Do people think that Shelder is iconic? I'm actually not sure. I think it is, but I'm not sure if that's a popular opinion. 703 is Hoppip. 702 is Zangoose. 701 is Abra. I mean, come on, Abra's great, right? It's not a Pokemon with any competitive viability, but it's still relatively high up on the list because I think it's so funny that it teleports away from you. I feel like everybody has an Abra story who played Gen 1 where they were so excited it's so hard to find, you finally find one and it just teleports away. And I like that, like, in future games, Abra keeps that gimmick. Like, I recently played ZA and like I knew that Abra was going to teleport away before I even, saw it. And then of course it teleported away and I had to chase it down and get a new one. Number 700 is Duskull. 699 is Hippopotas. Hippopotas is a pre-evolution that actually has a slightly better score in viability because you could justify using it. It's not good, but you can use it. 698 goes to Crustle. Crustle is better in Pokemon Unite and in the trading card game, I think, than it is in the official competitive format. 697 is Mabostiff. Mabostiff, I feel, is a bit of a letdown because it has a lot going for it. It has a couple interesting abilities in Intimidate and Guard Dog, and the stats honestly are not that bad. Like, it's a Pokemon that if you look at it, you think it should be better than it is. I could see this Pokemon being good in a format with a lower power level. Like, I would not be shocked if at some point in the future Mabostiff was more than usable. Like it probably could be good in the right circumstances, but the specific ecosystem of Scarlet and Violet didn't allow for it to get there. Number 696 is Glimmet. Glimmet, I think if you were playing a format with a budget like Draft League, you could justify using it because the ability is pretty good and the stats honestly are not that bad for a pre-evolution. When we did the Little Cup tournament, it was actually quite strong. And I also really like that Glimmet's design is silly. Like, I like that it's kind of weird and hard to tell what's going on with it. Speaking of weird designs, number 695 is Pincurchin. Pincurchin, a very popular Pokemon, and also I love the little round blobs. 694 is Shellos West Sea. That's the pink one, right? Now, for the most part, I'm splitting Pokemon up with different forms depending on competitive viability, and there's no competitive difference between the pink and the blue Gastrodon, but I feel like it's very important to tell you which ones I like more than the other ones. And so West C is lower on the list. EC, you'll have to see where that pops up. Number 693 is Dusk Noir. Dusk Noir already has a great design, but I think the thing about Dusk Noir that's the most memorable to me is, did you all ever play Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Time / Darkness / I forget the third one, Sky, I think? I think that's to this day my favorite Pokemon game of all time, and I don't want to spoil it for anyone who's going to go back and play this, 15-year-old game, but Dusk Noir plays a major role in that game, and it makes it especially memorable and iconic for me. 692 goes to Kamala. Kamala is a letdown, in my opinion. 691 goes to Rockruff. I like Rockruff because you can say it like Rockruff. 690 goes to Solrock. 689 goes to Phalanx. I am very curious to see how Mega Phalanx is. That's a Pokemon I'm excited about. 688 goes to Lunatone. I think Lunatone is slightly better. I like the design a little bit more. I think it's close to Solrock because they're kind of a linked pair, but I like Lunatone slightly more. 687 goes to Servine, another starter Pokemon making an appearance here. Fun fact about Servine is that actually it was used a little bit back in 2011 when the power level was super low, because Eviolite plus Contrary Leaf Storm was a set. Actually, I don't even know if it got Contrary at the time. I think it was Eviolite Coil. I think you ran Coil Servine. It's weird. Moving on. 686 is Ekans. I don't have much to say about Ekans, but I feel like it definitely deserves to be relatively high up on the list for an unevolved Pokemon. 685 is Zebstrika. 684 is Gloom. We actually made a short about this, but there was a period where Stench Gloom was used a little bit. It was very, very funny. It didn't even use Eviolite. It used loaded dice. 683 is Diglett. Now, Diglett actually falls into the category of both of kind of like an iconic pre-evolution Pokemon and a round 9 draft pick, because I have literally drafted this before. There's a video of me using Stealth Rock's Diglett somewhere on the internet. I don't remember if I won that set, but I have used Diglett before because of Arena Trap and speed. 682 is Weepinbell. 681 goes to Magnemite. Number 680 goes to Bayleaf, another starter Pokemon making an appearance. 679 goes to Yanma. Yanma, another Pokemon that is both an iconic, older generation design and a Pokemon that has a little bit of competitive viability and was actually used as recently as last season. Number 678 goes to Elekid. Number 677 goes to Zigzagoon. Zigzagoon is the best Route 1 normal type thus far, and I'm gonna say it probably ever. 676 is Roselia. 675 goes to Staravia. 674 is Weasel. 673 is Drillbur. I think that Drillbur to Excadrill is one of the biggest cuteness gaps in the series, because I think Drillbur is pretty cute, and I do not think that Excadrill is cute at all. 672 is Trubbish. Fun fact, I think that Trubbish is canonically a cat Pokemon. They made merch with all the cats on it, and they put Trubbish on there. 671 is Minccino. Minccino? Number 670 is Rufflet. 669 is Caterpie. Caterpie, I think, is one of the most iconic pre-evolution, like stage 1, Gen 1 Pokemon of all time. That's a lot of qualifiers, holy cow, but I love Caterpie. I think this is mostly from that anime episode as a kid. 668 is Arkin, another interesting fossil Pokemon making it decently high up. 667 is Vanillish. 666 is Cutiefly. That's interesting, that's an interesting number for that. Number 665 is Quilava. Quilava is another great starter Pokemon and actually makes it pretty high up for a mid-stage starter. 664 is Celio. My guess is that Celio is one of those Pokemon that people like a lot, but they don't think about that often. I don't know if that's a correct read, but that's what I'm feeling right now. That's what's in my heart. I think we're going to vibes-based at this point. 663 is Bronzor. 662 is Sharpedo. What happened to the other half of Sharpedo? Do you think at some point they're gonna like give Sharpedo an evolution or something, which is like the whole shark? Because it's only half a shark. 661 is Drapion. I like shiny Drapion a lot. I think it's one of my favorite shinies. And 660, closing out the category, is East Sea Shellos. As you can see, East Sea actually outperforms West Sea by a good margin here. Now, there are some Pokemon that are clearly designed with some kind of gimmick in mind, right? Like maybe they have one role they can fill, or they've got something like kind of unique or signature or special about them. But just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean that you should, which is why the next section of Pokemon are named I Do One Thing, but Maybe I Shouldn't. Kicking off the category at number 659, we have Dudunsparce. Dudunsparce is one thing is that it makes people mad. Coming in at number 658, we have Comfey. Comfey's signature ability Triage is quite unique and in some instances can be good, but for the most part feels a little underwhelming. It basically acts like a health pack for whatever's next to it. 657 is Dreadnought. Dreadnought saw a little bit of results at one point, but for the most part, it's an inferior Swift Swimmer. 656 is Sandaconda. 655 is Palmo. 654 is Greavard. This is an outlier. This is a Pokemon with a great design that, it's up here because it has a great design. 653 is Obstagoon. Now, I want to talk about Obstagoon because when I was making my personal 10 worst Pokemon of all time list, I put Obstagoon in that bottom 10, and you can see here it's escaped that fate by quite a lot. It turns out both Scarlet and ZANE have much more favorable opinions about Obstagoon compared to me, and also it does have a lot of competitive viability, which I wasn't factoring in entirely when I was making that list. It was a bit more subjective, a little less methodical. So Obstagoon escapes its fate by a placement of over 400 placings here. 652 is Emolga. I'm not even sure that Emolga does one thing, but it definitely shouldn't. 651 is Koopa Confined, the cuter form. 650 is Galarian Meowth. 649 is Quaxly, another starter Pokemon. 648 is Arctovish, Arctovish being, for the most part, an inferior Dracovish. 647 is Galarian Stunfisk. Galarian Stunfisk, I think, even has a signature ability or like a signature move called Snap Trap, I'm pretty sure, but it's not very good. 646 is Paldean Tauros Combat Breed, so only the pure fighting type. It is certainly worse than the other two. 645 is Hisuian Sneasel. Hisuian Sneasel is actually legitimately a threat. 644 goes to Flapple, a Pokemon more fun to say than to use. 643 goes to Zubat. Good job, Zubat. You've made it probably a lot higher than a lot of people would have expected. 642 goes to Paris. 641 goes to Tentacool. Number 640 is Galarian Slowpoke. I think the little side mission where like Galarian Slowpoke moves really fast, I think is really funny, even to this day. 639 is Dugong. 638 is Staryu. 637 is another legendary. It's base form Necrozma. I think base Necrozma is a lot less cool than either the combined forms or the ultra form. 636 goes to Pinsir. Number 635 is Paldean Wooper, aka Pooper. I like regular Wooper more, but I do think Paldean Wooper's pretty good. 634 goes to Delcatty. Delcatty does have one thing that it can do and does have one thing that it shouldn't do. It didn't stop me from doing that thing, which is Delcatty gets a signature ability called Normalize, which turns all of your moves into normal type moves. And I had a strategy where I used a very elaborate combination to give both my opponent's Pokemon Normalize, and then lock them on the field with Shadow Tag and have 2 ghost types, so I was just fully immune to all damage. It's a really silly strategy. I actually got second in a major tournament with it. Very fun, very stupid. 633 goes to Relicanth. 632 is Beldum. 631 is Grotle, who's a starter Pokemon and actually saw a little bit of use back in 2015 as a bulky Leech Seed grass type. Number 630 is Luxio. Number 629 is Sandile, and 628 is Joltik. When they made Joltik plushies, they sold out like immediately. I think it was one of the fastest selling out plushies that they've had. 627 is Creogonal. Creogonal is a disappointment. I hope that at some point they give it an evolution or a mega or something. 626 is regular Stunfisk. I think a really flat fish is just hilarious, and Stunfisk, while not super good or even a little bit good or even concepts of good, is very funny. I think Stunfisk doesn't get enough love for how funny it is. 625 is Durant. Now Durant was a very divisive topic among the 3 of us who did this ranking. Some people really hate Durant, and some of us actually like Durant and think it's pretty good. So it's ended up here somewhere in the middle. I think Durant is great. I like the fact that it was actually usable a couple times during competitive Pokemon's history, and I like the lore with Heatmore. I think that's pretty neat. But not everybody feels the same way I do about Durant, so let me know in the comments if you like Durant or if you hate Durant. Apparently there's no middle ground. Number 624 is Spupa. 623 is Crawdaunt. I think Crawdaunt's a fan favorite. 622 is Florges. All of the flowers. Good job, Florges. You got all the flowers. Number 621 is Brion. I think Brion is actually a really good middle stage starter design. Good job, Brion. I think it would have been really easy to make it really ugly, but I think Brion did a good job and actually really nailed it. Number 620 is Toxapex. 619 is Scorbunny. We have another starter in this category. Scorbunny, I think, is a great starter, especially for the later generations. I feel like the Gen 7 starters. Nope, that's not true. Never mind, moving on. 618 is Sliggoo. I love Sliggoo. I love the name, I love the design. I think everything about Sliggoo is great, so I like Sliggoo. 617 is Horsey. I think that if they named a Pokemon Horsey nowadays, fans would flip. I think it only gets away with it because it's a Gen 1 Pokemon. 616 is Wooloo. People love Wooloo. I love Wooloo. Great Pokemon. I think a lot better than Dubwool, personally. 615 is Voltorb. Voltorb, I think, is one of the more iconic pre-evolution Gen 1 Pokemon, just because blowing yourself up is somewhat funny. And at number 614, we have our very first Paradox Pokemon. The worst Paradox Pokemon out there is Iron Boulder. Iron Boulder is not the worst from a competitive angle, but I think from like a potential angle and from an angle of like design aspect, I think it's by far the worst. 613 is Type Null. I think Type Null is a really weird Pokemon in a great way. It's also technically a legendary Pokemon, even though it doesn't feel that way. 612 is Cramorant. Cramorant is not good, but it is so funny. I hope that Cramorant gets something that makes it usable at some point, because like the fact that it goes underwater and comes up with a Pikachu is just, and then it spits the Pikachu out at the opponent is like just incredible. 611 is Bidoof. Now, of course I said that Zigzagoon was the best of the early rat Pokemon, but I think that Bidoof is so iconic and so memorable that even though I personally think Zigzagoon is the best, I don't think you can argue that Bidoof has had the biggest impact on the culture by far and away, actually. So beloved. So even though I like Zigzagoon more, I do also like Bidoof. I'm not saying anything bad about Bidoof. Bidoof outplays his Zigzagoon. 610 is Venonat. Venonat, a Pokemon with a little bit of competitive viability as well. 609 is Poliwhirl. Poliwhirl also has some unique things that it can do, though it's not super good. 608 is Cyndaquil, another first stage starter Pokemon, making it pretty far up the list. 607 is Flaffy, and closing out the category at number 606 is Wingull. There are some Pokemon out there that seem really cool. Maybe you see them in a trailer, maybe you hear about their neat signature ability or signature move or, you know, unique typing, and you're really, really excited until you actually get into your game and you start using it and you realize that you have wasted your excitement points on something that didn't deserve it. The next category on our list is excited until you use it. Kicking us off is Ice-Q at number 605. Ice-Q is so cool. It has a neat signature ability. It has 2 forms. It's not very good. 604 is Slurpuff. Has some stuff it can do, not very good at doing those things. 603 is Cacturne. Cacturne needs like 200 more stats, dude. 602 is Mr. Rime. Mr. Rime gets a signature ability that's actually somewhat useful in certain circumstances, but like is not actually a good Pokemon. 601 is Kecleon. I've tried to use Kecleon before. Not good. Number 600 is Krogunk. 599 is Darumaka. Number 598 is Sigilyph. I think most people don't care about Sigilyph, but I really like it. I feel like those of us who started with Black and White were always seeing Sigilyph on like these weird teams. It has a lot of things that it can do, but it's like, it needs like 100 more stat points. They need to give us Mega Sigilyph. Number 597 is Larvesta. 596 is Dupiter. Girls go to Dupiter. That's not an original joke. Number 595 is Mismagius. They did fix Mismagius by giving us Fluttermane. 594 is Banette. As someone who's won a regional with Banette, you're definitely excited until you start using it, I'll tell you that much. 593 is Calyrex, but only the naked form. I guess he's not really naked. He feels naked without his horse. This is a Pokemon that shouldn't be excited until you use it because you should never use it. Like you should always use the horse form. It's a legendary Pokemon. It is a really funny design. And like, I think the fact that it talks, it's like one of the few Pokemon that talks in the games itself. So I think it's interesting for sure, but it does feel like half a Pokemon. Like this feels like the other half of Sharpedo in a way. 592 is Rapidash. Now base Rapidash is certainly iconic and I really like the appearance in the original, theme song. I think it's really, really memorable, but it is so bad. Like it's just a disappointment competitively. 591 is Rampardos, a fossil Pokemon that I think people have quite fond memories of, but maybe because they don't remember actually how bad it is. Number 590 is Hitmonlee. Hitmonlee is iconic, but not super good. 589 is Bibarel. Bibarel only barely outplaces Bidoof because it is a lot better competitively, although it does suffer a bit because it's not nearly as iconic. 588 is Seadra. 587 is Ralts. 586 is Tangela. 585 is Mischievous. Both Tangela and Mischievous have actually seen a little bit of use in the past, thanks to Eviolite. Mischievous actually got second at the US National Championships back in 2013. 584 is Celebi. 583 is Seviper. Seviper outplacing Zangoose. So on this most illustrious of lists, Seviper wins the battle, the eternal battle. 582 is Cradilly. 581 is Bagon. Bagon? Number 580 is Vespiquen. Did you all know it's spelled Vespiquen, not Vespiqueen? That's one that I don't really understand. Why is it not Vespiqueen? Any knowers? 579 is Drifloon, and Drifloon goes into a subcategory here that we are calling True Peak. These are designs that are just super memorable, super iconic, just really great across the board, and are certainly not in the category of excited until you use it. I think I've skipped over a couple of other True Peak designs. Like I would probably put Ralts in here as well, actually, but I forgot. 578 is Frostlass. Now I will say I'm extremely excited to use Mega Frostlass. We will see if I am excited until I use it there. 577 goes to Tepig. Tepig's a starter Pokemon. I think I'd put this in True Peak. Alongside the next Pokemon on our list, 576 is Chimchar. That's True Peak. 575 is Kirlia. I think Kirlia is also True Peak. Maybe I just like a lot of the Pokemon here. Number 574 is Swadloon. I think Swadloon has a better design than either its pre-evolution or its evolution. Great Pokemon. Swadloon. Number 573 is Golbat. 572 is Galarian Darumaka. Out of all the regional forms, I think the Darmanitan line is one of my favorites. And closing out the category is number 571, Wigglytuff. Wigglytuff actually won a regional championship, so it's actually not really exciting until you use it, but I also wouldn't say that it's True Peak. I think this might just be an outlier. The Pokemon in the next section didn't fit neatly into one specific category, which is okay because they did fit neatly into 3. On the one hand, we have Little Cup Heroes, which are Pokemon that are really good as like pre-evolutions in formats where evolution is banned. The second is I'm Not Like Other Girls. This is my favorite Pokemon, which are the Pokemon that are definitely like viable viable to be someone's favorites, but not the most obvious ones. And the third group of Pokemon in this next category is modes of transportation. Kicking us off, we have a Little Cup hero with Fungus coming in at number 570. 569 goes to Cyclizar. Cyclizar is a mode of transportation. That's not a hot take. 568 is Litwick, a Little Cup hero. 567 goes to Ponyard, and Ponyard is memorable because it is the exact midpoint of our list. We are halfway through every single Pokemon being ranked. Have I talked about your favorite Pokemon yet? I'm gonna, because I'm gonna talk about all of them. 566 is Volibee. Volibee actually is a great Pokemon in Little Cup. 565 is Revavroom. Revavroom canonically is a mode of transportation. People ride it in the game. 564 is Esper. 563 is Aurorus. Now, Aurorus is an I'm not like other girls Pokemon because it is a great Pokemon. It's awesome if it's your favorite, but it's not the most obvious Pokemon to have as a favorite. Personally, I would argue that Aurorus is also a mode of transportation, but I'm not gonna argue with you. 562 is Rowlet. 561 is Lycanroc Midnight Form. 560 Thwackey, number 559 Reboot, and number 558 Fuecoco. Number 557 is Lokix. Now, I think Lokix is an I'm not like other girls Pokemon. It's not the most obvious favorite to have, but I think that people who like Lokix really like Lokix, and I do think there's something cool about it. So I don't know, I think this is a Pokemon that you like if you want a Pokemon that's like not Greninja or Charizard to be your favorite, and you want people to think that you're different, which is fine. That's nothing wrong with that. Number 556 is Scovillain. This is I'm not like other girls because like I really love food. Number 555 is Tinkatuff. 554 goes to Houndstone. I think Houndstone is both I'm not like other girls and a mode of transportation. Houndstone's for like the spooky girls and the people who need a place to go quickly. And actually I know that people think I'm joking, but here's the thing. Houndstone gets Sand Rush, okay? Rush hour, gotta rush to get where I'm going. Mode of transportation. 553 is Hatrem. Number 552 is Rabska. I think Rabska might just be an outlier. I don't know if people really like Rabska. I don't think it's a mode of transportation. Number 551 is Hippowdon. Hippowdon is a mode of transportation. You can ride that for sure. Number 550 is Magmortar. People hate how I say Magmortar. 549 is Grookey. Grookey outperforming Thwackey, even though Thwackey actually is a little bit viable. I lost to one recently. Good job, me. 558 is Orbeetle. And here's the thing, Orbeetle is undeniably a mode of transportation because it's a UFO. And the Gigantamax form is surely like that could definitely like teleport you up and then, you know, take you where it wants to go. Maybe not where you want to go, but I mean, that still counts. That's a mode of transportation. Number 547 is Duosion. I love the whole Duosion line. I think it's an excellent line. Number 546 is Morpeko. We're not differentiating between the forms because it just switches between them naturally. Number 545 is Dugtrio. Dugtrio, this might be an unpopular opinion, but it is a mode of transportation. It's basically a car seat, just not a very comfortable one. Number 544 is Poltergeist, and closing us out at number 543 as our last Little Cup hero is Tandemaus. So before we continue on, I thought this would be a good place to talk about some stats because we're over halfway through the list now. Specifically, how many Pokemon from each generation ended up in the bottom half of the list. Now, something that I think is interesting is that if you look at just the raw numbers of how many Pokemon are in the bottom half of our list here, you can see that Gen 3 is actually doing the worst, followed by Generation 5 with 85, followed by Generation 8, then Generation 1, and so on and so forth. And out of everything, Generation 6 is actually doing the best. However, that's because we're looking at the raw numbers, and you have to keep in mind that the amount of Pokemon in each Pokedex is not equal. And so if we look at the percentage of Pokemon in the bottom half compared to the percentage of Pokemon introduced in that generation, tells a bit of a different story. Generation 6, who was doing the best in terms of the raw numbers, is actually doing the worst overall in terms of the percentages because there just weren't that many Pokemon introduced in Generation 6. Two other things that I think are really interesting here is that Generation 3 is actually having a surprisingly hard time, despite the fact that I think a lot of Generation 3 Pokemon are great, and I like Generation 3 a lot, so that's a little weird. And the generation doing the best is actually not Generation 1, but Generation 9. Now, this is in large part because of power creep, because we're giving Pokemon a score based on how competitively viable they are, and the Generation 9 Pokemon are by far the strongest out of any generation thus far. Maybe I'll have more stats for you later. I don't know. Back to the list. Now, because we're over halfway through the list, it means that the Pokemon remaining are, for the most part, pretty memorable, pretty iconic, right? And so this next chunk of Pokemon I have named, your mom might know these Pokemon. We're not talking about the Pokemon that like everybody knows, right? Like everybody knows Charizard and Pikachu, right? But these are Pokemon that like my mom might know it, your mom might know it, she also might not. These are Pokemon that are kind of memorable a little bit. Starting off with Galarian Farfetch'd. Now to be fair, I don't think my mom literally knows Galarian Farfetch'd, but she definitely knows Farfetch'd. She probably knows Farfetch'd. Number 541 is Florigato. 540 is Jinx. She probably knows Jinx, right? 539 is Lampent. 538 introduces our first subcategory with Oricorio Pau style. Now, Oricorio Pau style, my mom does not know. There's no chance. Your mom doesn't know. Like, nobody's mom knows Oricorio Pau style, right? So that's why this subcategory is called I really want the 5th gym badge. These are Pokemon that you put in your team to beat the 5th or 6th or 4th gym leader in the mid game, and then as soon as you get a better Pokemon, you take it right off. 537 goes to Beware, who I think is both I really want the 5th badge and my mom might know this Pokemon. 536 is Medicham. 535 is Onix. Onix is actually in large part responsible for my personal Pokemon journey. There's a butterfly effect where an anime episode with Onix eventually led to me winning the world championships. Fun fact, my mom knows Onix. 534 is Masharna. I've used it in Draft League. My mom doesn't know it. I really want the 5th gym badge. 533 is Kabuto. 532 is Poliwrath. Poliwrath is also both. 531 is Mightyena. Mightyena is like memorable, but not the most memorable, right? Also, Mightyena probably caps out around the 4th or 5th gym badge. That's probably when you have to take Mightyena off your team because it's just like fallen off, right? 530 is Shiftry. 529 is Turtwig. 528 is Runerigus. Runerigus is unfortunately, I really want the 5th gym badge, although it is one of my favorite Pokemon overall, but it's not, my mom does not know Runerigus. 527 is Kricketune. 526 is a Abomasnow. I think a Abomasnow can get you to the 7th or the 8th gym badge. I think you could finish the game with a Abomasnow. So Abomasnow, you're a bit of an outlier. 525 is Audino. Audino's cute enough that I feel like your mom might know it, right? 524 is Caracosta. Caracosta is not very cute. My mom doesn't know it. I really want the 5th gym badge. 523 is Poplio. 522 is Lurantis. 521 is Swellow. I think Swellow is both my mom might know this Pokemon and I really want the 5th gym badge. Although Swellow with the Guts and Facade combination, if you're able to get it somehow, that's a whole game Pokemon. This Pokemon is really good in Nuzlocke. 520 is Cosmog. Cosmog is so iconic. People know Cosmog. 519 is Dreepy. 518 is Sudowoodo. And as a fun fact, Sudowoodo is actually one of my mom's favorite Pokemon. Like of all time, she loves Sudowoodo. It's a funny Pokemon. She has good taste. Number 517 is Flamigo. Flamigo is not only I want the 5th gym badge, but it's I want to beat Pokemon Scarlet as fast as possible. I hate playing Pokemon Scarlet and I want it to end immediately. Give me Flamigo. 516 is Trico. 515 is Goomy. Everybody knows Goomy, right? 514 is Arbok. 513 is Hisuian Electrode. 512 is Coughing. 511 is Tauros Kanto form. Regular form, original Tauros. Vanilla Tauros. Starting Tauros. Base Tauros. 510 is Tropius. We have a bit of an interlude here at number 509 with Iron Leaves. Iron Leaves is the second worst paradox overall, but it is followed immediately by number 508, Iron Thorns. I think Iron Leaves is a letdown because Virizion is not a very good legendary Pokemon. It would have been really cool to have a neat redesign that made it good, but they didn't. And Iron Thorns, the fact that they made a paradox Pokemon that is just worse than Tyranitar, like taking one of the most iconic and one of the best Pokemon and redesigning it and making it not only worse, but like borderline unusable, it's embarrassing. Like this is like an embarrassing paradox Pokemon. Number 507 is Yanmega. I love Yanmega. I do think it's an I really want the 5th gym badge Pokemon, but you could use it a little longer. Number 506 is Gourgeist. Number 505 is Oranguru. Actually, all of these Pokemon have results in official tournaments. So these are Pokemon that are a little bit better than the 5th gym badge, I think. Maybe there should be a subcategory of I'm not like other girls and I want to enter a tournament. Number 504 is Mr. Mime. Everybody knows Mr. Mime. 503 is Mesprit. Me? Sprit? No. 502 is Beedrill. Bzz. Number 501 is Monferno. Number 500 is Kadabra. That feels like an important milestone. We got 500 Pokemon left. 499 is Torchic. Torchic making it into the top 500 feels right. 498 is regular Vulpix. Keep that in mind. We're gonna talk about that in a second. 497 is Prinplup. 496, Cubone, so memorable. So I can't keep using the word iconic, but they are, it's iconic, right? Very sad, tragic backstory, the skull, oh, my heartstrings even. And closing out the category at number 495 is Alolan Vulpix. And I'm curious, I think that Alolan Vulpix is just so slightly better than regular Vulpix. I think it's an incredible redesign, but I don't know if that's a popular opinion. I might get flamed for this one. Let me know. I really feel like this one could go either way. Now, of course, we just finished a huge chunk of Pokemon that like are really memorable, really iconic, right? We had Cubone, we had Vulpix, we had Iron Leaves, right? And so you'd think that at this point, you know, getting so far into the top, 500 Pokemon, surely every Pokemon remaining is memorable and iconic and And you know, like everybody knows these Pokemon, right? And we just finished a huge chunk where a lot of people do know these Pokemon. However, that's not the case. And so our next category is named, my mom definitely doesn't know these Pokemon. These are Pokemon that have a bit more competitive viability at the cost of some of their more memorability. That's a word, right? I'm pretty sure. Let me give you an example. We can talk about number 494, Pheasantipity. Does your mom know Pheasantipity? Don't lie to me, she doesn't. We were talking about it. I said, do you know Pheasantipity? I'm moving on, I'm not finishing this joke. Number 493, Jerkloki. She doesn't know Jerkloak. 492, Krokorok. Great name. 491, Golurk, mostly memorable because of its name. Number 490 is Duoblade. Doublade? Number 489 is Trevenant. 488, 487, and 486 are the different Oricorio forms that aren't the one that's worse than the rest of them. I should have mentioned this earlier, but yeah, one of the Oricorios is certainly worse than the other three. Now, it is a little tough to rank the Oricorio within themselves, but I'm going to say this. I'm going to say 488, Oricorio Bile style, 487, Oricorio Pom Pom style, and 486, the best one of the Oricorios, is Oricorio Sensu style. That might be a hot take, that might be agreed upon, I don't know. Number 485 is Mudsdale. 484 is Gothorita. 483 is Sprigatito. Sprigatito is an outlier. People know Sprigatito, right? Great name, great Pokemon, super cute. People know Sprigatito. My mom might know Sprigatito. Number 482 is Brambleghast. Brambleghast is a really cool Pokemon. We talked about the signature ability earlier. And like I said, it was almost a world where it won the World Championships. There was some unfortunate disconnects in either top 16 or top 8 of the World Championships that like could have affected the outcome. So there might be a timeline where Brambleghast wins the World Championship, which is crazy because it's not commonly thought to be a very good Pokemon. 481 is Stoutland. I love Stoutland. I think that this is one of the like greatest Pokemon from Generation 5. And I actually think it's surprising that it doesn't get more love. Like I feel like people don't care about Stoutland, but it's this big fluffy dog. I actually played against one of the finals of US Nationals in 2011 and it clicked Thunder Wave like 8 times and just paralyzed all my Pokemon. And yet I still love this Pokemon. That's how good it is. 480 is Garbodor. Garbodor I think is partially memorable because of the fact that it's like just this ugly trash bag Pokemon. So maybe my mom doesn't know Garbodor. Does your mom know Garbodor? There's no way. 479 is Cetitan. 478 is Bastiodon, another fossil and one of the more beloved fossils. Also, I'll say it, one of the scariest Pokemon I've ever seen in my entire life. Like, I'd rather face against Ultra Necrozma than Bastiodon. This Pokemon is a nightmare to play against. It is just, like, they need to nerf this Pokemon. It needs like 300 fewer stats. Like, this thing is too good. Number 477 is Glastrier. Pretty good, but not as good as when, you know, the weird big head guy gets on it. 476 is Sirfetch'd. Noble, not memorable. 475 is Aggron. Diana Aggron is a famous person, and I knew this without looking it up or getting told anything about it. Moving on. 474 is Electivire. Electivire actually I think is an outlier. I think my mom might know this Pokemon. Okay, I don't know if my mom does, but somebody's mom knows Electivire. Number 473 is Hisuian Zorua. This is another example of a redesign I think enhancing the base form a lot. Hisuian Zorua is just a really cool Pokemon. 472 is another starter Pokemon with Chesnaught. Chesnaught doing pretty well, especially given that its pre-evolution was the worst starter Pokemon on the entire list, and its base form didn't do that well either. I think top 500 is actually pretty good for Chesnaught, given how it was looking earlier. 471 is Galarian Slowking. Not as great as the original, but still a pretty good redesign. 470 is Drampa. I love Drampa's Pokedex entry that says it will burn down the houses of bullies. That's memorable. And closing out the category at number 469, we have Poltegeist. I have to complain about the naming convention of Poltegeist, okay? Because the baby form is Sinistea, and then it evolves into Poltegeist, right? So, you know, that's fair. Like, I got no problem with that, right? But then they make a new line and they flip the naming convention. Baby form is Poltegeist and the evolved form is Sinistcha. So it's reversed. Very confusing. Now, some Pokemon are memorable, but they're memorable in the way that, like, you might have seen them on a TV show you watched 10 years ago, not in the way that, like, oh, I see them in the movies all the time. So our next category of Pokemon, although brief, is called Sealist Celebs. Starting us off, we have Honchkrow at number 468. People know Honchkrow, but like, I don't know how many pictures Honchkrow's getting stopped to ask for, you know? 467 is Omanite. Omanite was a huge celebrity after, you know, the viral debut of Twitch Plays Pokemon, but since then it's been hard for it to get some work. 466 is Sceptile. Sceptile might be a B-list celebrity, to be honest. 465 is Marshtomp. 464 is Feebas. We have some nice Gen 3 appearances here, don't we? 463 is Azelf. Now, Azelf is a legendary, but it's not like the most popular or most famous legendary. People will recognize it, but like, I don't know if like kids are super excited to get an autograph from Azelf. 462 is Furret. Furret is incredible, but it's so bad that like, it is cool, but it's not good. And so it's in this kind of like weird middle ground space. I think Furret does quite well given how bad its viability is. Number 461 is Luxray, one of the Pokemon on every playthrough of every Generation 4 team. 460 is Jigglypuff. Jigglypuff is canonically in universe a C-list celebrity, I'm pretty sure. It even does some cameo work in games like Super Smash Bros. 459 is Rhyhorn. Now, Rhyhorn's big brother Rhydon is a bit of an A-list celebrity, or at least a B-list, because it's the first Pokemon ever made. Rhyhorn trying to live off the benefit of that, kind of trying to get a little nepotism favor here, huh? And this is a short category, so closing us out is number 458, Manaphy. Was it Manaphy or Fion in that Pokemon Ranger mission? I don't remember, but like, that's what I think of when I think of Manaphy. It also has a movie. It has a movie, but it hasn't had a movie in many years. We just went through some pretty iconic and memorable Pokemon, but the next Pokemon I would say are not so memorable and they're not so famous. They're certainly not C-list celebrities. I would classify these Pokemon as weirdos, but weirdos affectionately. Kicking us off at number 457 is Yukidogi. This is a weirdo. 456, again, a weirdo, Enamorous incarnate form. It's cool that they made a fourth genie, but it's not cool that it sucks. 455 is Weirdeer, and weird is literally in the name. 454 is Iron Moth, another Paradox Pokemon, and you might have noticed that every Paradox Pokemon thus far that is on the list that's appeared is a future Paradox. I don't think it's a hot take to say that the future designs are a lot worse than the past designs, and the fact that they're all just like iron whatever, I don't hate them, but it's certainly not as cool as the past ones. 453 is Hisuian Braviary. 452 is Inteleon, another starter Pokemon, but a weird one, right? Like, it's weird to have guns in Pokemon. Inteleon just shoots people. Speaking of starters, 451 is Braixen. Braixen isn't really a weirdo, but like weirdos like Braixen, so I'm gonna move on. I'm not saying if you like Braixen, you are a weirdo, but if you are a weirdo, you might like Braixen. I'm moving on. I'm just digging a hole here. Number 450, and speaking of guns, we have Clawitzer. I love Clawitzer. I keep trying to make it work, but it's always bad. It's just that the signature ability is so cool. 449 is Diancie. Diancie is a bit of a strange legendary Pokemon in that it doesn't even really feel like a legendary. I do think Mega Diancie has a great design. 448 is Dino. I would say Dino isn't really a weirdo, but it is a Pokemon that's a pre-evolution that has a great design, so it's earned a spot pretty high up here on the list. 447 is Electros. I gotta talk about Electros. They took away his swagger. Have I already talked about this? Like, Electros in Gen 5 was so cool. It looked so sick. Can we show the Gen 5 sprite? That's when Electros came out. When I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, this Pokemon is goated. It is really, really, really cool. And then they made it into a Windsock. Just a sock, actually. They turned it into a sock. I don't know. I'm really excited about Mega Electros because it gives him a chance to get some of his swagger back. But yeah, they really gutted this Mon. 446 is Litten, our first mention of the Incineroar line here at number 446. 445 is Kilowattrel. Pretty high performance from Kilowattrel, and that's in part because it's pretty good competitively. Number 444 is Bellibolt. I think Bellibolt has an incredible design. I love the Pokemon that are goofy, and actually Bellibolt, like there were some viable strategies built around it. 443 is Cleavor. Cleavors are pretty cool, like Scyther Evolution, but it's certainly a weirdo. We have a lot of Hisuian Pokemon in this chunk, don't we? 442 is another legendary Pokemon with Hoopa Unbound. No one is saying that this Pokemon is normal. 441 is Togetic. 440 goes to Heracross. 439 is Skarmory. Skarmory actually doing quite well here, despite the fact that it's not super good in double battles. That being said, I'm filming this before I've used Mega Skarmory. Maybe it will get some redemption. Number 438 is Altaria. 437 goes to Rabombi. 436 is Clodsire. Clodsire, I think, is definitely indicative of the name of the category, right? It's a weird Pokemon, but it's so lovely. I love Clodsire. And closing out the category, we do actually have an outlier because this Pokemon is not a weirdo, but I am affectionate about it. Number 435 goes to Spheal. I think Spheal is one of the single most iconic Pokemon of all time. The Pokemon are just getting better and better, and we have a chunk of Pokemon that I can only describe as trying to be cool and succeeding. For example, number 434, Pecharunt. Pikarunt, Pecharunt. I don't even particularly like Pecharunt, but I cannot deny that it is a really cool Pokemon. Number 433 is Alolan Meowth, which I think is one of the first regional forms that they ever revealed officially, like in a trailer. 432 is Snivy, and 431 is Dewott. So we have two starter Pokemon that I think are both cool Pokemon. Like they're kind of cute, but I think they're more cool than cute. 430 is Tauros Blaze Breed Paldean form. 429 is Centiskorch. I think that bug types in general are a little bit harder to make cool, and I think Centiskorch really succeeds. I also really like the Gigantamax form. I would even say it might be the single best Gigantamax form from a design perspective. 428 is Pidgeot. I think Pidgeot doesn't seem as cool because like we're used to it and we're desensitized to it, but I do think it, like as a kid, I thought it was sick. Like a big old bird that you can fly around on. 427 is Vileplume. It's cooler if it has substitutes. 426 is Zygarde 10% form. I have a hot take. I think that Zygarde 10% might be cooler than any of the other Zygarde forms. Like, I know that complete form is technically cooler, but like, I think there's something neat about 10% form. I don't know, maybe that's a hot take. 425 introduces a subcategory with Purloin, which is I would leave a toddler with this Pokemon. 424 is Magneton. That's a Pokemon that's trying to be cool and succeeding. I know it's just magnets, but it's cool magnets. Maybe magnets are just cool. We have a couple of Pokemon that I would leave a toddler with here, with number 423 Meganium, 422 Mareep, and 421 Blossom. 420 is Floatzel, and 419 is Gibel. Gibel? Oh, people are gonna be mad if I say Gibel. I'll call it Gibel. I'm pretty sure it's Gibel though. Oh wait, no, they're mad because they think it should be Gibble, like nibble. But it's Gibel or Gibel. A couple more safe Pokemon coming up here. We have Munchlax at number 418. 417, I have Tangrowth. I think I would leave a toddler with Tangrowth. It seems very gentle to me. It can use sleep powder if the baby cries, although I don't imagine that's good for a baby's immune system. So maybe I wouldn't leave a toddler with Tangrowth. 416 is Oshawott. 415 is Mienfoo. 414 is Hisuian Sliggoo. I think this is an ideal partner for a toddler because like it's squishy and I feel like toddlers like to squeeze things, but also it has a hard shell so that it wouldn't get hurt. I would leave a toddler with Hisuian Sliggoo, but maybe I shouldn't. 413 is Togedemaru. I know it seems a little spiky, but I do think it's like gentle enough that you could leave a toddler with Togedemaru. 412 is Wobbuffet. I think Wobbuffet would be a great babysitter because number one, it would never let the baby out of its sights with Shadow Tag. And number two, Wobbuffet actually can't do any damage. It could even charm the babby. Now we're back to a big chunk of Pokemon that are trying to be cool and succeeding, including Iron Crown at number 411, Absol at number 410. I mean, this is one of the coolest Pokemon ever. I would even say that this might be the Shadow the Hedgehog of Pokemon. People are gonna be mad about that, I think. 409 is Kabutops, another Pokemon that is undeniably sick. 408 is Zeraora. I don't like Zeraora, but it is cool. 407 is Leaveney. 406 is Zorua. Zorua outplaces Hisuian Zorua because even though I think the design is better on the Hisuian form, I do think that the original is somewhat iconic. 405 is Decidueye. I don't think Decidueye is cool because like it sucks, but I think that if I only looked at the design, then I would think it was cool. 404 is Iron Jugulus, another Paradox Pokemon, and we still haven't had, I don't think we've had a past Paradox Pokemon yet. The future is suffering. 403 is Malamar. I already thought Malamar was cool, but I think especially given the Mega form, now it's undeniably cool. However, I would not leave a toddler with him. 402 is Steelix. I think Mega Steelix is awesome. That's one of my favorite Mega evolutions, period. 401 is Wooper. I think Wooper is both trying to be cool and succeeding. Even though it's not like traditionally cool, I think the fact that it's so silly looking is cool in its own way. And of course, I would leave a toddler with Wooper. Number 400 is Zweilous. Zweilous is a pretty cool Pokemon that actually has seen a little use in the past when people used Hustle, Outrage, Choice Band Zweilous, fun fact. We have another legendary at 399 at Kyurem. That made it sound like I was like tagging him in a Twitter post at Kyurem. 398 is Quaquaval. I think I would leave a toddler with Quaquaval, but I think it's also cool in its own way. 397 is Original Persian. 396 is Galarian Slowbro. I would leave a toddler with Galarian Slowbro, although he's a poison type, so maybe I shouldn't. He might be an outlier. 395 is Hisuian Decidueye. It's marginally better than the original Decidueye, but not by that much. 394 is Cloyster. 393 is Electrode. I would not leave a toddler with Electrode. No siree. 392 is the Aqua form of Tauros, Paldean form, which is the final Paldean Tauros. Aqua form places the highest here, in part because it's the best competitively. 391 is Meowstic Male. It feels like it's been a while since we talked about Meowstic Female. I think there's a pretty big gap there. The male version is a lot better. 390 is Galarian Zapdos. I think it's a really cool redesign of a classic Pokemon, and I think it's trying to be cool and succeeding. 389 is Dratini. I would leave a toddler with Dratini for sure. 388 is Salazzle. 387 is Cleffa. I would leave a toddler with Cleffa. 386 is Shelgon. I think Shelgon is cool in its own way. I think Shelgon's like little story arc where it wants to fly is cool. 385 is Seismitoad. I don't think that Seismitoad is trying to be cool, and if it is, I don't think it's succeeding, but I also wouldn't leave a toddler with it. So I think Seismitoad is an outlier. 384 is Scolipede. I'm quite excited about Mega Scolipede. I'm really curious to see how good that Pokemon is. 383 is Haxorus. Haxorus is certainly trying to be cool, and it's succeeding, and it's actually quite good. It got second at the World Championships back in 2011. Struggles nowadays, but like listen, a result's a result. 382 is Dragargle. Dragargle's another Pokemon that I think is trying to be cool, and I think it is succeeding. And I like that the Mega Dragargle looks like the flying spaghetti monster. I'm quite curious to see how good this Pokemon is. 381 is Hawlucha, another Pokemon getting a new Mega Evolution that I'm really curious to see how it is. 380 is Goodra. Goodra's iconic. I like Goodra a lot. I think Goodra's trying to be cool in its own way. I think the Goodra is cool. Maybe it's not trying, but I think it is cool, and I would leave a toddler with Goodra. 379 is Klefki. Klefki is the ideal Pokemon to leave a toddler with because it can jingle the keys and keep them entertained. 378 is Lycanroc Dusk form. 377 is Alakazam. And closing out the category, we have 2 Pokemon I would leave a toddler with. First of all, we have Slowpoke at 376, and of course, classic babysitting Pokemon at 375, we have Wailord. Our next category has only 1 Pokemon. At number 374, in the Snom category, we have Snom. Some Pokemon's impacts cannot be denied, and by impacts I mean specifically the impacts on the wallets of the Pokemon Company and Big Pikachu himself. That's why I'm calling this next category, I've made the Pokemon Company so much money. Also, if you're wondering about the continuity error and the fact that I am now wearing glasses, it's because it turns out there's a lot more Pokemon than I expected, and this is taking a long time to record, so I'm doing it over the course of a week. This is day 4. Number 373 is Rotom, specifically the ghost form, the original form. Rotom's cell phone for me is not in this list. 372 is Appleton. There's a huge Appleton plush out there that I bet has made thousands and thousands of dollars to the Pokemon Company. Number 371 is Enamorous Therian. 370 is Slitherwing. Slitherwing is a surprising Pokemon, but I think that it's quite popular actually, especially for merch. 369 is Vikavolt. 368 is Cottony. I've seen so many Cottony plushies at tournaments. People love this Pokemon. 367 is Lopunny. It belongs on this part of the list, unfortunately for sure. 366 is Omastar. 365 is Growlithe Hisuian form. 364 is Ghastly. Ghastly is certainly a moneymaker for Pokemon. 363 is Feraligatr. Feraligatr is about to make the Pokemon Company some more money thanks to its new Mega. 362 is Nidoqueen. 361 is Farfetch'd. Farfetch'd is another Pokemon where I definitely feel like I've seen more plushies of it than you would expect. 360 is special because 360 is Alolan Muck, which I think is our first really good competitive Pokemon on the list. There have been Pokemon that have been usable for sure before this, but I feel like Muck Alolan form is the first one where it was actually like a main meta threat at one point. Speaking of Pokemon that have been good before, number 359 is Marowak regular form, who actually got top 8 at World Championships in 2013. 358 is Starmie. Starmie is also about to make some more money for the Pokemon Company. 357 is Shuckle. I think Shuckle is great. I think it's funny that it's so memorable because you wouldn't think that a Pokemon that can't really do any damage and is just there to kind of look silly and tank hits would be thought to be super good, but people love Shuckle. Everybody loves Shuckle. I don't even know, it's kind of just been a fact for as long as I can remember. I don't even know why people love Shuckle so much. They just do. And the messed up thing is that I love Shuckle, and I don't even know why I love Shuckle. 356 is Walrein. Walrein is one of my original favorite Pokemon back from when I was a kid. I had the Walrein EX card, and I tried to build this Walrein EX deck. It was super bad. 355 is Mudkip. I wonder which starter Pokemon outside of Kanto has made the Pokemon Company the most money. It could be Mudkip. I think it might be Mudkip. Let me know in the comments down below, and also subscribe. 354 is Squirtle, speaking of Kanto starters, and it was a tight one, but 353 is Bulbasaur. This is just personal preference between which starter you like more. I like Bulbasaur a little bit more than Squirtle, but they're almost equivalent otherwise. I have been waiting to name this next category of Pokemon for the entire duration of our list thus far, because this is a very special category and I only get to use it once. And when I was looking at the Pokemon coming up on our list, I knew that it had to be this section. I would like to introduce you to Potential Man. These are Pokemon that you always think are gonna work out and they just never do. They have so much potential and they never realize it. Kicking us off with number 352 is Hisuian Samurott. The amount of times I have put Hisuian Samurott on a team for one battle and then taking it off is more than 0 and also more than 1. And also more than 2. 351 is Hisuian Goodra. Love the design. Potential Man Mon. Potential Mon? Potential Mon. 350 is Braviary. 349 is Tornadus Therian. You would think that a new form of Tornadus would be good, but you would be wrong, unless you're playing singles draft league, in which case Tornadus is good. 348 is Vanillux. It is a shame that at one point Vanillux was actually a usable Pokemon, but in all normal circumstances, it's Potential Man. 347 is Galvantula. 346 is Meloetta Aria form. Is that the fighting one or the regular one? I don't even know. 345 is Selvali. I almost brought Selvali to the World Championships and I tried a lot of different memories and they're all disappointing. You have unlimited types, but you have no real reason to use any of them. 344 is Guzzlord. Fun fact, this is the first Ultra Beast on the list who is not like a baby Pokemon. I like Guzzlord from a design angle, but it's not very good, unfortunately. You would think that having that big of a mouth would do something, but it doesn't do anything. 343 is Naganadel, just barely better than Guzzlord. It's so fast, but it's such a waste of time. 342 is Melmetal. This Pokemon would be really good if it was ever tournament legal. 341 is Frostmoth. Frostmoth has so much going for it. It has a super broken ability and it gets one of the best moves in the entire game with Quiver Dance. And yet every time you try and use this Pokemon, it is just a total letdown. Turns out having maybe the single worst typing in the entire game doesn't do you any favors. 340 is Duraludon. Duraludon is so bad that even when you give it the Eviolite, it's still not worth using. And I say that as somebody who worked on a team that eventually won a tournament with Duraludon. My friend Dr. Aaron Trailer won a tournament with Duraludon, and now I look back and I was like, how is that even possible? Duraludon was not potential ban for a minute, but I think that was more of an Aaron Trailer difference than a Duraludon difference. 339 is Uxie. It's a legendary, but they've made a Pokemon that's basically just worse Cresselia. This is basically just upgraded Chimecho, and it's not very good. And last but not least, we have Spiritomb at 338. You would think that a Pokemon that had no weaknesses for many years would be good at some point, but you would be wrong. Spiritomb is really disappointing because there are things that it can do, but it doesn't do enough of those things well to actually justify using it. I just like the design a lot. I think that it is really iconic and super memorable. And for some reason, I feel like people remember Spiritomb as the Pokemon with no weaknesses, even though Sableye came first, but people remember Spiritomb for some reason, which I think speaks to how iconic it is. But it's not iconic for its competitive prowess. Closing out the category, we have two outliers at number 337. We have Psyduck. That's not potential man, that's just my guy. And last but certainly not least, at number 336, we have Drifblim. Drifblim has really great lore and also is super cute and is certainly not a potential man. Who knows? We have a brief section of Pokemon coming up that I am pleased to declare have beat the potential man allegations. Starting with Zygarde Complete. This Pokemon's not as good as you would think it would be. I'm very curious to see how Mega Zygarde is, but it's certainly not potential man. It has tournament results. Spectrier, number 334. Another Pokemon that in the right context can do something. Mostly if the context is getting a guy on the horse. 333 is Toxicroak, which is actually a world champion, fun fact. 332 is Espathra, 331 is Orthworm, number 330 is Clefable, and 329 is Parasect. Now Parasect actually has a top 8 at the World Championships, in part because it was quite strong into Kyogre back in 2010. Last but not least, closing out the category, we have number 328, Machamp, who is also a world champion, albeit in the seniors division. Now at this point, I'm sure that many of you are quite upset with where some of your favorite Pokemon have been put. But there are some Pokemon on this list that I realized if we put them any lower, people would be mad. And also we don't want to put them any lower because they're great, which is the name of this category. Coming in at number 327, we have Articuno's Galarian form. 326 is Arctozolt. 325 is Midday Lycanroc. 324 is Cobalion, another legendary Pokemon. It's followed immediately by its brother, sister, sibling. 323, Virizion. 322 is Slacking. I still think it's Slaking, but I'm gonna call it Slacking so I don't get angry messages. 321 is Glaceon. This is our first evolution on the list, and I think it's probably telling that the fact that we've gone through almost 800 Pokemon at this point, and yet the first evolution shows up here in the low 300s, just speaks to how good the evolutions are. 320 is Gliscor. 319 is Samurott. 318 is Keldio's ordinary form. Keldio's really cool. It's a shame that it was never tournament legal for official tournaments, because I think it's actually a lot more interesting than most of the other Swords of Justice, but it's never allowed. And then they gave us Urshifu, which took the water and fighting typing and just made it evil. So I don't know, maybe it's better that Keldeo wasn't allowed. Keldio's the timeline we live in if we have the good Urshifu. It's the good water fighting type, and then Urshifu is a mythical. 317 is Wishiwashi schooling form. Actually, I think it's just Wishiwashi total. Wait, did we rate Wishiwashi independently? Hang on, I gotta check. Okay, I've got confirmation here. It's just one Wishiwashi. All of the Wishiwashi fishes, Wishiwashi fishy-fashy, they all go here. Number 316 is Blacephalon, another Ultra Beast. Number 315 is Toxtricity low-key form, and it's followed by number 314, Toxtricity amped form. I thought it was called pumped up, but it's amped. The differences between the two are basically non-existent. They have very slight move pool changes that, in my opinion, makes amped slightly better. 313 is Doxbun. I would go to war for Doxbun. I love this Pokemon. 312 is Arboliva. Are you a believer in subscribing to the channel? By the time this video is over, I'm gonna lose 100 subscribers, I swear. 311 is Toadschool. They've done a great job with some of the newer designs, in my opinion, and Toadschool is one of the best. In design alone, I think Toadschool is one of the best. 310 is Great Tusk. Great Tusk is another Paradox Pokemon, and actually a pretty memorable one at that, so it does pretty well here. 309 is Sneasel. 308 is Leafeon, outplacing Glaceon by just a couple points. 307 is Typhlosion, a very beloved starter. 306 is Charmander. Charmander outplacing both Bulbasaur and Squirtle by a little bit, but by enough that feels reasonable. I think it's probably undeniable that Charmander is the most iconic of the 3 original starters, so it's not surprising that it does just barely better here. 305 is Sandy Shocks, another Paradox Pokemon. 304 is Marshadow. I feel like Marshadow is cool, but I don't think that I get it personally, but I do think it's cool. I think its signature Z move or signature move, the one that steals stat boost, I think that's pretty sick. 303 is Archeops. I think Archeops benefits from the fact that like because it's designed to be so terrible, it's actually quite memorable. I said that as if it was a question, but it was just a statement. Forgive me. 302 is Hariyama. 301 is Meryl. Meryl, great Pokemon. Number 300 is Golduck. And the fun fact that I have for you about Golduck is that Golduck was actually a top metagame threat for like almost an entire year. It performed extremely well at a number of international tournaments because it was like the only good Swift Swim user back when Water Z move was super broken. 299 is Pichu. Now Pichu I would put in a subcategory here that we're calling real icons. There's a couple Pokemon that we've already covered that are real icons, and there's a couple more coming up. 298 is Jabite. 297 is Chinchino. 296 is Meowth. Meowth is another real icon here. 295, Magikarp, total icon. Great Pokemon. 294 is Trapinch, great Pokemon. People, I think if we put Trapinch like below top 300, I'd be getting a number of angry, I don't think I'd get angry messages. I think people would start writing me letters at that point. And closing out the category at 293, we have, of course, Piplup. I say of course when there's still 300 Pokemon left, but it's of course to me because I can see the list. Piplup is actually the single highest ranked first stage starter, outplacing Charmander. Maybe that's a hot take, but it is my hot take. There's a meaningful difference between the Pokemon in this category and the ones that come before it in two ways. There's actually two categories in this next chunk of Pokemon. The first we're calling in it to win it, parentheses, sometimes, meaning the Pokemon before this, for the most part, if they were used competitively, they were Pokemon that you might expect to see, but you wouldn't really expect to win. This next chunk of Pokemon is Pokemon that could win, but like, it's not really what you expect of them, but you're not shocked when you do see it. The other category here is people would commit felonies for these Pokemon. Kicking us off at number 292 is Noivern. 291 is Torracat. Torracat actually has a top 8 placement, maybe even a better placement in an official tournament, fun fact. 290 is Excelgor, who actually won an international championship back in 2019. 289 is Iron Treads, who almost won an international championship last year, but I stopped it. 288 is Sarina. I think Sarina is both. 287 is Ampharos. 286 is Torterra. Also, as I look through this section of the list, I notice we have a lot of starter and legendary Pokemon in this specific chunk. Starter Pokemon and legendary Pokemon tend to be more iconic across the board. And I would say at this point in the list, the starters and legendaries here are good, but they're not great. Like this is kind of like the middle ground of starters and legendaries. The bad ones we've already passed and the really good ones are up ahead. I feel like here are the ones that are good, but not great, for the most part. Anyway, moving on, we have number 285, which is Scraggy. Love Scraggy. 284 is Growlithe. 283 is Charmeleon. 282 is Wartortle. Charmeleon, Wartortle. Somebody's gonna get that reference. 281 is Bisharp. Bisharp actually was a competitive Pokemon even before Kingambit came out. Now it's not really because Kingambit pretty much makes it obsolete. 280 is Alolan Raichu, who I think actually fits both of our categories. 279 is Victory Bell. Victory Bell might be in it to win it now that it has a new Mega. 278 is Weezing. Weezing is definitely both. I feel like I might commit a felony for Weezing. 277 is Moltres. I think that's our first of the Kanto legendary birds. I don't think we've gotten Articuno yet. 276 is Dragonair. 275 is Metang. Metang? Is that even a difference? I don't know. Number 274 is Regice. 273 is Liepard. I almost won a tournament with Liepard before, fun fact. It's a fun Pokemon. 272 is Zekrom. Zekrom might be neither. It's not very good. 271 is Keldeo Resolute form. Now, as far as I'm aware, there's basically no differences between the Keldeo forms except like one of them looks nicer, but it does look a lot nicer, so this Keldeo does better. Number 270 is Delphox. I'm not gonna make a comment on that one. 269 is Golisopod. Golisopod, I think, is both. People love the weird bug. This is what I've learned playing Pokemon. 268 is Reuniclus. Reuniclus is both for me personally. This is one of my all-time favorite Pokemon. I wish I had got the chance to use it more. 267 is Solgaleo. 266 is Staraptor. 265 is Pheromosa. 264 is Togepi. People would certainly commit crimes for Togepi, for sure. 263 is Kanto Ninetales. 262 is Slowking. 261 is Quagsire. 260 is Zoroark. I'm really glad they made Hisuian Zoroark, but I can't deny that the original is pretty iconic. 259 is Buzzwole. I think Buzzwole might be the funniest Ultra Beast. 258 is Manectric. Manectric Mega was actually used a fair bit and almost won the World Championships. but I stopped it. 257 is Rhyperior. 256 is Tentacruel. 255 is Mew. Mew being one of the most iconic and memorable legendary Pokemon. I know I said that some of the legendary Pokemon in this category were like mid, and I want to clarify, I don't feel that way about Mew. I think Mew is excellent. 254 is Blissey. Generation 4 and Generation 5 singles players would commit felonies for Blissey. 253 is Roserade. I thought they were going to give Roserade a Mega. I'm kind of surprised that it didn't get one. 252 is a special case. It's Grovyle, and Grovyle is interesting because Grovyle is not only a starter Pokemon, but it actually canonically has committed crimes/felonies. Again, Mystery Dungeon. If you haven't played it, genuinely play it. Like, this is not part of the video, but like, it's my favorite Pokemon game ever. Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, Explorers of Sky/Time/Darkness. Incredible. Like, you will not regret it. It is so good. 251 is Flareon, another evolution. And closing out our category at number 250 is the highest placing middle stage starter Pokemon, Ivysaur. It is worth noting that a big part of the reason why Ivysaur places this high is because out of most of the middle stage starters, it is certainly one of the most viable because chlorophyll, Eviolite, sleep powder is a real thing. And of course, it's super iconic and has a great design as well. So it ends up doing pretty well because it does good in all of the categories, especially compared to Charmeleon and Wartortle, who aren't nearly as viable. Guys, there's so many Pokemon. There's so many Pokemon. I'm on day 4 of this, and I keep trying to say the Pokemon are getting stronger, but like of course the Pokemon are getting stronger. We're getting higher up the list. Next category is called You Really Can Win With Your Favorites. And what I mean by that is that if this is your favorite Pokemon, you could actually win with it. If your favorite Pokemon was before this point, I hope it was Alolan Muck, or else you're in a lot of trouble. We also have a subcategory here, which is I'm 8 years old and this is sick as hell. You'll know those when we get to them. Anyway, number 249 is Gastrodon Westsea. I am an EC fan. 248 is Riolu. 247, 8-year-olds, brace yourself. It is Kyurem, Black Kyurem, Form Kyurem. Moving on. 246 is Magearna. 245 is Alchemy, and I'm not ranking the individual cream flavors of the Alchemy, and I will not apologize for that. 244 is Hydrapple. I think Hydrapple's both. I'm 8 years old, and I love the dragon coming out of my worm, and also you really can win with Hydrapple. Cool Pokemon. It'll get a win at some point. It hasn't yet, but it will. It's only because it's new. 243 is Emboar. Fun fact, I won my first tournament ever with Emboar. So yeah, I'm 8 years old and I'm winning with my favorites. 242 was on that same team. It's Cofagrigus. I also won a tournament, that same tournament, in fact, Cofagrigus, and Nationals with Cofagrigus. One of my all-time favorites. 241 is Weavile. Weavile gets to be both. Number 240 is Genesect, aka Dennis. Now, some of you might not know why Genesect is Dennis, which is why, Zane, can you actually explain this? Because I think you explained it to me.
Yeah, so back when Black and White came out, Black and White had a really unique release cycle because a lot of stuff got leaked, and then also the games came out in Japan beforehand, and so we were calling all the Pokemon by their Japanese names.
Wait, can I just jump in? It was crazy. Like, the games came out in Japan. Imagine Scarlet and Violet comes out in Japan like 6 months before they come to the US. And so, like, people are like watching online, but nobody knows the English translations. Like, I still know that Hydreigon is Sazandora, and
Sazandora, and Conkeldurr was Amarot was Daikenki. Yeah, I have all these in my name. So we called all of them by their Japanese names, but not Genesect. Genesect was Dennis, and that's because there was this video that went around, and it was, I guess, someone like hacked in Genesect, and they were fighting it in a cave. They just encounter this Genesect with their like level 7 Mareep or whatever, and there's this music playing in the background that we would later learn was Ghetsis' theme song, and they can say it's Ghetsis' theme song, but listen to this and tell me they're not saying Dennis. So Ghetsis is Dennis, but also to me, Genesect is forever.
Genesect is Dennis.
He's Dennis.
239 is Bronzong. I think part of the reason I named this category this is because a lot of the Pokemon that I have personally won tournaments with are in this category. Bronzong was on my World Championships winning team. 238 is Camerupt. 237 is Magnezone. I brought Magnezone to a tournament. Celesteela was not very happy with me. 236 is Lilligant, followed narrowly, might I add, by 235 Hisuian Lilligant. I think they did a good job with Lilligant. I recently met somebody who like doesn't know much about Pokemon but really likes Lilligant, and I think that's actually a pretty strong endorsement for a Generation 5 Pokemon. 234 is Crocodile. Crocodile actually is a world champion, so if it's your favorite, congratulations. I think there's a fun fact about Crocodile. I think it's the only Pokemon to have the title the world champion. Like, they've distributed other world champions mons, but they've never given it the special like ribbon that says the world champion. So I think it's the only one. I might be wrong about that. 233 is Darmanitan. Darmanitan I think could have been a legendary Pokemon if they like tweaked it a little bit. I think it's a really cool Pokemon. 232 is Iron Valiant. Valiant? Okay, I probably shouldn't be saying this, but I went to do a video video with the Pokemon Company like a year and a half ago at this point, and I had to re-record because I kept saying Iron Valiant wrong, and I don't know why it was wrong, but I wasn't saying it the right way. 231 is Rhydon. Rhydon the subscribe button, baby. Also the first Pokemon ever. Fun fact, you could be the first subscriber ever if you build a time machine. 230 is Hisuian Typhlosion. Hisuian Typhlosion I think is a really good way of keeping like a Pokemon true to its original design and just improving it competitively. I think it's pretty sick. 229 is Deoxys Defense Form. When I was 8 years old, I'm pretty sure I thought Deoxys was the coolest Pokemon ever, which is good because the next Pokemon is also Deoxys. At number 228, it's Deoxys Normal for me. 227 is Mamoswine. Mamoswine is both. It's a world champion, and I'm 8 years old, and I think the big pig is pretty good. Number 226 is Fan Rotom. The worst of all the appliance Rotoms, but it is pretty iconic for Air Balloon, Levitate, Terraflying. Is there anything else I'm missing? Gravity. 225 is Victini. 224 is Cinderace or Cinderace. I'm never sure which pronunciation is correct. 223 is Alolan Executor. It's not as good as the original, but it's still pretty great. It's real funny. 222 is Skeledirge. 221 is Garganackle, aka Minecraft Donkey Kong. Okay. 220 is Ceruledge. They need to be careful when they're designing a Pokemon to look cool, because if it looks too cool, it almost is like too try hard. I think Ceruledge really hits the sweet spot. Just the right amount of cool, which is super cool. 219 is Galarian Weezing. Now, Galarian Weezing is interesting because it's just about as viable as regular Weezing, but it outperforms it because it has a cool hat. 218 is Alolan Persian. 217 is Rotom Frost. It's barely better than Rotom Fan, in part because I'd rather have a freezer than a fan, because if you open the freezer, you get the cool air, but if you put the food in the fan, then moving on. 216 is Basculesian Female. It has different stats than Basculesian Male, so it's ranked differently. 215 is Jigglypuff. Jigglypuff might still be in the channel banner from like 6 years ago. I gotta update that. And closing out the category at number 214 is Sableye. Sableye is one of those Pokemon that's always good, but rarely great, but it is cool that it's always good. You know, I made that category earlier where I said they've made the Pokemon Company so much money. This next category is in a similar vein. This category is named I Make YouTube Shorts When They Win. These are Pokemon that certainly can win, but when they do win, it's still kind of memorable, and so they end up on my YouTube channel in short form content. For example, number 213 is Thundurus Therian. Thundurus Therian is like certainly a good Pokemon, has good stats, but it actually very rarely wins or is even used. That's an example of what I'm talking about. 212 is Overqwil. I like Overqwil a lot. I think they did a good job of giving an evolution to a very iconic design. 211 is Xurkitree. Xurkitree was good for a little bit, but most of the time it's not considered to be a super strong Ultra Beast. Great name though. Did you guys know the Xurkitree circuitry joke? Pun? Naming? Whatever. 210 is Jellicent. Jellicent's one of my all-time favorite Pokemon. It's unfortunately not in Scarlet and Violet. I would have put it on many teams if it was. 209 is Mandibuzz. Mandibuzz you probably don't think of as being a super strong Pokemon, but it is almost a world champion. Second place. 208 is Zygarde 50% form. I actually think the 50% form is better than the Mega Transformer form. Not competitively, but in terms of design. 207 is Colossal. Colossal, if Colossal won a tournament nowadays, I'd be really happy. Colossal is not good without its Gigantamax form. 206 is Regidrago. 205 is Toadscroll. Toadscroll is in an actual YouTube short that I have made, in part because I used it. 204 is Iron Bundle. Iron Bundle was looking like it could compete with Fluttermane and then definitely didn't look that way after a time. 203 is Sinistcha. Sinistcha is genuinely a good Pokemon, but it is unique enough that I think people are still interested in it, so it can end up in YouTube shorts, and the ability is sick. 202 is Screamtail. Love Screamtail. I think I have a short about Screamtail somewhere. 201 is Raikou. Raikou is an exception here. Raikou is not a YouTube Shorts Pokemon. Raikou is a Pokemon that I would put into a subcategory that is not very good competitively, but super cool. Same thing for number 200, Lugia. Also not very good competitively. Neither of these Pokemon are awful, but they're not great. 199 is Electabuzz. Barely outplaced by 198, Magmar. I think Magmar is slightly better, even if only for the Japanese name of Magmar. 197 is Gothitelle. Love Gothitelle. I mean, you know that. I don't need to tell you that. 196 is East Sea Gastrodon, outplacing West Sea by a good margin. Gastrodon gets into the top 200 where it deserves. 195 is Wo-Chen. Wo-Chen is a great example. It is by far the worst treasure of Ruin, but is still viable enough that it can win tournaments and therefore end up on my YouTube Shorts page. 194 is Pelipper. Pelipper is a different category as well. Pelipper is not cool. It's also not a YouTube Shorts Pokemon. Pelipper is a better Pokemon with a bad design. Pelipper competitively should be higher, but its design is bad and therefore it ends up here in the still great, but like not excellent category. 193 is Breloom. 192 is Indeedee Male, similar to Pelipper. Better Pokemon, ick. 191 is Jumpluff. 190 is Bruce Bonnet. 189 is Kyurem White. Kyurem White could win a tournament, but it's not so common that I would expect it to, and so if it did, I would put it in YouTube Shorts. If you want to end up on the WolfeyVGC YouTube channel, win a tournament with one of these Pokemon. 188 is Regirock. 187 is Giratina's altered form. 186 is Gallade. Gallade I think is a really cool Pokemon. It's not such a surprise when it wins. I think Gallade might be an outlier actually, to be honest. 185 is Galarian Darmanitan. I like base Darmanitan, but I think the Galarian form is a really cool redesign, and they found a way of keeping the identity of the Pokemon while actually making it better competitively. Fun fact, at the time I'm recording this, Galarian Darmanitan Zen mode is the only ice and fire type Pokemon in the game, which is super sick typing. 184 is Escavalier. 183 is Ferrothorn. That's the official pronunciation if you're wondering. I always call it Ferrothorn, and then if you want to be, commentating, you have to call it Ferrothorn. That's the reason they didn't put it in Scarlet and Violet, because they didn't want to confuse the commentators or the viewers. 182 is Vivillon, and I'm not ranking the Vivillon forms separately. 181 is Hisuian Zoroark, outplacing regular Zoroark by a good bit. I think that this is like both better competitively, and I like the design more. It might miss out a little on Iconicity, but the other two categories make up for it. Number 180 is Araquanid. 179 is Grimmsnarl. Grimmsnarl is an incredible Pokemon competitively, but the design, it's memorable in part because it's ugly, but it does give me the ick. 178 is Dracozolt. 177 is Walking Wake. I love Walking Wake. The only bad thing I can say about Walking Wake, I can say two bad things. One is it's not as good as I want it to be, and two is it makes me feel bad for Iron Leaves because they were introduced together, and Walking Wake is awesome and Iron Leaves sucks. 176 is Nidoking. 175 is Alolan Ninetales. I think Alolan Ninetales is another example of a Pokemon outplacing its original counterpart because the redesign is actually just so cool. It's also a lot better than regular Ninetales. 174 is Torkoal. Torkoal's a great Pokemon competitively, but the design, I don't hate the design. I kind of like it because it looks stupid, but it does look stupid. 173 is Lapras. 172 is Jolteon. 171 is Galarian Moltres, another case where the redesign outplaces the original. 170 is Espeon. 169 is Slowbro. 168 is Blastoise, and closing out the category at number 167, we have Scyther. I think I made a YouTube short when Scyther won a tournament recently, so that's actually quite fitting. There are less than 200 Pokemon left in this list. And so far, I've had to do a lot of qualifying, right? I've said this Pokemon's really good competitively, but it's ugly. Or this Pokemon's really bad, but it's so cute. We are finally at the point of the list where I can talk about good Pokemon with great designs. For example, at number 166, we have Tapu Bulu. This Pokemon was totally viable and also has a really cool design. Number 165 is Eternatus. Eternatus is awesome. The giant hand is so cool. I love the design. I think it's a cool counterpart to the dogs. Good Pokemon, not the best Pokemon, but a good Pokemon. Great design. Now at number 164, we have Flygon. Flygon, to be honest, is not a good Pokemon. It has basically no competitive results. Therefore, Flygon does not fit our category name of good Pokemon with great designs. However, it does fit our subcategory of bad Pokemon with spectacular design. That's also true of number 163, Regigigas. Bad Pokemon, incredible design. 162 is Shaman Landform. 161 is Serperior. 160 is Conkeldurr. That's going back to good Pokemon with great designs. 159 is Hitmontop, another Pokemon on my World Championship winning team. 158 is Pommet. 157 is Basculegion Male. 156 is Gouging Fire, whose legal government name I will not repeat. 155 is Politoed. I love Politoed. Politoed being one of the first split evolutions in the game and being such a good and memorable and just genuinely strong one, I think they knocked it out of the park. Speaking of extra evolutions at Ninjoto, number 154 is Crobat. Crobat being a real metagame threat at many times when it was legal, and also having a sick design. I think they took Golbat, who's a little goofy, and made it into something really cool. 153 is Chansey. 152 is Aerodactyl. Aerodactyl has such a cool design, it's a shame that it is not better. Number 151, which I think is a position of quite high honor, goes to Ludicolo. Love Ludicolo. Definitely one of the best Pokemon ever made. 150 is Registeel. 149 is Porygon Z. 148 is Origin Form Dialga. 147 is Mienshao. 146 is Porygon. Porygon performing quite highly for a Pokemon that does not have any competitive viability just because the design is that good. 145 is Glamora. 144 is Meowscarada. She got Pollen Puff to heal buddies. 143 is Empoleon. Empoleon is unfortunately a bad Pokemon, but an incredible design. 142 is Haunter, who takes the same title, but actually I think has a higher tournament peak than Empoleon. 141 is Murkrow. 140 is Infernape. Infernape I would say is probably a bad Pokemon with a spectacular design, but it's also a Pokemon that got top 8 at the World Championships, and it might have gone further if I didn't stop it. So I don't know, it's kind of both categories and also maybe neither. 139 is Vaporeon. Vaporeon is not a very good Pokemon, though I did bring it to a tournament before, but I mean, it's probably the most memorable evolution, hopefully for all the right reasons. 138 is Rotom Mow. You gotta mow your lawn, come on. 137 is Origin Form Giratina. I think Origin Form Giratina is really cool, especially when it was introduced in Platinum and we didn't know about it before. I think it was just like so sick. 136 is Terrakion. Now, Terrakion is certainly not a bad Pokemon with a spectacular design, but I also wouldn't put it in the good Pokemon with a great design either, because I don't think the design is necessarily that good, and because it was more than just good, it was great. Terrakion basically was the centerpiece for the entire 2011 format, and the 2011 format was a little bit weird because it was only Pokemon that were introduced in Unova, so there were no like Pikachus or, you know, Cresselia or Garchomp or anything. But the thing about Terrakion is it continued to be a top threat all the way through the end of X and Y, and has even made a couple reappearances here and there since then. Overall, it's a Pokemon that I would say you just can't argue with results this good. 135 is Como-O. Now, I personally hate Como-O, but I think that the general consensus is that it does have a great design and is a good Pokemon, so it gets pretty high up on our list here. 134 is Necrozma Duskmane, followed by number 133, Necrozma Dawn Wings. The Dawn Wings one is slightly better, but also I think the Duskmane one has technically a higher peak, so it's ambiguous which one is actually better. 132 is Hatterene, a good Pokemon with a great design that also you can't argue with the results because it kind of defined an entire archetype in Psy-Spam thanks to how strong it is as an expanding force Tricker Muser. Speaking of Psy-Spam, at number 131, we have Armarouge. Now, I think Cerulage's design is a lot cooler than Armarouge, but by far the better Pokemon between the two is Armarouge in a competitive setting. Armarouge is another Pokemon that's able to really use the expanding force Psychic Terrain archetype to pretty scary results. 130 is Tingus Lu. 129 is Alolan Marowak, who, fun fact, is a world champion. I think Alolan Marowak is really sick because they took the original Marowak and just like kept the parts about it that made it good, but just improved them. And I think the new typing is awesome. 128 is Dusclops. Dusclops was like running the show back in the beginning of Sword and Shield. It was so good against Dynamax Pokemon. And if Dynamax comes back, which I think it will in Champions, I think Dusclops could be good again because of how bulky it is and how good it is as a haze user. And at number 127, putting us back in the bad Pokemon with spectacular designs category, we have Mewtwo. I love Mewtwo, it's one of my all-time favorite Pokemon, but undeniably it's a terrible Pokemon competitively in the formats where it's legal. It's a very important qualifier. If you use it against like weaker Pokemon, of course it's strong. Mewtwo's so bad that even though it has 2 Mega Evolutions, it still doesn't see any play. Fun fact, there was a period where Mewtwo was like decent in 2010, like way back in the day, it was at least usable, but I'm pretty sure it was mostly usable to blow itself up with self-destruct. 126 is Exeggutor, speaking of my favorite Pokemon. Iconic, classic, and also pretty good. And closing out our category at number 125 is Mawile. Mawile is another Pokemon where you just can't argue with its results, and I like the design of Mega Mawile a lot. I think it's a great Mega Evolution design, and it's very strong. We're at peak now, okay? All the Pokemon left are incredible. This category's name is Real Heroes. And fittingly enough, kicking us off at number 124, we have Palafin. 123 is Landorus Incarnate. 122 is Azumarill. 121 is Kingdra. That's a real hero to me, especially last year with my little Perish Trap team. 120 is Deoxys Attack, followed by 119 Deoxys Speed. I do wish Deoxys were legal at some point. It's a cool Pokemon. 118 is Excadrill. I think Mega Excadrill is about to be an even bigger hero. 117 is Chandelure. Now, Chandelure is not like a super good Pokemon, and so it actually ends up in a subcategory here, which I'm gonna call masterpieces. These are Pokemon that maybe aren't as good competitively as the rest of the tier, but they're just so good from a design angle or from an iconicity angle that they deserve to be up here anyway. 116 is Origin Form Palkia. 115 is Sky Form Shaman. 114 is Tinkaton. 113 is Baxcalibur. 112 is Roaring Moon, a really high placing Paradox Pokemon. I do wish it were a little bit better, but I think it's a really cool design. 111 is Archaludon. They did a really good job making a Duraludon evolution, and the fact that it's so viable and has so many different sets it can run, I think is awesome. Great job, Archaludon. 110 is Indeedee Female. Really nice design and also just a very good Pokemon. 109 is Butterfree. It's both usable and so memorable. 108 is our final fossil Pokemon, Dracovish. Dracovish took over the game in a way that no other fossil Pokemon ever has and hopefully never will until they make Mega Dracovish. 107 is Entei, a great Pokemon and also just so memorable because of the movie, because of how like cool it is. 106 is our 2-time world champion, Iron Hands. Iron Hands, fun fact, is our highest placing future Paradox Pokemon. 105 is Reshiram. This is another masterpiece with a great design. It's not like a super good Pokemon, but it's good enough, and I think the design is really cool. 104 is Scrafty. Scrafty's another Pokemon that was on that first team I ever used in tournaments. I really like it a lot, and I think, especially given that it now has a Mega Form, I think it's just going to end up being one of the most beloved Pokemon of all time. 103 is Corviknight, followed closely by another regional bird at number 102, Talonflame. Corviknight and Talonflame are our final regional birds on this list, which makes sense because they were also the best 2 regional birds out there. I went back and forth between the 2 of them because I like Corviknight's design more, but Talonflame was just so overwhelmingly broken in a way that Corviknight never was, and frankly no other regional bird ever could be, and so in the end I decided to give it the edge. But it was close. And our final Pokemon before the top 100, coming in at number 101, it's Blaziken. And with that, there are only 100 Pokemon left to cover. The 100 Pokemon that I've estimated are, to the best of my abilities, the best ones ever made. These Pokemon put the rest to shame. But before we start talking about them, I thought it could be fun to talk about some of the statistics for the top 100 on the list as a whole. Generation 5, for example, performs by far the worst out of the top 100. It is true that 6 has the fewest Pokemon represented, but again, remember that that regional dex is really small, and so actually percentage-wise, it's not doing as bad as Generation 5. 3 of the generations actually have fewer than 10 representatives in the top 100. Generation 2, 5, and 6. Generation 5 only gets 7 Pokemon in the top 100, which is especially surprising when you consider that Generation 5 has the single biggest Pokedex on our list. Having closer to 4 than 5% representation in the top 100 is really bad, and I don't know exactly why this is, but I do think Gen 5 is kind of in this uncanny valley where a lot of the Pokemon are not as iconic and memorable as the ones from earlier generations, but they also tend to not be quite as strong as the Pokemon that have benefited more from power creep in later generations, and also they just generally received a little less love. In terms of regional forms or Mega Evolutions or Gigantamax forms, Generation 5 does tend to be kind of the black sheep of the Pokemon franchise. Now it is worth noting that Legends ZA introduced a ton of Mega Evolutions to these Pokemon, so I'm hoping that going forward they will see a little bit more love, but as of the time I'm recording this, that's the way things stand. Also interesting to note is our top performers. Now we all know which generation we would expect to be the most represented in the overall top 100 list, and that's Generation 1. And Generation 1 does perform quite well, but actually Generation 1 is only the second most represented in the top 100. The best performing generation overall is Generation 9. This is in large part due to power creep. Almost all of the Generation 9 Pokemon are viable, and many of them are very, very, very good. Even though the Generation 1 Pokemon do across the board tend to perform better in terms of how iconic they are because they're the first generation, at this point on the list, all the Pokemon remaining are so good in terms of design and in terms of how iconic they are, that being really good competitively actually is making up a big difference here at the top. Generation 9, by the way, has the most Pokemon represented, but it has a significantly smaller Pokedex than Generation 1. Now, we didn't want to talk about stats when we got to the top 200 because, this is already a long video and we didn't want to overwhelm you, but there is something interesting that Zane just pointed out to me that is actually, Zane, you can just tell him.
So yeah, I've been doing most of the stat collection here, and I feel obligated to mention this because Generation 5 is one of my favorite generations of all time. Generation 5 was doing pretty well in the bottom half versus top half stats, and what's actually interesting is that in top 200, it was doing okay also. It was still the second worst performing generation, but in terms of the actual Mons there, it had a pretty high amount of Mons with 22, which is right in the range of other things there. But when we get to top 100, there's this huge fall off, and I think that that's because there are all of these Pokemon that we think of as really cool from Gen 5, but that just haven't, like Wolf said, got the love. Things like, Terrakion and Ferrothorn and Mienshao. And I do think it's interesting that they all just couldn't quite make it that extra mile. And it's a lot of these Pokemon that performed really well back then or are really cool. And when are we getting Gen 5 remakes, Game Freak? I guess that's what I'm saying really here.
I really liked your stats, Zane, but I did notice that you called Ferrothorn Ferrothorn, and therefore your entire opinion is invalid. 100 Pokemon still remain. 100 Pokemon better than all the rest. 100 Pokemon that have stood the test of time, that have persevered in the face of adversity. 100 Pokemon that have the grit, the gumption, the memorability, and the competitive results to back up their placement as the 100 best Pokemon of all time. Each of them painstakingly evaluated on multiple criteria, so they could each be placed exactly where they belong, with precision that would impress a surgeon. And so it is my honor to introduce you to the 100th best Pokemon. The Pokemon that, when all the dust had settled, landed firmly atop one of the most illustrious categories in all of gaming. The 100th best Pokemon is Pikachu. I swear we did not rig this. Pikachu obviously gets maximum scores for both iconicity and design. What you might be surprised to know is that it actually has a pretty decent competitive history, thanks to its signature item, the Light Ball, and its signature Gigantamax form. Pikachu may be the biggest benefactor of nepotism in the entire franchise, but make no mistake, it has earned its place on this list with its own hard work. Number 99 is Tatsugiri, a Pokemon that is perhaps a little bit too viable with an incredible design. Number 98 goes to our highest placing regional form, Hisuian Arcanine. Arcanine was already a great Pokemon, but I think they did a good job of redesigning it in a way that feels both memorable and is a unique way to play it compared to the base form. They also managed to take Macargo's typing and make it usable, which I think deserves major props. Number 97 is Sneasler. I do not like Sneasler, but I cannot deny that she is a girl boss, and she deserves her place here in the top 100 as much as I don't want to admit it. Number 96 is Greninja. Greninja is an interesting case because I think it's one of the most memorable and famous and well-loved Pokemon of all time, and that's the reason why it deserves its spot in the top 100. It can't be put much higher up because Greninja's competitive viability is a lot lower than you might expect given how cool it looks, but there were times where Greninja was good. It never got to be great, but maybe Mega Greninja will change that. Number 95 is Jirachi. Now, mythical Pokemon are not competitively legal, but if Jirachi was legal, it would be quite good. Jirachi, I think, is especially memorable. Did anyone watch that Jirachi movie as a kid? I love that movie as a kid. And Jirachi has a great design. It's certainly one of the 100th best Pokemon. 94 goes to Dondozo. If this list were purely based on my emotions, Dondozo would be in the 1100s. It would be after the Pokedex ends. However, it is very memorable, it's very good, and the design is really cool. Dondozo introducing a super mech combination style mechanic to the Pokemon franchise I do think is neat, and Dondozo outplaces Tatsugiri because even though I do like the 3 different colored Tatsugiris and their unique interactions with Order Up, Dondozo can function without Tatsugiri in a way that Tatsugiri could never dream of. Even though Tatsugiri is the commander, it seems like it's Dondozo who's calling the shots. Number 93 is Tapu Lele. Bulu is the only Tapu not inside the top 100, and I honestly think the Tapus as a whole really nail the concept of a legendary quartet. All of the Tapu Pokemon are memorable because they introduced terrains to the series in a way that was actually accessible rather than clicking grassy terrain with your Gogoat. And I think it's really a testament to how broken the Tapus were that Lele, who can destroy your entire team with a psychic move, places only at rank 96. We'll have to see where the other Tapus end up. 92 is Darkrai. Darkrai is another mythical Pokemon, meaning that it's almost never legal in official competitive tournaments. However, its design is great, and its signature move has certainly had an impact on the competitive scene. 91 goes to a Generation 9 evolution of a Generation 1 Pokemon. It's Annihilate. I think that they really nailed Annihilate from a design perspective, and I also love its signature move Rage Fist because it introduces a really new way to play Pokemon that we haven't ever had to manage before. They also did a good job in making sure that it had multiple viable sets that it could use and wasn't just forced to be a setup Rage Fist Pokemon. Overall, I think it's a great design and they really nailed it from a competitive standpoint. Number 90 goes to a Pokemon that in some ways we've seen before on this list because it has multiple forms. The second highest placing among them though is Rotom Heat. The design is so funny. I love the idea of like a possessed easy bake oven, and Rotom Heat for a while was a very good competitive Pokemon. 89 is another evolution of a Pokemon that's been around for a while. A Pokemon whose pre-evolution saw success before it even was a pre-evolution. The 89th best Pokemon on the list is King Gambit. King Gambit has an incredible design. I love that it completes the chess imagery and naming system from the pre-evolutions, and it is a very good competitive Pokemon that has a cool signature move, a really sick signature ability, and ends up feeling consistently like a very good Pokemon without overstepping into broken territory. Number 88 goes to another classic Generation 1 Pokemon, and this time it's a legendary. It's Articuno. Articuno for a long time was thought of as one of the worst legendary Pokemon competitively, though I think everybody agreed that the design was incredible. However, during Scarlet and Violet's lifespan, it actually won a tournament, and a major tournament at that. With its newfound competitive success and its incredible design, it absolutely deserves to be here in the top 100. Number 87, Regieleki. I love the Regis. I loved the Regis back in Generation 5. I brought Registeel to Worlds. That was not a good decision, but I did do it. When I heard they were making new Regis, I was both excited and worried because like there's pretty big shoes to fill. Prior to Generation 8, none of the Regis had ever been considered any good, and so I kind of figured, well, if they're making new ones, they're probably also going to be bad. And so I was quite surprised that Regieleki was actually quite good. What I was more surprised by though is how fun the design is. I mean, it's basically this like overflowing light bulb, and despite not being a Pokemon that like has a super expressive face, it's actually quite cute. The way that it bounces around in battle, I find really endearing. I think Regieleki hits this nice sweet spot of having a really fun design that is inspired by the original trio that it's based on, or I guess adding on to, while still having its own unique and distinct feeling. Number 86, Mousehold. First of all, the name. I mean, how could a Pokemon that's a household of mouse not end up in the top 100? That's how you know this list is serious, okay? Anyway, Mousehold is awesome. I love Mousehold. This has got to be one of the best Generation 9 Pokemon, certainly. Mousehold's a cool Pokemon from a competitive standpoint because it has two roles that it can fill. The first uses its signature move Population Bomb to just destroy opponents, and the second plays a more supportive role. I think Mousehold's a good example of how Generation 9 introduces Pokemon that are fun and don't take themselves too seriously while still having good and memorable designs. Number 85 is Togekiss. If I told you that Togekiss was at one point the single best Pokemon in the game, you might find it hard to believe, but it's true. During the first formats of Sword and Shield, Togekiss was not only good, it was extremely centralizing. Even back when Togekiss was running the game, it had a couple different sets it could use. One involved combining the ability Super Luck with the held item Scope Lens, which meant all of its attacks had a 50% chance to critical hit. So players would Dynamax Togekiss and then just hope that it crit everything, which it would do 50% of the time. It also could play a supportive role outside of Dynamax, using moves like Follow Me and Yawn and Helping Hand to disrupt your opponent or boost your teammates. As with pretty much every Pokemon of the top 100, Togekiss has a great design, but I think that Togekiss is especially memorable because like Togepi was so memorable for those of us who grew up with the anime. And while I like Togetic, I do think it's a little bit disappointing, at least from a competitive angle. And so having Togekiss be introduced and have it be actually one of the best evolutions introduced in that generation 4 like period, I personally think is really cool. Number 84 is Nihilego. Nihilego is one of the best Ultra Beasts. It gets extra points because the scene where it takes over Lucamine's mind I think is pretty memorable and therefore makes it more iconic. And I think also the idea of this poison rock jellyfish is really cool. Nihilego was also one of the best competitive Pokemon in Sun and Moon and even had a little bit of success in Sword and Shield. I think it would have been pretty good in Scarlet and Violet if it had been in the game as well. It functions as this fast and offensive special attacker who takes advantage of the fact that it has like pretty good special bulk to actually be pretty annoying, and it uses its ability Beast Boost quite well, where every time it gets a KO, it can get either a special attack or a speed boost depending on how you've trained it. It's a cool and fun Pokemon to use. It plays a pretty big role in the main story of the Sun and Moon games and maybe the anime, I didn't watch it, and I think his status as an Ultra Beast elevates it even further. Also, ZANE has just reminded me that Lily's design is actually based on Nihilego. Like there's a parallel because Lucamine is so obsessed with this Pokemon and is not obsessed with her daughter. I think that's pretty cool. Number 83 is Gardevoir. I don't think that anybody's gonna argue with me that Gardevoir is both memorable and iconic. But what I think is interesting about Gardevoir is that it's actually filled a couple different roles in competitive Pokemon. If you look at Gardevoir's stats, it doesn't seem like a super good Pokemon, but it actually won the World Championships when holding a Choice Scarf. Mega Gardevoir has also seen a fair bit of success, even winning the US National Championships back in 2015. Gardevoir benefited a lot from the addition of the Fairy typing, and I think it's really great that they also let it keep the Psychic typing, because even though there are other Psychic and Fairy types, it still lets Gardevoir keep a somewhat unique identity. Number 82 is Swampert. It's been a little bit since we had a starter Pokemon, but there are a fair few of them in here. Swampert is just the best, right? Mudkip is probably the most popular Generation 3 starter. That's a tough one because all three of them are so beloved, but I think Mudkip is probably the most popular. Swampert being its final form is pretty cool. And even though I think Swampert is a lot stronger in a playthrough than it is in competitive Pokemon, it has a couple results. In fact, it actually got top 8 at the World Championships back in 2012. It's not a Pokemon that I think is mostly known for being a competitive threat, but I think the fact that it's so memorable and it still can keep up competitively is pretty cool. Number 81 is Tornadus Incarnate Form. This is one of the best competitive Pokemon of all time, period. Tornadus is the original Prankster Tailwind setter, and Prankster Tailwind is one of the best forms of speed control in all of competitive play. Tornadus is also interesting because it's filled a bunch of different roles over the years. Tornadus, when it was first introduced, was actually a physical attacker, using the move Acrobatics in combination with the Flying Gem. And actually, when Tornadus won Worlds, it didn't even have the Prankster ability, it used its hidden ability to Defiant. Over the past decade, though, Tornadus has changed a lot, and is now good generally, but especially good when it's paired with Kyogre. Kyogre makes all of its inaccurate flying moves 100% accurate, and that is a pretty nice buff for a Pokemon that is actually quite strong, given that it mainly fills a supportive role. Number 80 is Farigiraf. I think Farigiraf is my favorite Pokemon introduced in Scarlet and Violet. It's just so cool. Its signature ability Armor Tail is just a lot of fun to play with because it lets you shut down your opponent's priority moves without needing to commit to using Psychic Terrain. It can function both as a defensive Trick Room setter or as an offensive Trick Room sweeper. That's my personal favorite set. And I think it's a Pokemon that's really skill expressive. In the first 2 years of Scarlet and Violet, Farigiraf got second at the World Championships and then won. I also feel like I like Farigiraf extra because Girafarig is a Pokemon that was so forgotten for so long and also is just so bad. Like nobody was ever considering using Girafarig, right? And so to give it an evolution and have that evolution end up in this really nice sweet spot of being really good, sometimes even great, but not being overpowered and still feeling true to the original Pokemon, I just think it's awesome. Number 79, Clefairy. You might not expect to see a not fully evolved Pokemon up this high, but Clefairy is actually better than Clefable in competitive play. This is in large part because Clefairy has the ability Friend Guard, which Clefable loses, and Friend Guard is really great in the official competitive format. Clefairy is a really fun Pokemon. It's also the Pokemon that I personally associate with like stone evolutions just as a whole. I guess that and the Eevees probably. because that was the first Pokemon I think I ever evolved using a Moonstone, which might have been the first Pokemon I ever evolved with a stone, period. It's a fun Pokemon, it's super cute, super memorable, very iconic, and the fact that it also gets to be good competitively is just the cherry on top. Number 78, Heatran. I love Heatran. Is he a frog? I think he might be a frog. Some legendary Pokemon just feel like weirdos, but I think Heatran really feels very legendary. I just made a lot of people mad. Like, okay, here's what I'll say about Heatran. Heatran is who Volcanion thinks he is, but he's not. Heatran's Heatran. Heatran's a cool Pokemon competitively. There were years where it was one of the best. Now I would say it's only okay some of the time, but it is still pretty cool. Fire and Steel typing is sick. Having an immunity to fire type moves is really cool. Heatran can work both in and out of Trick Room. It can work with Sun. It doesn't need Sun to be up. It's a pretty flexible Pokemon. Also, it's a frog. And I guess what I'm learning is that I like frogs. Number 77, Ursaluna Blood Moon. This Pokemon is strange. Competitively speaking, it's very powerful. It's been good when legendary Pokemon are banned. It's been very good when legendary Pokemon are legal. What I think is most interesting about Ursaluna Blood Moon is that it exists. I feel like in recent Pokemon games, they really are trying to give love to Pokemon that are older and have kind of been forgotten by time. But Ursaluna Blood Moon is a play on Ursaluna, who was only just introduced in Legends Arceus. That being said, I'm glad that it exists, even though it sucks to play against, because the idea of this zombie bear that walks on two legs is very unique and very memorable. And I think it does a good job of taking the moon like iconography that exists in the Teddiursa and Ursaring and Ursaluna line and kind of giving it this more spooky Halloween theme. And I think that it's a Pokemon that even if you only see it once or twice, you are likely to remember. And I'm sure that people only grow fonder towards it the longer it remains out. I'm future-proofing this list, okay? I'm predicting that people are going to continue to like Ursaluna Blood Moon. Number 76, Terapagos. This Pokemon deserves to be in the top 100 because of how many plushies it has sold. Terapagos has three forms. There's the form that makes doubles players mad, there's the form that makes singles players mad, and there's the form that sells plushies. Well, it doesn't really have three forms functionally because you can never use the plushie form, but the fact that it has two forms with different abilities and that you actually have a trade-off as to when you terrestrialize it is genuinely very interesting. I think Terapagos does a good job of introducing a mechanic that is powerful, but having things about the Pokemon remain balanced that keeps it relatively in check. Like if you think about it, they made a Pokemon with a super strong signature move that you cannot resist no matter what you do that hits both of your opponents, and they gave it to a Pokemon with quite good stats across the board, and yet they designed it to be just not strong enough for it to actually take over the game, and it actually ended up as not one of the strongest restricted Pokemon. So competitively speaking, I think Terapagos is quite good. I also think from a design angle, it's very easy to hate on newer legendary Pokemon. I think people are in some ways predisposed to dislike newer Pokemon in general because they don't have that nostalgia factor. And I think the fact that Terapagos is so universally liked is a real testament to how good a job they did with the design. Also, I have to say that I love the reference to turtles all the way down. It's like one of my favorite phrases, and so to see it represented in a Pokemon is just great. Okay, here we go. This is a big one. Number 75 is Pachirisu. Pachirisu is great. It's a world champion. Did you know? Hey, did you know Pachirisu, it can even take down super strong dragon Pokemon like Salamanki and Tyranitar. He's a dragon type, right? Pachirisu beat all these strong Pokemon. Wow, that's so cool. It is cool. It is cool. I'm not dogging on Pachirisu here. And it's 75th overall, 75th best Pokemon of all time. One thing I will say about Pachirisu is that a lot of the Pikachu clones are not good, and Pachirisu, I don't think it's like so good in a vacuum, but I think it's awesome that it did have this one moment, this one tournament where it was able to literally become the world champion because of the unique things that it could offer. It's cute, it's memorable. I mean, it's very memorable. It's certainly iconic, and it's a world champion, so it gets some competitive points as well. Good job, Pachirisu. Number 74 is Lucario. How many of you have that big Lucario plushie? You know the one I'm talking about? It's like 6 feet tall. Don't answer that. I asked the question and I've immediately decided that I do not want to know. Lucario is like a capital P Pokemon. You know what I mean? People love this thing. Lucario is literally the Aura Pokemon. And okay, granted it was introduced before the term Aura became, cool for Zoomers, but I mean, that's still pretty cool. Aura's pretty cool. It's in Smash Brothers, it's featured in a movie, and it actually is okay competitively. It's not necessarily the best Pokemon often, but it is normally usable, and the fact that it has a Mega Evolution that does a lot of damage only works in its favor. I bet eventually it gets new forms as well, because it is just that popular. Okay, number 73 is Scizor. Scizor. I think that's what he sounds like in Smash, but I'm kind of forgetting.
Scizor.
Scizor in many ways redeems all bug-type Pokemon. It's okay that all these garbage bug types exist because we have Scizor. Fun fact, I actually won the US National Championships alongside Aaron Zhang in the same year. We sat back-to-back and played the finals of US Nationals, and we both won with the same or similar teams built around Swords Dance Scizor. So I have a soft spot for Scizor. I mean, it's this red armored coated bug. I think that's great. I love that Scizor feels like a true evolution of Scyther, and I think the fact that you trade it while holding the metal coat item in order to literally coat your bug in metal, I think that's really great, and it's a detail that I really loved the first time that I saw it. Scissor's not the strongest competitive Pokemon anymore just because of power creep, but there was a time where it was one of the best Pokemon. And thanks to its Mega Evolution, it does occasionally see play, like it actually won an international championship back in 2018. It's a Pokemon that I think has enough going for it that it can always be good, and even if it is never dominant again, I think it has proved itself over the course of competitive Pokemon's history that it very much deserves its spot near the top of the list. Caesar. Number 72 is Suicune. That's another Pokemon from a movie. You'll watch the Celebi movie. I really like that one. I don't know if it's actually good, but I really like it. I think that Suicune is the best of the legendary dogs. That's my opinion. Don't get mad at me. That's my opinion. I think Suicune is the best. I mean, it's probably the best competitively speaking, although Entei has recently seen a resurgence. But in terms of design, I think that Suicune, it just has this like sleekness and this grace and this like beauty to it that I actually don't think that many Pokemon have. Lots of Pokemon are cool or cute, but I think like elegant is not a word I would describe many Pokemon as, except for like Trubbish. But Suicune is elegant, although it is a real bastard to play against. This Pokemon is so unbelievably tanky. It sits in the field and it scalds you for forever and it burns all your Pokemon and it sets up Tailwind. Maybe it's not as elegant as I thought. Number 71 is Ogerpon Cornerstone Mask. The masks are ranked separately. We don't know who's behind them. It could be any Pokemon. Ogerpon is probably the most beloved legendary introduced in Generation 9. I feel like most of the time people have a strong attachment to a Pokemon. It's because of stuff like outside of the game, like the anime, or maybe, I don't know, like the card game where they have some special experience. But the story that you experience with Ogerpon, where she's basically getting bullied by these 3 poison type jerks, I think really resonated with a lot of people. And seeing her beat them up with her hammer was pretty good. Cornerstone is ranked the lowest out of all the Ogerpon masks, and I wouldn't say because it's necessarily competitively the worst. Teal Mask is probably the worst, and I would put Cornerstone at second from the bottom, although they're all good. They've all seen success before. But I do think that out of all of them, Cornerstone has the worst design, although it is close. So the other Ogerpons are not far away. Number 70 is Ho-Oh. Ho-Oh gets bonus points because of how iconic it is and how memorable it is. It appears in the first episode of the Pokemon anime, and that's before we even knew like what Ho-Oh was. Like Ho-Oh wasn't even in the first 151 Pokemon, right? Now, competitively speaking, Ho-Oh's a restricted Pokemon, which means whenever it's legal, many other powerful Pokemon are legal as well, and it sometimes has trouble keeping up. That being said, the most recent time Ho-Oh was legal, it actually had a pretty good performance, in part thanks to some new tools like easier access to its hidden ability Regenerator and the new item Clear Amulet. While it's not the most popular Pokemon, it is certainly good enough to land it a spot in the top 100. Number 69 is another restricted Pokemon, Palkia. I do not know what they were feeding the developers when they made Generation 4, but they should have kept feeding them whatever it was. If I told you that there was a video game and it had been coming out for 9 generations, you would probably guess that by Generation 3 or Generation 4, the characters within it would lose some of their iconicity, right? That the developers would run out of ideas or they would feel less memorable. But when I look at Palkia, I see one of the most iconic and memorable Pokemon ever made. It's interesting because Palkia in a way does feel like design-wise distinct from any of the previous legendaries. It feels more monstrous, it feels more primal in a way, and yet it is still undeniably very cool. It's also had some good success in competitive formats, at times being one of the best restricted Pokemon, mostly being used as a Trick Room sweeper and attacker. Palkia is partially memorable because it matches up so well into Kyogre because it's actually one of the few Pokemon that can take multiple water hits, which is not true of most restricted Pokemon. It's also worth noting that Palkia became a horse recently, but it's not a very good horse, so it's normally better in its more phallic form. Number 68 is Kangaskhan. Kangaskhan is the single best Mega Evolution, period. At least that's true prior to ZA's Mega Evolutions, which I haven't played with yet, so I can't speak to. Kangaskhan is mostly up here because of its competitive prowess. Of course, being one of the original 151 Pokemon, it is memorable and it is iconic. And I do like the design as well. I also like the design of the Mega Evolution. I think the fact that it's the same except the baby comes out of the pouch is really funny. But the fact that they kept it simple, I think actually really enhances how good the design is. Anyway, Kangaskhan is turbo broken. When it first released, this mon was not balanced. And I think it's telling that in Generation 7, they actually gave Mega Kangaskhan a couple pretty major nerfs, and it still remains as one of the best Mega Evolutions. Number 67, Shedinja. I actually don't think I need to explain Shedinja. I think people understand why Shedinja is here. It's been good competitively. I think it's one of the most memorable and most iconic Pokemon of all time, specifically because of Wonder Guard and the 1 HP interaction. I said I wasn't going to explain it, so I'm not. Moving on. Number 66, Raichu. Pikachu's evolution had to be on here, right? And it's worth noting that I'm filming this before I've seen Mega Raichu X and Mega Raichu Y, so Raichu could in theory even climb even higher. That being said, it's the Raichu, it's the best. I would say it's not as iconic or memorable as Pikachu, but to pretend like that means that it's not iconic or memorable would be a real stretch, I would say. Raichu's also a world champion, and actually it was on my world championship winning team, so I have a soft spot for Raichu. But even personal biases aside, it clearly deserves its spot here. If you know only 10 Pokemon, one of them could be Raichu. And the fact that it actually is good competitively and has been good not just in the year that I won Worlds, but in a couple other formats as well, only boosts it even higher. Number 65, Latias. Did Ash kiss Latias? I'm pretty sure that he did. How does this affect Latias's legacy? I don't know. How does this affect Ash Ketchum's legacy? I also don't know. When I was a kid, this was like a top 3 favorite Pokemon for me. This is another Pokemon that I would describe as elegant. It's a very sleek design. It feels like everything fits nicely. Competitively speaking, Latias has also been good at times. It even got second at the World Championships back in 2018. I will say this doesn't really affect Latias's score on this list, but the Mega Evolution, personally, I found to be a big letdown. The fact that it basically looks the same as Latios, I think is not super chic. Bad job. When they make Mega Latias Z, it better be better. Number 64 is not cute or sleek or chic, but it is Thundurus incarnate form. This Pokemon is a demon. It terrorized competitive play so badly that it forced multiple mechanics to change. In fact, I think Thundurus is the Pokemon responsible for affecting the single most changes and nerfs to competitive Pokemon in history, and I don't know what number 2 is. It won't be close. This Pokemon was legitimately a terror. It abused so many broken things within the game that it made playing the game genuinely so frustrating at times that many players quit. Thundurus is also memorable because it's a legendary Pokemon, but I think it's mostly memorable because of what it did to competitive players. Now, one neat thing about Thundurus is that although it was nerfed pretty severely and it no longer is able to play this like horrible disruption role that it used to, it did actually win the World Championships post all of the nerfs in 2022 because it was quite a good Dynamax attacker when paired with Zacian. It makes me confident that we'll see Thundurus again in the future. Number 63 is Aegislash. This was a Pokemon that I was sure was going to get a Mega Evolution in Legends ZA, and I was actually quite surprised that it didn't. Aegislash has this amazing mechanic where it switches between its sword and its shield form based on whether or not it's attacking or using the move King's Shield. Because of this, you would expect it to be introduced in Pokemon Sword and Shield, but it actually was introduced in X and Y. This mechanic is really fun to play with because it introduces like new strategic choices in terms of like when you attack and how fast you make your Aegislash. Aegislash in a way is kind of like not evil Goldengo. It's not good Goldengo, it's like neutral Goldengo. Anyway, Aegislash was so good after its debut generation that it received a pretty substantial nerf, but it's still a good enough Pokemon that it will be used again in the future, I'm pretty confident. Number 62, Yveltal. Yveltal is the literal embodiment of death and destruction. Something that I think is funny about Yveltal is that in Pokemon X and Y, if you're playing Pokemon Y, then yeah, like the villain Lysander threatens to destroy the world by using Yveltal's power and like, I don't know, wipe out all life. But in Pokemon X, it's like he threatens to make everything immortal, I'm pretty sure, and make it so nothing can die, which is just very, very, very polar opposite vibes. Anyway, I've actually used Yveltal a fair bit, and it's an interesting Pokemon. It's incredibly tanky and has an interesting move pool where it can both do damage and support your team. The main thing holding Yveltal back is the fact that it's always legal when Xerneas is legal, and it has an absolutely abysmal matchup against Xerneas. But despite that, it's actually had some competitive success over the years. One thing that's neat about Yveltal is its ability Dark Aura powers up all other Dark-type moves on the field, and so you can pair it with other Dark-type Pokemon such as Incineroar or Tyranitar to give them an extra damage boost that they wouldn't get otherwise. And I've just realized that you can also pair it with Chi-Yu and Chen-Pao, and all of a sudden I'm not so excited about Yveltal in future games anymore. Number 61 is Gengar, another Generation 1 Pokemon. If this thing was not in the top 100, you know that we would have messed up. Gengar is another Pokemon that was on my World Championships winning team in its Mega Evolution form. As the only Ghost-type Pokemon in Generation 1, Gengar does a lot of heavy lifting. The design makes it both playful and a little scary, and I would guess that it's one of the most popular Pokemon ever made. Competitively, Gengar actually has had a lot of success over the years. Obviously, in its Mega form, you can do some pretty evil things, but even without its Mega, it has a lot of different interesting roles that it can fill. My friend Marcus had a ton of success using a Gengar that was both offensive and a little supportive at the same time back in both 2014 and 2015. Gengar has suffered a little from power creep, as many Pokemon have in recent generations, but I think with its Mega Evolution returning, it'll once again rise to prominence. Number 60 is the Pokemon with the lowest base stat total in the top 100. Any guesses? It's Ditto. Ditto is awesome. I actually have an Executor plushie. Wait, let me get it for you. One sec. This is my, can you see this? Wait. I gotta try, okay, the green screen is messing it up, but this is my Ditto Executor plushie. It has a little face. I'll keep him on my desk for now. Good job, Ditto Executor. You've earned it. Anyway, who's gonna tell me that Ditto's not iconic? Who's gonna tell me Ditto's not memorable? Who's gonna tell me Ditto doesn't have a great design? It is this blob of goo that turns into whatever it sees, and it keeps its derpy face in the anime. Like, that's the anime episode that I really remember, is the one where Ditto's like transforming into all these things and it keeps its silly little face. I think the best thing about Ditto is that it actually has been used competitively. It's normally a bit of a gamble because like when you run Ditto, you don't know what you're gonna get. And sometimes that'll help you and sometimes that'll really hold you back. But it has been used, especially when really powerful restricted legendary Pokemon are around. I'm glad that Ditto exists, and also it's been very useful over the years to help get competitive Pokemon in game. I love Ditto. Great job earning nearly top 50 on the list. Okay, the next two Pokemon on our list are actually the two favorite Pokemon of our video editor, Geo here. So here we go. Number 59 is Eevee. Maybe Geo just did a really cool intro for Eevee. I don't know. Eevee is in a way like the unofficial series mascot in addition to Pikachu, right? It's like Pikachu and Eevee. I mean, that's why they made Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. There's a reason they didn't do Let's Go Mr. Mime, right? Anyway, obviously the main reason that Eevee is here is because it is iconic and memorable and like, again, basically the series mascot, but also it had some competitive success. Fun fact. Eevee was given a signature Z move that we can't show you or else we'll get copyright claimed, but its signature Z move gave it a +2 boost in all of its stats, which it would then baton pass to a more traditionally considered good competitive Pokemon and try and win the game. This strategy actually won a regional back in 2018 and was a main threat that Geo actually used quite a bit back in the day, and it allowed Eevee, which is a Pokemon that doesn't normally have a lot of competitive viability, to actually be viable. Number 58 is another Pokemon that received some pretty major competitive buffs in the last couple years, Dragonite. Dragonite as the original dragon Pokemon is so cool. I think it's really interesting that like in Generation 1, they only had one dragon type line in the game, right? And instead of making it this cool and fearsome Pokemon, like, I mean, even Charizard and Gyarados, you could justify being dragons. Instead, they made it Dragonite, who's like cute and like a little bit, you know, like goofy and soft and round, but also has this really cool and like dangerous, I feel like I sound like a teenage girl, but he has a cool and dangerous side, right? I mean, I remember the Pokemon, I think it's Pokemon Horizons episode where Dragonite started breaking down doors with Lance, and I was like, oh, okay, I get it. Like he's strong. Now, competitively speaking, Dragonite was not thought to be very good for a long while. In fact, it's only really been in Scarlet and Violet that Dragonite has risen through the ranks to become a top-tier Pokemon. That being said, in part because Dragonite is so beloved, many players tried to make Dragonite work over the years. And one player, Geo, who's editing this video, gave Dragonite its most iconic moment to this date, where he manages to turn around a situation where he is down one Pokemon left against 4 of his opponents with only Dragonite.
For later, Nihilego revealing it brought the hidden power ice. It's not a one-hit knockout though. Dragonite living, oh, and Dragonite wakes up and goes for an earthquake, targeting down this Nihilego and this Hariyama. It gets the knockout on Nihilego. It gets the knockout on Hariyama after the burn damage.
But his Dragonite comes through. It's one of the best moments in competitive Pokemon history, in my opinion. And yeah, like it's a very memorable and very iconic moment. And I think it's only heightened by the fact that Dragonite is Geo's favorite Pokemon. It's a real kind of heart of the cards moment for the Pokemon video game. Number 57 is Celesteela. I like Celesteela. It's weird as anything. It's the heaviest Pokemon. Fun fact, Celesteela hits the weight limit. You cannot fly with this Pokemon, or I wouldn't recommend flying with this Pokemon. This Pokemon is flying type though, fun fact. I don't know how the general populace feels about Ultra Beasts, to be honest. Like, I like the Ultra Beasts. They're so weird that I would not be surprised if you told me they were really like hated. I think Celesteela is just so neat. It had a ton of success during Sun and Moon, sometimes to the chagrin of the players, because it would sometimes be this like super defensive, stalling, leash seed leftovers Pokemon, and you'd end up in the situation with Celesteela versus Celesteela where neither could touch each other. That was not fun. I actually won the North American International Championships with a more offensive Celesteela, using Wide Guard to protect my Primal Kyogre from Primal Groudon's moves, and to hit Xerneas. It's one of my favorite Ultra Beasts, it's had a ton of competitive success, and I hope that we get to use it again in the future sometime soon. Number 56 is Urshifu Single Strike. I don't like Urshifu. It's a stupid Pokemon, but I cannot deny that at least in the criteria that we're looking at for this list, it should be ranked pretty highly. It is iconic in part because it is such a jerk to play against. It is certainly memorable. If you've ever been attacked through Protect, you will remember Urshifu. And competitively speaking, it's pretty good. Unfortunately, it is pretty good. This is the Dark and Fighting version. The Water and Fighting version is coming up, as you can probably guess, because we haven't talked about it yet. For the most part, the water version is better. Being able to hit 3 times is a pretty big advantage over only being able to hit once. Single Strike Urshifu is mostly used as this like terrible, horrible blow up your whole opponent's team in one attack kind of Pokemon. It's more likely to hold items like the Choice Band or the Black Glasses and just try and maximize the damage of its signature move, Wicked Blow, which always crits in addition to hitting through Protect. It's a Pokemon where it's hard to imagine it ever being bad. Although I will say that during Sword and Shield, it wasn't as good as you would expect, mostly because Dynamax really invalidated a lot of the burst damage that it wanted to do, and it wasn't the best Dynamax attacker. That being said, Scarlet and Violet proved that that was more a feature of Dynamax than a weakness of Urshifu. So I am sure that whenever Urshifu returns in the future, we will have a lot of complaints about it. Number 55 is Tapu Koko. For Sun and Moon's time, Tapu Koko was quite fast. It used that speed to output huge electric type damage, but also to be a real nuisance to pin down, thanks to the fact that it would use Volt Switch to get off the field while doing damage. Surprisingly, it's actually quite a flexible Pokemon. It can be a physical attacker, although it was normally a special attacker, but it could also lean into a more supportive role rather than a damaging one. And also it made electric terrain to be a viable strategy, and although it wouldn't often be used with other electric type Pokemon just because you didn't want to overlap on your electric types too much, the thing about Tapu Koko is that it gave really good counterplay to Sleep, which is one of the most annoying status conditions in the game. Tapu Koko was like a top 3 Pokemon during the first year of Sun and Moon, and continued to be good for the rest of the generation as well. It was on that same team that I won North American Internationals with Celesteela back in 2019, for example. One big question moving forward is, will Tapu Koko ever be allowed when the Paradox Pokemon are allowed? Because having an electric terrain setter that is not Miraidon and is not a restricted Pokemon could have pretty big implications. Stepping aside from competitive for just a second, I think it's also worth noting that there's a reason that Tapu Koko is the first Tapu that you encounter when you're playing Sun and Moon, and I think it's because the developers know that Tapu Koko has the coolest design. I don't have any questions about whether or not Tapu Koko will be good in the future. I only have a question about when it comes back next. Number 54, Goldengo. Despite being a Generation 9 Pokemon, Goldengo is memorable. It's Pokemon number 1000, so you can tell it got extra care. It has a really interesting and unique evolution method where you have to get a bunch of stupid coins to feed them to your little ghoul to turn them into the gold. And it's been terrorizing competitive play since it was introduced. It has a stupid broken signature ability called Good as Gold, which I hate and stops Perish Song in addition to stopping a bunch of other useful and interesting moves. It has the same typing as Aegislash, which is why it is evil Aegislash. The real thing about Goldengo that makes it so dangerous is its signature move, Make It Rain, which, can I just say, I'm shocked that they named a Pokemon attack that. Anybody else? Nobody ever talks about this, but like they called it Make It Rain and he throws coins at the opponent and they hurt. He's not a water type, folks. He's throwing coins. And the fact that it allows Goldengo to both work as this like offensive setup Pokemon using Nasty Plot, or to be this Choice Specs burst attacker that just blows you up before you can even react, it makes Goldengo very memorable if you've played any of the formats where it's been good. Number 53 is Ogerpon Teal Mask. Now, pretty much everything I already told you about Ogerpon Cornerstone also rings true for Ogerpon Teal Mask. And I would say that competitively speaking, Ogerpon Teal Mask is probably the worst out of all the Ogerpon forms. Not that it's bad by any means. Actually, last season it finished top 4 at the North American International Championship, which is a really good placement. That being said, Ogerpon Teal outperforms Ogerpon Cornerstone because of the design. I think of this mask as Ogerpon's like true form. If you haven't explicitly given it another mask, this is the mask it's gonna have. It's also the mask that you're introduced to Ogerpon in during the story. That's part of the reason why the DLC is called the Teal Mask. So even though it's not as strong competitively as the others, it gets extra bonus points because of its design and its iconicity. Number 52 is Metagross. Who doesn't like Metagross? Raise your hand. Yeah, I was gonna tell you to get out, but that's too mean. No, you're allowed to not like Metagross. I think Metagross is great. It's a supercomputer. Hello? It's so smart. It's so smart it figured out magnets. Is that how it keeps all the Beldum attached? Wait, does it walk on Beldum? I don't know. I need to look at my Metagross lore. Anyway, Metagross is a Pokemon that's had a ton of success over the history of competitive Pokemon. It was one of the best Pokemon when I first started playing back during Black and White, and it's seen a lot of success because of its Mega Evolution too, which is a really cool Mega Evolution because it totally changes the way Metagross plays. Like there's worlds where you could justify using base Metagross over Mega Metagross because they just do such radically different things. Metagross, like many Pokemon, is a victim of power creep and hasn't seen as much use in recent years, but it still pops up every now and again. And I think it's just a testament to how good it is and how well it was designed. And coming in at number 51 is Rotom Wash. Rotom Wash is the best placing Rotom form because every gamer needs a reminder to do laundry. Unrelated, Rotom Wash also happens to be the best competitive Rotom form over the years. As an electric and water type with Levitate, it only has one weakness to Grass, which allows it to be either an offensive or a defensive Pokemon. Offensively, Thunderbolt is strong, Hydro Pump is strong, but defensively it saw a lot more success, using an item like Citrus Berry for recovery and moves like Will-O-Wisp or Light Screen to slow down opponents. Rotom Wash primarily performs better than the others because Rotom is kind of suited to be this defensive Pokemon. And because Wash Rotom has the best defensive typing, it performs the best. I also think that Rotom Wash is like maybe the funniest appliance. I don't know, the Freezer's pretty funny as well. And when you like understand competitive Pokemon, the fan is the funniest, but in a vacuum, a ghost taking over a washing machine and then opening up its stomach and blasting you with all the water, I think is especially hilarious. Rotom Wash hasn't been good for a little bit, but I do hope it comes back at some point in the future because it is just, it's such a great Pokemon. It's number 51. It's the 51st best Pokemon of all time. Folks, I have talked about a lot of Pokemon, okay? I am tired. Can you tell? I'm tired. I've talked about so many. I am gonna take a break, okay? I'll be right back, all right? I need to go look at a Digimon or something. Oh my God.
Coming in at number 50, we have one of my favorite mons of all time, Milotic. I mean, this is the epitome of design beating competitive use. Now, Milotic does have some competitive use. It's done well sometimes, but I don't know why I'm talking about its competitive use, because the reason Milotic is here is because it looks absolutely beautiful. The other thing about Milotic is that it's both infuriating and beautiful at the same time. I honestly wish that they made it harder to get Phoebus again, because going to Dewford and changing the phrase to some random nonsense in hopes that the Phoebus tile would spawn where you wanted it to, just so you could get a Milotic, is one of the most memorable experiences for me. Most beautiful Pokemon in the top 50. If you're gonna give it to something that doesn't have much competitive use, it's gotta be Milotic. All right, and coming in at number 40.
Hey, whoa, wait, how did you get in here? And what are you doing in my chair?
Well, the door was
screen?
open.
Hello?
The door was open,
Hello?
and it's really easy to just click the record button. So, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. But while I'm here, we're on the top 50. Can I do some stats? Can I do stats, and then I'll get out of here?
Okay.
I have to get a train back to New York anyways.
Fine. I like Milotic too. That's what you need to know from me. Back to our stats guy.
Okay. Let me go through the last little bit of stats until we get to the top 10. In the top 50, there are only 14 Pokemon that are not legendaries, pseudos, starters, ultra beasts, paradoxes. There's only 14 Pokemon. Once we get to top 25, there's only 5. So you just heard one of them at Milotic. I'm gonna let you guys try and guess who the other top 14 are. And then just to give you a little bit of insight into the top 50, it's really top heavy at later generations here. Generation 7, 8, and 9 are doing really, really well. And Generation 6 is really, really not doing well. There's only 2 Generation 6 Pokemon left in the entire ranking in the top 50. Everything else is about the same, so it's become pretty evenly spread out. Once we get to the top 25 and the top 10 though, you'll see that the way that things get distributed is pretty interesting. I think there's a shift in store from our usual later gen heavy things that we've been seeing. All right, I'm out of here. I gotta get a train. Wolf, come tell them about 49.
What's going on, gamers? It's me again. Okay, coming in at number 49 is
ZANE, by the way.
Oh yeah, this is ZANE. Do we? Number 49 is Calyrex Ice Rider. This Pokemon was not designed with the well-being of competitive players in mind. It has a stupid broken signature move. They gave it a signature ability, which is just 2 completely different abilities jammed into one. And the fact that it has not won the world championships yet is merely a testament to the fact that it is so strong that players heavily need to consider it when team building. Also, it is very funny. This is just true of all the Calyrex forms, but how Calyrex is introduced in Sword and Shield, where it like mind controls some poor dude, I think is really memorable, if not a little mean. Now, you may have noticed I have changed my appearance. That is because we have been recording this project for over a month, and eventually I needed a haircut. I'm sorry, I tried to put it off, but I cannot stop the passage of time, which is relevant to our next Pokemon on the list, number 48, Dialga. This is Dialga regular formy, not horse formy. Dialga's cool, man. I don't know what to tell ya. It's the deity that controls time, okay? Steel and Dragon, awesome typing. Dialga looks cool. Dialga has a primal form in Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. Fun fact, that was memorable for me as a child. I've won a regional with Dialga. I don't really know how or why. I think I just got lucky that one, but it's cool. It's a cool Pokemon. It's similar to Palkia. Everything I said about Palkia mostly applies to Dialga. Look, there's an elephant in the trick room, right? Which is that Dialga and Calyrex are next to each other, and they do somewhat similar things, right? Like they're both these bulky trick room attackers that put out a lot of damage. And the thing that we need to address is that Calyrex is a way stronger Pokemon than Dialga. And I'm saying this as someone who's won a regional with Dialga, okay? Like Calyrex, it blows it out of the water. It is a much better competitive Pokemon. The thing is, Dialga's way cooler. Dialga's like a legendary Pokemon in the truest sense of the word. It just feels so epic and grand and monstrous in a way that not many other legendary Pokemon can match. So even though it isn't technically the strongest competitive Pokemon, it's not even the strongest competitive Pokemon within 2 placements, it is so memorable and so great that it's clearly a top 50 Pokemon. Number 47, Kartana, or Kartanya. When it comes to Ultra Beast, Kartana I would say has the widest variety of usage. Kartana has been good in more formats than I think any other Ultra Beast. What I think is really neat about Kartana is the way that they've made the stats so min-max. It's extremely fast and extremely strong and it has a good physical defense stat, but it's so weak on the special side that it really doesn't stick around for long if you're not careful. And even though this sounds like a major weakness, what it ends up doing is creating this very unique Pokemon that basically is able to be very customizable depending on what you want from it. The most obvious item Kartana would run is the Focus Sash, which allows it to just be a fast and strong attacker, but other sets including the Assault Vest and actually even Health Recovery Berries saw a lot of play as well. It's a Pokemon that can use all attacking moves. It's a Pokemon that was a good Dynamax attacker or a good Z-move attacker. It can use setup moves like Swords Dance. It's a really versatile Pokemon that is fun to use and difficult difficult to go up against, and also gets bonus points for its Iconicity because it's an Ultra Beast. I think this is a Pokemon that if it were in Scarlet and Violet would have really threatened to run away with the game just because of how strong it is and because its main weakness is, in addition to its poor special defense stats, it's also its typing, having a quadruple weakness to fire. I'm glad we didn't have to deal with Terrafire Kartana, at least not yet. Number 46, Ursaluna. Ursaluna is another Pokemon that sneaks into the top 50 despite not being a legendary Pokemon. Competitively speaking, it is extremely strong. I ran Ursaluna at last year's World Championships, and the way that it felt to me is that Ursaluna was one of my legendary restricted Pokemon. At the time I'm recording this, I would say that Ursaluna is the perfect Guts attacker. Guts being the ability that gives you a damage boost if you're affected by a status condition, and this is mostly paired with the item Flame Orb. This is an archetype that they've tried out a couple times, like Conkeldurr has used it before, we've seen Hariyama, and there's been a couple other more niche ones as well. And I feel like with Ursaluna, they finally perfected it. Sorry, Flareon, you didn't make the cut here. You're not the perfect Guts attacker. And although Guts is not the most common ability, I think it's a really good thing to have in the competitive game where you have this Pokemon that becomes incredibly strong, but in order to activate its power, you need to intentionally hurt yourself. You need to inflict yourself with a status condition. Ursaluna competitively just does so much damage, but it also has good bulk as well. And it has an interesting speed stat where it can work both inside Trick Room and inside Tailwind. The design is great. I think it's a really great addition from Legends Arceus. I think the lore behind it is cool. I think the fact that it's an Ursaring evolution is really memorable because Ursaring I didn't really like that much before Ursaluna. And the last thing I'll say about it is I think it's really funny to have a Pokemon that starts out as Teddy Ursa, which is, I mean, a cute little teddy bear, turn into this monstrous destructive force. Number 45, Chen Pao. If it's shiny, it's Chen Poop. Fun fact, Chen Pao is the highest placing ice type. Now I have to be honest, personally, I do not like Chen Pao. But the reason that I don't like Chen Pao is because it is so frustrating to play against. Not only is it ridiculously strong and ridiculously fast, but the fact that its ability passively weakens all other Pokemon on the field is really hard to play against, especially if you prefer more defensive ways through the game like I do. That being said, I do respect Chen Pao. It's an incredibly good Pokemon, and I really like the design. I think on the whole, the Treasures of Ruin did a really good job with their designs, and Chen Pao is no exception. They've managed to take a Weasel, or like a Snow Weasel, or a Stoat, or whatever the heck it is, and make it look threatening, which is I would say impressive. Turns out when you give a Pokemon swords for teeth, they begin to look a little less cuddly. Chen Pao is one of the single strongest Pokemon added in Scarlet and Violet, and its legendary status only serves to enhance its memorability. Number 44 is Sylveon. I think Sylveon's placement as the second highest evolution is especially impressive because it's the most recently added evolution, and typically Pokemon added in more recent gens tend to be viewed as less favorable. That being said, I think they really knocked it out of the park with Sylveon. Sylveon is partially memorable because it was added in the generation where they added fairy types, and as the first fairy type evolution, I think that gives it extra bonus iconicity points, or at least memorability points, which is a word, as I just learned. And I think what's cool about Sylveon is that it is probably the easiest evolution to use most often. Evolutions have all been locked to the same stat values, and the stat values, while not bad, are definitely not great in all combinations. This is part of the reason why many of the other evolutions don't do great. But because of its ability Pixelate and because of its decent stat spread and the fact that it's like a bulky Pokemon but can still do good damage, Sylveon ends up being actually a pretty respectable competitive Pokemon. It doesn't often keep up as well when the power level is super high, but it's pretty rarely a Pokemon that you're disappointed to have on your team. In addition, I love the colors, I love the shiny form. I really think they did an excellent job in designing Sylveon, and I think the fact that it doesn't get hated on very much, despite being the most recent evolution, is a testament to how good they did. Speaking of fairy types, number 43 is Primarina. Competitively speaking, Primarina is a pretty good Pokemon. It's had decent success back in Sword and Shield, and during some of the lower power formats of Scarlet and Violet. That being said, the primary reason it's up here is not because of its competitive results, though of course those are not bad. Primarina, I think, is an excellent starter Pokemon. And I would go so far as to say that Primarina is an excellent Pokemon. I think it captures a lot of the whimsy and the fun of its base evolution form in a way that not all starter Pokemon do. Especially compared to the other Generation 7 starter Pokemon of Incineroar and Dekidui. Like, these are Pokemon that start out really cute, right? And then they become, I would say, not cute at all, actually. I would say they become very serious. And this is kind of a trend of a lot of starter Pokemon. They start cute and they end up cool or edgy or, you know, tough or whatever. And Primarina, I think, is in part memorable because it bucks that trend. It starts out cute and it ends cute and it's whimsical all the way. Water and Fairy is a cool typing, and it feels like it's right up against the wall of this Pokemon is good, but it's certainly not broken. And I think that's a place that more Pokemon should end up. Primarina also happens to be our highest placing water starter, which is very impressive because there's some good water starters. Number 42, Chi-Yu, or Christopher Youssef is his full government name. This Pokemon is not balanced. This Pokemon is too strong. And the worst thing is, I like the design. It's a cute little goldfish that rains down death and fire on your opponents. It is too much of a contrast, but it's one of the best Pokemon ever. Number 41 is Ogerpon Wellspring Mask. This was a tough one. I mean, I've already talked a lot about the Ogerpon, so I won't harp too much on this. What makes Ogerpon Wellspring above the other two forms that we've talked about thus far is the fact that it's better than them competitively, and I really love the tier mask design. In fact, out of all the masks, I would say in a vacuum, the water one is my favorite. However, it's not the highest placing Ogerpon because that goes to number 40, Ogerpon Hearthflame. This is a tough. I went back and forth between these two a lot. The reason that Ogerpon Hearthflame ultimately edges out Ogerpon Wellspring is that competitively speaking, it was significantly better. This wasn't true in every format. Like there was a format where Ogerpon Wellspring was the dominant Ogerpon, but Ogerpon Hearthflame has seen more success in more formats, and in some formats, Ogerpon Wellspring really wasn't used at all. I love the Ogerpon line. I'm not going to say anything else about it because I've already talked about it a lot, but I think Hearthflame is the best out of all of them, though it is by a narrow margin. Number 39 is our highest placing not fully evolved Pokemon, Porygon 2. This is quite the honor. Good job, Porygon 2. I mean, it's tough to be a not fully evolved Pokemon in the top 50, let alone the top 40. Porygon 2 is just iconic. It's an evolution of a Gen 1 Pokemon. It's probably the best bulky Trick Room setter in the game, at least not considering legendary Pokemon. It can be offensive, it can be defensive. It's seen play in high power formats, it's seen play in low power formats. There was a point where it was like maybe the best Pokemon in the game back in 2017. Great Pokemon, points across the board. Good job, Porygon 2. Number 38 is our highest placing evolution, Umbreon. Do I need to explain to anybody that Umbreon is the best evolution? I'm not saying Umbreon should be your favorite, right? I understand if people like any of the evolutions as their favorite, except Vaporeon. You should go on the list. But I think we can all agree that Umbreon is the best evolution if we're trying to rank things as objectively as we can. I mean, these are Pokemon, right? We can't be fully objective. Design-wise, out of the park. Shiny form? Oh my god, they were cooking. Competitively speaking, it is the best placing evolution ever, getting second at the World Championships. And by the way, it did that when like Primal Groudon and Primal Kyogre and Xerneas and Mega Rayquaza were running around. You know who can take light that burns the sky? Umbreon. I don't really follow the trading card game, but I am fairly certain that when it comes to evolution cards, Umbreon is almost always the most expensive. I really feel like I don't need to explain this one. We all know Umbreon's the best, even if it's not our favorite. Number 37, Whimsicott. I think it is especially funny when a Pokemon that is so evil in terms of gameplay is so cute in terms of design. Whimsicott is one of these cases. It's one of the best competitive Pokemon in history, and it's also one of the most annoying Pokemon to play against because of its annoying supportive move pool paired with its great ability Prankster. Whimsicott I think they did a great service to in giving it the fairy type, because originally when it was introduced, it was just a pure grass type, which is something that I often forget despite the fact that I played back then. The fact that Whimsicott is still keeping up and is literally a world champion, actually now a 2-time world champion, despite the fact that they've added so many strong Pokemon, I think it's a testament to how good Whimsicott is. Whimsicott also gets bonus points because it is strong, but it never feels broken or oppressive. It can feel annoying and like a real pain to play against, but it always feels fair even when it's frustrating. And I think that's pretty neat. Number 36 is Tapu Fini. They did a good job with Tapu Fini. Tapu Fini is funny because, I mean, it's the highest placing Tapu on our list here. And it's funny because when Tapu Fini first released, it was considered to be the worst Tapu Pokemon of the 4. Now I would say competitively, it's pretty close between Koko and Fini as the best, with Lele being behind them and then Bulu being a lot far behind them. Bulu's actually behind Rillaboom, who's not a Tapu. Anyway, Tapu Fini is a cool legendary Pokemon. I think the design is really sleek and really chic. What I think is coolest about Tapu Fini is that it lets you play the game in a way that is good. And what I mean by that is that Tapu Fini's Misty Surge ability sets up the Misty Terrain, which stops all status conditions from affecting Pokemon on the ground. Having a Pokemon that can just protect your team is really great and a really nice level of insurance that you can't really get otherwise. It's also a cool Pokemon because it does a ton of different roles it can fill. It can be supportive with like Nature's Madness, Icy Wind, Swagger, Heal Pulse. It can be offensive with Choice Specs. I brought that to Worlds one time. It can be set up with Calm Mind. I think Tapu Fini has a great design in 2 ways. First, the way it looks, and second, the way it plays. Number 35, Dragapult. They made a dragon catapult. It shoots the babbies out of its head. The babbies sleep in its head like it's a little kangaroo pouch, and then it shoots them at the enemy. And the worst part is that the babbies look happy when they're flying to their, I mean, it's not deaths, but to the opponent's deaths. Dragon Ghost typing is cool. Signature move, Dragon Darts, very cool. Smart targeting on a Pokemon attack. What is this, 2052? Super Turbo Ultra Fast, awesome. Very strong Dynamax attacker, almost won Worlds in Scarlet and Violet. Won an international championship in Scarlet and Violet, and it also is pretty good as a supportive Pokemon. I won the Players Cup too with like Surf, Will-O-Wisp, Light Screen, Dragapult. It has a lot of ways you can use it from a design perspective, and I also think the design and the lore are both like good and funny. And I think in terms of modern day pseudo legendaries, it stands out as one of, if not the best. Number 34 is Arcanine! Arcanine, congratulations! You did it, Arcanine! Woo! Listen, I mean, it's not the most well-known Fire Intimidate Pokemon on this channel, but it is one of the best. And when before Incineroar was around, it was the best. Arcanine was one of the best Pokemon in 2017. It's been used a number of times over the years. I have multiple regional wins with it. It's a great Pokemon because it's a fair supporting Pokemon. We don't have those anymore, but we used to, okay? It was a Pokemon that you could play the game with and be like, wow, they've designed a great Pokemon here. And it's from Generation 1, that's awesome. Actually, I want to touch on this a little bit more. Arcanine back in 2017 was so good that it was on like, I don't remember the exact numbers, but it might've been like 50, 60, maybe even 70% of teams at one point. Arcanine's also cool because similar to Dragapult, it can be like a number of different things. It can be a physical attacker with like Choice Band. It can be a supportive Pokemon. It doesn't really set up, but it can help set up the partners. And actually, I didn't really mention this because I genuinely forgot because Arcanine's just been good for so long, but even in Scarlet and Violet, wait, did I won a regional with Arcanine? I did. Wait, it's still good. The only reason we don't see more Arcanine is because of Incineroar, and I don't think we can dock Arcanine points for that. It's not Arcanine's fault. Number 33, Rillaboom. I think a monkey that plays the drums is cool. I never played Donkey Kong Drungle Beat. I gotta get out of here, man. I never played Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, but that's also a monkey who plays the drums, and they made a video game about that, right? So I mean, it makes sense. But I mean, let's be honest, the real reason that Rillaboom is up here because it is by far the best grass-type starter Pokemon in competitive play. It's not only that Rillaboom is good though, I think Rillaboom is actually somewhat iconic because it allows you to play the game in a way that no other Pokemon really does. Rillaboom is like good Tapu Bulu. And grassy terrain is a really interesting mechanic that with the passive healing it provides opens up different strategies that otherwise would not be as viable, such as using setup Pokemon with leftovers, which is otherwise a little bit slow. The fact that it works as both a support Pokemon and an offensive powerhouse only makes it more interesting in my opinion. I think it's a neat Pokemon, and I think it's especially cool to have a starter Pokemon be so good. Sometimes. Rillaboom is okay. Anything better than Rillaboom and we're over the line. Number 32 is Hydreigon. Hydreigon is one of the best Pokemon added in Generation 5. In addition, Hydreigon has a really storied competitive legacy. It was one of the best competitive Pokemon back in Generation 5. It won Worlds twice, and even despite the fact that they made Fairy types in part because Hydreigon was so good, it still continued to be a good Pokemon over the years. I like Hydreigon a lot. I mean, I like all of the Generation 5 Mons, well, most of them, some of them, a few of them, I like them a lot, but Hydreigon is certainly one of them, certainly one of my favorites. Also, I auditioned for the role of Hydreigon. I didn't get it though. That's too bad. I'm Hydreigon. I tried to pick things up, but also I eat them. I'm Hydreigon. Okay, number 31 I don't like at all, but it is true. 31st on the list is Urshifu Rapid Strike. We hate Urshifu. I know we hate Urshifu. I don't like Urshifu, but we have to respect it. We cannot deny how good this Pokemon is. Urshifu kind of sits in that category for me of Pokemon that like we all hate, but they're so memorable that like we'd be sad if they went. Okay, that's not true. I would not be sad if Urshifu was never in another game again. That's the honest truth. But I think Urshifu is such a bastion of competitive play and of like, it's just such a jerk. You know what I mean? Like it's so memorable and frankly, it's so iconic. And it is like, the problem is that even though I hate Urshifu, it meets all of the criteria, right? It's so iconic. It is so good competitively. And I guess like, I guess the design is okay. The design is not, I mean, that's subjective, right? But I mean, a bear that hits through Protect and just punches everything to death is kind of funny. So I don't know. I don't like Urshifu, but it does deserve its place on this list. Speaking of Pokemon that are too strong and I don't especially like, Calyrex Shadow Rider. Everything that I said about kind of the lore of Calyrex before still holds true here. It's an incredibly potent competitive Pokemon. I think most people know how good this Pokemon is, so I'm just gonna move on. Number 29 is Koraidon. Koraidon outplacing Shadow Rider because they each have a world championship win. I love Koraidon. I think Koraidon is like Shadow Rider if it were not evil, and also we're not the same Pokemon at all. Koraidon is cool. First of all, design-wise, I like Koraidon a lot more than I like Miraidon. I think the fact that it actually has like a wheel and like rolls around, or like actually it runs around, which is even funnier compared to Miraidon, who kind of just floats. But beyond the way it looks and the fact that it's iconic, it's on the front of a game. I mean, it's very memorable. It has a really major role in the story. It's like with you the whole. Actually, I want to talk about that. It's with you like throughout the whole course of the story. I think that the way that they do Koraidon and Miraidon in Scarlet and Violet is like a way better way of introducing legendary Pokemon than anything we've had before. The fact that it's with you the whole game makes it feel like actually like a partner Pokemon in a way that none of the other legendaries do. They tried to do something like this with like Nebby back in Generation 7, but the fact that it has to evolve to reach its final form means that like I have a connection to Cosmog after playing the whole game of Sun and Moon. I don't have a connection to like Solgaleo or Lunala, you know? And competitively speaking, Koraidon is just excellent. I mean, it's literally the defending world champion. Having a Pokemon that can set the sun up that doesn't lose to Kyogre is a very interesting dynamic in competitive play. And the fact it also enables all the photosynthesis Pokemon really opens up a number of ways that you can use it. Number 28, Snorlax. I'm not even gonna talk about the design or the iconicity because come on, like this is one of the most beloved Pokemon of all time for a reason. What I will tell you is something you might not know is Snorlax for a period became one of the best and most devastating Pokemon in the entire game. It won the national championships. It got pretty close to winning the world championships, I think. And I brought it to multiple championships in that year. And not to be quirky or funny, like it was genuinely very good. Snorlax nowadays doesn't do quite as well, but I mean, it's Snorlax, so at some point they're gonna give it a mega evolution or God forbid a proper evolution. They're never gonna do that, but like, at some point it will get something again, and I think it'll be good again. Number 27 is Venusaur, or Venusaur if you're cultured. This is our highest placing grass type starter Pokemon. And honestly, given the fact that it has like 3 different forms, I would hope that it would place decently high because they've given it a lot. Competitively speaking, Venusaur is incredible. It was one of the best Gigantamax attackers. It was a pretty good Mega Evolution. It works outside of either in its base form thanks to Chlorophyll and Sleep Powder. Venusaur gets obviously bonus points for being iconic and having a good design, but I do think it's cool that of the Generation 1 starters, 2 of them have been significantly great Pokemon throughout competitive Pokemon's life cycle. I think that's neat. Number 26 is Latios. Latios may have been the single best Pokemon in Generation 5 competitive play. Latios actually may have been the reason why they felt they needed to add fairy types into the game because this Pokemon was real hard to deal with. You would switch into Dragon Gem Draco Meteor and lose half your health. Latios I think is also memorable because of its legendary Pokemon status and because just like Latios and Latias in general are not only very popular but also like pretty memorable I think because of each other. Like the fact that we have effectively lovebirds Pokemon, that's pretty neat. And the fact that they've both been good competitively and Latios especially was running the game at a time, I think it only adds to Latios' lore and its kind of place in the culture. And actually, even though Latios was not good for like almost 10 years, in Scarlet and Violet it won at least one regional. And it's certainly not a Pokemon that we see pop up all that often anymore, but I think it's done more than enough to prove its place as one of the best Pokemon ever. Number 25 is Zamazenta. Zamazenta's arc of going from a Pokemon with effectively 0 usage to nearly winning the World Championships 2 years in a row, I think is such an incredible storyline. Zamazenta is also our highest placing fighting type. Design-wise, I don't really know how people are gonna feel about this. Like, obviously it looks so stupid. Like, I'm not arguing with that, but also it so obviously knows that it looks stupid. Like, nobody looks at this Pokemon and thinks, they surely thought that no one was gonna have any questions about this, right? So personally, given that I think it's very self-aware and it feels like it's in on the joke, I like the design. And as a legendary Pokemon on the cover of a game, I think it's iconic. I genuinely also like the storyline where Zacian was like the best competitive Pokemon in Sword and Shield. And then Zamazenta was one of the best in Scarlet and Violet. And in each of the games, the other dog really did not have very much usage at all. I think that's a really neat, like, little mini storyline within competitive play. Number 24 is Raging Bolt or Raging Bingus. This Pokemon's pretty good. Some of you will be looking at Raging Bolt and being like, this Pokemon looks stupid. And you're right, it does look stupid. But then again, giraffes look stupid and they're real life animals. So I don't know what you want me to say about that. Raging Bolt has been an incredible competitive Pokemon with a just litany of results. Did I use that word right, Zane?
Yeah, good job, Wolf.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I gotta go back to school to learn my letters. What was I saying? Raging Bolt. This Pokemon's pretty good. This Pokemon has a lot of results. But what I really like about Raging Bolt is that they took Raikou, who's a very memorable Pokemon, and they somehow made a Pokemon that feels inspired by, but like also completely distinct from it in its own way. Like sometimes I forget that Raging Bolt is a Raikou like paradox Pokemon and not its own thing, which like I would never look at Fluttermane and be like, oh, that's not based on Mischievous, you know, but I could look at Raging Bolt and forget that it's related to Raikou, but it still feels close enough in design that it doesn't feel like a stretch either. Well, I mean, maybe it stretches its neck. Anyway, number 23 is Volcaronia, who's our highest placing bug type Pokemon. Say what you will about Generation 5 because the low points are pretty low, but the high points of Generation 5 are peak, okay? Volcaronia going into that like sand desert place and finding this crazy fire bug that, I mean, I thought it was a legendary when I first encountered it. I don't know about anybody else. It's a very memorable moment. The fact that Volcarona has been one of the best competitive Pokemon over the years, pretty much since its introduction, actually literally since its introduction. And it's done this despite the fact that it not only is a bug type, which is the worst type in the game, but also it has a quadruple weakness to rock as well as being weak to like water and flying, both of which are common types in the game. It's really just a testament to how good of a Pokemon it is. Number 22, Gyarados. I don't need to tell you why Gyarados is one of the best Pokemon of all time. Actually, you know what? I'm not gonna. You already know. You already know. I'm not telling you anything. Moving on. Number 21, Zapdos. Zapdos is by far the best of the legendary birds, and I mean that both in a design perspective and in the fact that it is the best competitively of the 3. It's a Pokemon whose track record has so much longevity that like pretty much very few other Pokemon on this list can challenge it. And the fact that it's a legendary Pokemon from Generation 1 only enhances its score. Number 20 is our best placing Ultra Beast. It's Stakataka. They made a house and the house is made of rocks and the rocks are gonna kill you. I love Stakataka. It's so funny And it's so good. It's a world champion. The fact that they gave it this terrible rock and steel typing and it's still so good is just incredible. Stakataka is so slow. It's made of these big heavy bricks. I mean, your house can't move very fast, neither can Stakataka, okay? But the fact remains that it's ridiculously good defense stat and very useful utility toolkit, plus it's actually good attack stat, makes it a really threatening Pokemon. My favorite thing about Stakataka is it learns Trick Room, which is a psychic move. But you might wonder why it learns Trick Room, because it's not a psychic type, right? And the reason is it's Trick Room, right? And Stakataka is a house, it's full of rooms. I lied. Actually, my favorite thing about Stakataka is that at Worlds 2019, I used Stakataka at Worlds and I gave it the Shuka Berry. And so that's Stack Shuka, which is similar to Shakshuka, which is one of my favorite things to make. And actually, here's a super fun fact for you. At Zane's bachelor party, he held a cooking contest and I made Wolfclick Shakshuka and I won the contest. And that's the honest to God truth. Now, there's technicalities involved. I wasn't the best dish there, but I did win the contest and ultimately that's what matters.
There were several disqualifications, but I did choose the winner.
Didn't get disqualified. I'm the best. Moving on, number 19 is Fluttermane, who is our best placing Paradox Pokemon, as she should be. Fluttermane is awesome. Competitively speaking, I'm not gonna get into it because you already know. Even if this is your first video you've ever watched on this channel, if you don't already know, you're gonna learn, okay? This Pokemon is not balanced, okay? Design-wise though, I think it's really neat. Fluttermane has a ton of personality in the design. Like she just looks so sassy and kind of like mean girly. I don't know, I think she's great. And in terms of the competitive design, I almost made a video basically saying, even though at times it has been the #1 most used Pokemon, which maybe indicates that they messed up, I actually think from a competitive standpoint, Fluttermane is one of the most interesting designed Pokemon and one of the best designed Pokemon in Scarlet and Violet, because the way the stats are distributed allows it to be used in so many different ways. You can use Choice Specs, you can use Life Orb, you can use super fast booster energy, you can be special attack boosting booster energy, you can run bulky, you can run offensive. I just think it's rare for a Pokemon to have so many options and for all of them to be so widely considered good. And I think what people may have not realized about Fluttermane is despite the fact that it's had pretty wide usage across Scarlet and Violet's lifespan, the fact of the matter remains that most of the sets that it's used have varied format to format. And so it looks like, oh yeah, Fluttermane is just broken, but really what it's saying is Fluttermane is so versatile. I think it's a cool Pokemon. I think it's one of the best Pokemon ever made. 19 for you, Fluttermane. Number 18 is Zacian. This is our best placing steel Pokemon and the last Pokemon from Generation 8 on the list. What you have to understand about Zacian is that in the formats in Sword and Shield where it was allowed, it reached a level of dominance that was just almost unheard of. 2/3 of all teams at the World Championships in 2022 had Zacian, which was the second highest usage in the tournament, only behind Incineroar. And that's impressive because you were only allowed to have 2 restricted Pokemon on your team. And for 2/3 of the players, one of those was Zacian. It has been heavily nerfed since then, so it did not have anywhere near a stronger performance in Scarlet and Violet. Some players really believed in it, and they got some results with the good old Sword Dog. Design-wise, I like Zacian a lot more than I like Zamazenta, because although it is still goofy, it definitely feels goofy in a way that is more acceptable and a little bit more subtle than Zamazenta lugging around this big shield. I think it's one of the most popular Pokemon from Generation 8, and I'm basing this off of that image where like it's the shelves of the plushies and there's only Zamazenta left and all the Zacians are gone. I don't know. I think it's a great Pokemon. It's certainly one of the best. Number 17 is Amoonguss. Amoonguss has a number of records. It's our best placing poison type. It's our best placing grass type. And fun fact about Amoonguss actually has the most years that it made World's top cuts, which is 10. It's the only Pokemon to get double digits, baby. Very impressive record for Amoonguss. Competitively speaking, Amoonguss is like a top 3 best competitive Pokemon of all time, probably. 17 might feel a little low given that, but I think that to the general public, it's not quite as iconic and maybe not quite as memorable as it should be because it's a great Pokemon. It's a cute little mushroom. You've seen a lot of Amoonguss on this channel, so I don't want to harp too much on it, but what I will say is that my girlfriend's mother is like learning more about Pokemon because of me, and her favorite Pokemon is Amoonguss. So I think that should say something about how cute Amoonguss is. If you don't like Amoonguss, you should. It's a great Pokemon. Number 16, oh god, number 16 is Smeargle. How did Smeargle end up this high? Well, I know why. Unfortunately, this is kind of Urshifu territory where I hate Smeargle, one of my least favorite Pokemon of all time, but I can't deny Smeargle is pretty good by our metrics here. Early generation Pokemon, incredible signature gimmick. I mean, super evil in practice, but in theory, an incredible gimmick. Super good competitive results, literally threatened to ruin competitive Pokemon. The year that competitive Pokemon was at its lowest point was exclusively because of Smeargle. Go watch the Big 6 video if you haven't already, if you want to know what I'm talking about. I don't really have much to say. This Pokemon is toxic, but it's just so incredibly good. Number 15 is a Pokemon that is very similar to Smeargle in its stats. It's Miraidon. I personally like Koraidon more, but I cannot deny that Miraidon places higher on this list. That's largely because Miraidon was, I mean, the most dominant legendary Pokemon out of Generation 9, even compared to something like Chenpao or Chi-Yu. It's also the highest placing electric type on our list here. Miraidon won Worlds in the first year that it was legal, and dominated for most of its second, despite the fact that the 2025 season had 2 different formats with different rule sets that allowed a Miraidon. Miraidon was on the #1 team to beat in both of those formats. And although it didn't win Worlds that year, it did come pretty close, and it certainly looked like it might have going into it. The power of Miraidon just cannot be overstated. It is just so ridiculously strong. I don't think I'm going to forget Electro Drift one-shotting Pokemon that were like neutral to it for a long time. And of course, it is memorable and it is iconic because it's on the cover of a game, and I mean, it is cute. It's not just cute as Koraidon, but feeding your Miraidon a little sandwich to make him feel better, that's a good Pokemon moment. Number 14 is our final Pokemon from Generation 5. Landorus Therian. Landorus Therian was at one point the king of competitive play. And despite the fact that it hasn't been as good, at least in Scarlet and Violet, and hasn't felt necessarily as broken as it used to since like Incineroar was introduced. Despite all these things, Landorus's impact on the culture is such that to this day, it still is in some ways the mascot of all competitive play. It is incredibly strong. I mean, even to this day, Landorus is still an incredibly good Pokemon. And it was so dominant for so many years. I think Landorus will at one point come back in the future, maybe when Incineroar is not around. Number 13 is Tyranitar. This is our last Pokemon from Generation 2. It's also our last rock-type Pokemon on the list. I actually don't have that much to say about Tyranitar. I feel like we all know how good Tyranitar is. The fact that it has one of the worst typings in the game and yet manages to consistently be such a dominant force in competitive play is just a testament to how strong it is. I genuinely think that the reason they've never given a legendary Pokemon Sandstream is because they saw how good Tyranitar was, despite the fact that like it has such abysmal typing, and they didn't want to give a legendary Pokemon that because Tyranitar really scared them. Design-wise, Tyranitar is also extremely memorable. And I will say that Tyranitar, I think, especially for those of us who played early gens, is a real testament to the trust that players put in the game, because you have to spend so much time leveling up Larvitar and Pupitar in order to get them to evolve, and going through all of that and finally getting to level 55 and then finally getting your evolution, and you like watch it and you watch it and you watch it and eventually you see, and it's this amazing like rock dragon looking monster. I think that was a huge payoff for a lot of people that really made them feel like investing into their Pokemon was worth their time. Number 12 is Lunala. Lunala is great. First of all, it's a 2-time world champion and it placed second in the world championships once, and it's only been legal for 4 different world championships, which is a huge testament to how good Lunala is. And while I know I just said that like playing through the entire game with Cosmog doesn't necessarily make you feel attached to Lunala, I do still think that playing through the entire game with Cosmog makes you feel more connected to Lunala or Solgaleo than like, I don't know, Pokemon Silver where you just like encounter Lugia at the end, right? Design-wise, I like the fact that it's like this literal representation of the moon. We have other Pokemon that are like related to the moon. We have like the Fairy Line, we have the Ursalunas who have moon imagery on them. We have Lunatone who is a moon but looks kind of like a dork. I'm sorry, I like Lunatone, he is a dork though. But Lunala walks this line between cool and chic and like kind of dark but also like not too much. I don't know, I think it's a really great designed Pokemon. One of the best competitive Pokemon, incredible results across the board. There's a reason why it's this close to the top of the list. Okay, number 11. This is our final Pokemon before the top 10. It is Arceus. Now, Arceus is our highest placing normal type. If it's a normal type at the time I'm recording this, kind of depends on its mood, I guess. And Arceus is a bit hard to talk about because like it's never really been legal in any official competitive format that you can play in person. We've had a couple ladders where it's used, but like not a format that people are actually entering tournaments for that have any kind of impact. That being said, the fact that it places this high, despite the fact that it has effectively 0 competitive relevancy, is a testament to how strong its scores are across the board. Arceus is like one of the Pokemon people might know if they only know 10 Pokemon. I remember it was a huge deal when Arceus was mentioned in like a Dr. House TV show episode. Anyway, I think people can understand why the God of Pokemon is very near the top of the list. Okay, we only have 10 Pokemon left, the 10 best Pokemon of all time. Zane, is there anything you want to mention before we jump on into this final sprint through this marathon?
There are 4 generations that we've already said goodbye to. Those generations don't have any other Pokemon left in the top 10. At Gen 2, you had Tyranitar. In Gen 5, we had Landorus Therian. In Gen 8, it was Zacian. And surprisingly, despite Gen 9's incredible stats for all of the top 100, the top half, the top 50, we've already said goodbye to Gen 9 with Miraidon. So that leaves us with 5 generations left that have Pokemon. I won't tell you what they are, because you're about to find out. Wolf, take it away.
Okay, coming in at number 10 on our list, the 10th best Pokemon of all time. It's a Pokemon that outplaced every single Paradox Pokemon, every single Ultra Beast, and it did this all without any kind of special treatment. Every Pokemon remaining on this list is either a starter Pokemon, a legendary, or a pseudo-legendary Pokemon. And yet this Pokemon made top 10 while having nothing, none of that, no special buffs. The 10th best Pokemon of all time is Mimikyu. Mimikyu also happens to be our highest placing ghost type Pokemon. I love Mimikyu. It is so cute. The lore is so sweet. It just wants to be loved, so it dresses up as Pikachu because it knows that everybody loves Pikachu. That's like so cute. And it was actually a good competitive Pokemon. I brought it to the World Championships at least once. Its disguise ability is really interesting from a competitive standpoint, but I also love how it fits in with the lore, and it's so cute. When Mimikyu shows up to the battle, it has its disguise all nice and proper, and then when it takes damage, the disguise falls over. How could you not like Mimikyu? Come on. And I think it's extra sweet that it's literally this disguise that sets Mimikyu apart from many of the other competitors for the roles that it fills, and is the reason why Mimikyu has seen competitive play at all. Like, it really comes down to this ability. Also, it has the same typing as Fluttermane, which is neat, and we know Ghost and Fairy is pretty nice. I love Mimikyu. I have a dish magnet. Hang on, I gotta show you. Have I already showed you the dish magnet? I'm gonna show you the dish magnet. Hang on, I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. So this is my dish magnet, okay? This side is the clean side, it's Pikachu, and then this side is the dirty side, is Mimikyu. I like Mimikyu. And actually, Pikachu was number 100 on our list, so in a way it's fitting that Mimikyu is number 10. Coming in at number 9 is one of the most iconic Pokemon to come out of Generation 3. It's a Pokemon that has won the World Championships both with its Mega Evolution and without. It's a Pokemon that is currently tied for having the most number of World Championship victories. And it's a Pokemon that you hated playing against, whether it was in competitive play or casual on the playground. It's Salamence. I think if you polled 1,000 people and you asked them which Pokemon would you like to have in real life if you could only have one, a good chunk of them would say Salamence. Design-wise, I don't really think I have to tell you that this Pokemon is cool. Now, I have something to say here, okay? ZANE has banned me from saying the word cool, and I've slipped a couple in past his notice, but I'm on thin ice. So I'm using my last usage of the word cool to describe a Pokemon here, because Salamence is undeniably cool. And that's it, I'm out of uses now, okay? I hope you appreciated that, Salamence fans. Some dragon Pokemon don't really look like dragons. Like even Drampa, who is a dragon, that's Dragon Grandpa. You know what I mean? Like no one's like, oh my God, there's the Drampa until it burns down your house, right? But Salamence, that's a dragon. That's a capital D dragon. I think that when you have a Pokemon that is so impressive and so iconic as Salamence, I'm sure it can be really intimidating to try and make a Mega Evolution, because how do you make something that feels like an evolution to a Pokemon that already feels finished and complete? And the fact that Mega Salamence exists and is widely liked, I think is an incredible achievement. It only enhances Salamence more. And this isn't easy because like, I haven't heard a lot of people talk about how much they love Roaring Moon. I'm not even dogging on Roaring Moon, but like, I mean, Mega Salamence is like if Roaring, it's like the what is it? Daniel and the cooler Daniel. That's Mega Salamence and Roaring Moon. Oh, I said cool again. Oh no, I was referencing it. It's fine. I also think that the lore of Salamence really enhances how much people like it. The fact that it's this little dragon that all it wants to do is fly, and it keeps jumping off cliffs and bashing its head into the ground. And then it evolves and you're like, oh, it's gonna fly, and it turns into a circle. And then finally it jumps off the cliff enough and it learns to actually fly. I think that's great. Salamence competitively has been one of the best Pokemon ever. Like I said, it won Worlds 3 times, and one of those was in its base form back in 2009, I think, or maybe 2008. And it won Worlds twice in its Mega form in 2018 and 2019. There's a reason it's one of the most beloved Pokemon of all time, and it's certainly one of the 10 best. Number 8 on our list shares some things in common with Salamence. It's a world champion. It is a Pokemon from Generation 3. It has the same typing. But one thing that separates it from Salamence for me personally is that this Pokemon was present on my World Championship winning team. Coming in at number 8 is Rayquaza. Unfortunately, I cannot tell you that Rayquaza is cool. I have been banned. Here's what I will say about Rayquaza though. Pokemon Emerald is pretty widely considered to be one of, if not the best Pokemon games in the series. And as the cover mascot of Emerald, Rayquaza is already starting out with some pretty great points. Then you play through Emerald and you realize that Rayquaza is so cool that it comes down and it beats up both Groudon and Kyogre.
No, it's not cool.
Then you play through Emerald and you get to the end, and maybe you've played Ruby and Sapphire and you realize like, oh wow, Kyogre and Groudon are pretty strong, and Rayquaza just comes down from the sky and smacks them around and they're like, we're sorry, and then they have to go run away, and you go, oh, this Pokemon is not worth messing with. And then maybe, you know, a couple years pass, you know, whatever, and then eventually, you know, you're older and you're playing a new Pokemon game, and you hear whispers, okay? You hear whispers of the strongest Pokemon ever made. And then you learn about Mega Rayquaza, and you go, oh, that can't be balanced. and then you get your Mega Rayquaza and you realize, oh, that was in fact not balanced. Rayquaza in the lore, and I don't necessarily even mean the lore of the game, but in the lore of the hearts of the community, is one of the most poignant Pokemon. It's a Pokemon that you remember even when you forget the other Pokemon's names. You never forget Rayquaza's name. And the fact is, it was one of the best competitive Pokemon ever. I mean, again, I did win Worlds with it. I'm sorry to mention it, but it's relevant to this Pokemon, so I gotta talk about it. I think Mega Rayquaza specifically is worth noting that, although I don't really talk too much about single battles here, Mega Rayquaza was initially the only Pokemon banned from the tier that like allows all the banned Pokemon. That's how strong it was. And yet, despite everything that I've said about Rayquaza, it somehow is not our highest placing dragon type. That honor instead goes to number 7, Garchomp. This one feels so obvious. Like, did anyone click on this video and think that Garchomp was not going to be a top 10 Pokemon of all time? If you did, come on. Like, come on. What are you doing? It's Garchomp. Hello. Garchomp also happens to be our highest placing pseudo-legendary Pokemon, narrowly edging out Salamence. Garchomp is an especially memorable Pokemon for casual fans because of Cynthia. Cynthia for a long time being considered the strongest champion, in part because of her Garchomp and how much damage this Pokemon would do at the end of your Elite Four run. Competitively speaking, Garchomp has really held up over the years. It was one of the best Pokemon in Generation 5 when I started playing. It was one of the best Pokemon in Generation 7 too. As recently as last season, Garchomp has had a number of good results as well. Actually, even this season in Regulation H, Garchomp is still getting use. It's a Pokemon that has withstood the test of time, and I think has set the bar really high when it comes to what people expect from pseudo-legendary Pokemon. Number 6 is our final Generation 6 Pokemon and the number 1 best fairy type Pokemon, Xerneas. It is no secret that I don't like Xerneas, but the reason I don't like Xerneas is because it is the single most broken competitive Pokemon ever made. Xerneas is so strong that sometimes knocking out 2 of your opponent's Pokemon would instantly lose you the game because it would allow Xerneas and a support to come in for free, and if you were out of position, that was literally just it. Game over. And design-wise, as much as I hate the Pokemon, I have to say that it's a really, really good Pokemon from a design perspective. It feels ethereal. It's this majestic deer creature that like represents life and at the same time kills all Pokemon that go up against it. And I think that Xerneas actually is only continuing to rise in the eyes of the people because of Legends ZA and how it plays a little bit of a role in the story there. It is unfortunately not a very balanced Pokemon, but that's also part of the reason why it earns a spot this high up on the list with number 6. There's some irony here, by the way, because 6 is my favorite number, and Xerneas is maybe my least favorite Pokemon, and so there's a contradiction there for sure. Now, the next 2 Pokemon on our list share something in common. They each are tied for the most top cuts of the World Championships in history, with that number being 25 top cuts each. And what I would say about these 2 Pokemon is that they are emblematic of the old era of VGC and the new era of VGC. So coming in at number 5, it's Cresselia. Cresselia was, for a long time, the best competitive Pokemon. It's the last Pokemon for Generation 4, and it's our highest placing Psychic type. What made Cresselia so good was its immense bulk. It sat in the field, it was impossible to remove, it offered speed control, it offered support, and it was a Pokemon that you could not ignore because it would continue to disrupt your team and mess with your game plan until you lost. If you asked any Pokemon player prior to Generation, 7, what the best competitive Pokemon in history was, they would say Cresselia. Even after Landorus Therian was introduced, I think they would still say Cresselia. And the fact that this is a legendary Pokemon and a legendary Pokemon with really cool lore behind it as well, I think only enhances it. I still remember playing that mission in Generation 4, the mystery gift, where you went and got Darkrai and you had to wake a sleeping child from an endless nightmare, and you needed Cresselia's like lunar wing to do that. That still sticks in my brain. Darkrai may never be competitively legal, but its link to Cresselia only actually enhances Cresselia's lore. I think Cresselia is also very interesting as a competitive Pokemon because often when we think of the best Pokemon in the game, we think of Pokemon like Fluttermane or Urshifu or Xerneas, these Pokemon that are just so offensive in nature and so capable of just blowing open foes. And yet Cresselia is a defensive Pokemon. I did win US Nationals with an offensive expert belt Hidden Power Fire Cresselia, but that was the exception, not the rule. And actually, I'm happy that the Pokemon that carried the mantle of best competitive Pokemon was a defensive Pokemon. I think that says more positive things about our game than a more offensive one. And it reminds me a little of the number 4 slot on our list, a Pokemon that is infamous, I would say. A Pokemon that is the new face of competitive Pokemon. You know him, I don't know if you love him, but I know you know who he is. It's Incineroar. Incineroar has somehow become something of a channel mascot. I think that nobody watching this expected him to be outside of the top 10. At the 4th best Pokemon of all time, he's the final Pokemon from Generation 7 and is the highest placing dark type Pokemon. In terms of his place in the general culture, I think being a starter Pokemon is pretty good. I think the fact that he's added in Super Smash Bros. As a playable character, also pretty memorable. He also was used, I think, by the professor, right? Professor Kukui has an Incineroar because he's the Masked Royale or whatever. That feels like an Incineroar Pokemon. All these things kind of enhance Incineroar's memorability and on the way that people feel about him. Of course, the real reason Incineroar is this high is because he is the single best competitive Pokemon ever made. I have made an entire video about Incineroar, so I'm not going to sit here and talk for 20 minutes about him. If you're not aware of how good Incineroar is, what I will say is that it took a pretty strong Pokemon to make Landorus Therian obsolete. And that's exactly what Incineroar did. And he did it without any kind of special forms or transformations or mega evolutions. He did it all the old-fashioned way with just pure strength and overwhelming ability, which is not the case for number 3 on our list. You may have noticed that I didn't say that Incineroar was the highest placing fire-type Pokemon, or that Incineroar is even the highest placing fire-type starter, because there is a starter that outplaces him, and that's Charizard. If the only thing I cared about when making this list was cultural impact, Charizard would be number 1. There's a reason that the most expensive Pokemon cards are typically Charizards. It's a Generation 1 Pokemon. It is one of the most popular Pokemon of all time. It's many players' favorites. It's part of the reason why Pokemon became such a big phenomenon as a whole, right? I mean, Charizard's popularity and it's just incredible design. I think it really drew the hearts of many people across the globe. And the surprising thing about Charizard is that despite the fact that it has a ton of weaknesses, including a quadruple weakness to rock, and despite the fact that it's a Generation 1 Pokemon, Charizard is good. Charizard is one of the best competitive Pokemon of all time. It has 2 Mega Evolutions that were both good. Charizard Y was overall better, though I did win a regional with Charizard X, and in Sword and Shield, Charizard was given a special Gigantamax form that genuinely threatened to take over the game. Charizard was actually the main Dynamax attacker on the best team in Sword and Shield, despite the fact that that team had Groudon. And the most messed up thing is that Charizard, despite the fact that it's gotten all this love, it doesn't even need it. Charizard won an international championship last season in its base form, just using choice specs and its hidden ability Solar Power to output huge amounts of fire type damage. The fact that a Pokemon that is this popular and this memorable and this iconic is also so strong, it's really just remarkable. And although it's true that the Pokemon did do this on purpose, I mean, they gave him all these extra forms, it is still an impressive feat nonetheless for Charizard. 2 Pokemon left. The 2 best Pokemon of all time. I'm curious if anybody knows what they are offhand, if you've been kind of like loosely keeping track of any Pokemon that you thought should be mentioned but haven't been. I'll give you a hint. These 2 Pokemon are both legendaries, and they're a legendary duo. In fact, they are legendary opposites, even enemies. You've probably figured out which Pokemon I'm talking about. But the question is, which of them is number 2 and which of them is number 1? Well, I won't leave you in suspense any longer. This month-long odyssey of mine is nearing its end, and I am excited to reach its conclusion. So, without further ado, the second best Pokemon of all time goes to Groudon. Here's what I want to say about Groudon and the Gen 3 legendaries as a whole. In my opinion, the Generation 3 legendaries are the first generation to really feel like true legendary Pokemon. Generation 1, you have the legendary birds, but the legendary birds are kind of tucked away. They're not at the forefront of the game's plot. In fact, it's possible to get through the game and not even know that they're there. The same can be said of Mewtwo. Mewtwo certainly is legendary, but it feels like a secret. You get what I'm saying, right? Mew is a mythical Pokemon. It's not even accessible unless you have a special like mystery gift, right? Then we have Generation 2, and we have Ho-Oh and Lugia. And Ho-Oh and Lugia, you know, they're on the cover of the game for the first time. And they are cool birds. They feel more rare than truly legendary. And then we get Generation 3, and we get these Pokemon capable of immense amounts of power, Pokemon that are literally threatening to end the world. These aren't Pokemon hiding away in caves. These aren't Pokemon that are doing acts of good service, right? They aren't reviving fainted Pokemon in a tower. These are Pokemon that have been sleeping and they are pissed that they got woken up and they are making everybody pay for it. Moreover, the fact that these Pokemon are literally altering the terrain of the world, like they're not just threatening to blow up the planet, they're threatening to overwhelm it. Groudon is threatening to eliminate all the water. We need that. I need that. Groudon doesn't care. There's a lot of great legendary Pokemon out there, but I think the impact of Groudon and Kyogre is so intense because this was the first generation that really introduced legendaries as these like primordial beings. Like, yeah, Lugia and Ho are mysterious and Mewtwo was made in the lab and you know, is threatening and is scary, right? But they didn't feel like forces of nature. They didn't feel like these uncontrollable behemoths in the same way that Groudon and Kyogre do. So from an iconicity standpoint, Groudon gets a perfect score. And Groudon also gets a perfect score in the design category. This hulking land monster would already be impressive. But that's before I talk about Primal Groudon, which really does take everything about Groudon and turn it up to 11. I love the fact that they added fire typing to the design. It always felt like it maybe should have been there. And the fact that it becomes this Pokemon with lava seeping through the cracks, it feels like an evolution in the truest sense, while also feeling like a more primal form. It looks like this more ancient monstrosity. And then we have to talk about competitive play. Competitive play is the only place where Groudon does not score a perfect 10. But leading with that is a little misleading, because Groudon is absolutely one of the strongest competitive Pokemon in history. It is really only in Scarlet and Violet that Groudon has not looked like the single best restricted Pokemon in the game or one of them. In the first year that Groudon was legal in competitive play, it won the World Championships, alongside Kyogre actually. The second year Groudon was legal, it placed second, only losing to me in the finals. The third year it was legal, it won the World Championships again in 2019. The fourth year that it was legal, Groudon did not win the World Championships, but it did place second. And it was on the team that dominated competitive play for the duration of the season. And in both 2010 and 2022, it did it without its primal form. The fact that this Pokemon has stood the test of time, has been around for over a decade, and it is still consistently putting up results, it simply is a feat that can't be matched by nearly any other Pokemon. But it can be matched by one, because the #1 best Pokemon of all time is Groudon's counterpart, Kyogre. Groudon and Kyogre in some ways are a pair, not only in the lore, but also in competitive play. Because whenever one of them is good, you often need the other in order to shut it down. These two Pokemon are designed so well because they are truly diametrically opposed. Kyogre threatens Groudon offensively, Groudon threatens Kyogre defensively. From a design perspective and from an Iconicity perspective, Kyogre also receives 2 perfect scores, just like Groudon. And Kyogre has followed a similar path to Groudon as well if you look at the World Championships. It won Worlds in 2010 and in 2016. It did not win Worlds in 2019, though it did get close. And in 2022, neither Groudon or Kyogre won the World Championships. But the reason why Kyogre outplaces Groudon narrowly is that in Scarlet and Violet, the tiebreaker year, Kyogre performed meaningfully better than Groudon. It did not win the World Championships, and frankly, it didn't come all that close, but it was consistently stronger than Groudon, and therefore it breaks the tie. Kyogre has a special place in my heart, because it was one of the restricted Pokemon that I won the World Championships with alongside Rayquaza. Beyond that, it also has a special place in my heart because Generation 3 was my first Pokemon generation. I remember fighting my brother's Kyogre with my Groudon and being like, I chose the wrong game, hello? And I think it is a testament to the Generation 3 legendaries that despite the fact that 6 more generations have come out since then, and I've played them with a much more fully developed brain, Kyogre still stands out in my heart and in my head as the best of them all. And I don't know, maybe this is a personal experience. Maybe, you know, I just have like big fish brain, right? But I suspect that it isn't. I suspect that for anybody who played Generation 3, even if you played it years after it came out, there's just something special about Kyogre and Groudon that stays with you for a long time. And with that, my task is complete. I have now ranked every single Pokemon and then some. I'm never doing this again. Please, I'm never doing it again. I don't care if they add 1,000 more Pokemon, I'm not doing it. I would like to say a huge thank you to Scarlet and ZANE for helping me with this enormous project, and double thank you to ZANE for sitting with me on the call for the entire recording session. It's been probably 10 hours of recording. I'm so sorry. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to Geo for editing this. Geo, I am so sorry. Oh my God, we thought this video was gonna be like an hour and a half. I don't know how long it is right now, and I am scared to find out. Anyway, if you like this video, make sure you subscribe, please. Please, we worked so hard on it. And if you want to see more videos like this one, honestly, just go watch the EUIC video. That's a video that I'm really proud of. If you want more long form content, it doesn't really link to this one, but I think it's a really great video. Go check it out.